Welcome back to another one of my crazy movie ideas. For those of you who have been around for a long time, probably know that I've done this type of thing before. I basically created an entire Nintendo franchise, and Nintendo loved it so much, definitely, that they took a page out of my book and I guess are creating their own saga now. But what we're going to be doing here is a little bit different. For those of you who may not know, I love DC. DC is a franchise that I have adored for a very long time now, and more specifically, my favorite superhero of all time, you guys might also not know this, is The Flash, which is what is kind of warranting this video that you guys are watching now. As you all know by now, back in July, we got the 2025 Superman movie, directed by James Gunn, which is officially part of the new DC universe that he is launching, alongside the 2 seasons of Peacemaker that we have right now, as well as the animated Creature Commandos show, and the upcoming Supergirl movie. So clearly, there are plans for another franchise, which frankly, I am thrilled by. And as much as I loved Zack Snyder's Justice League, there is not a lot else in that universe that I really enjoyed. So James Gunn taking the reins on this new universe made me very happy, because that man knows ball. But watching Superman and knowing now that John Cena's Peacemaker, with all of that leading into a greater universe that we're hopefully gonna be able to see one day, it got my autistic brain thinking, how would other heroes fit into this? Especially my goat, The Flash. What if I came up with my own story that could theoretically, of course, take place in James Gunn's universe while it is still fresh? I mean, come on, the opportunity is now. As far as I know, with The Flash not being mentioned at all, I could be wrong, in this new DC universe, I better get going, because this story that I've written, it's an origin story. So with that out of the way, I give you this story that I have written about The Flash. It is another Barry Allen story. Sorry, Wally West fanboys. I know how much your goat means to you, but Wally is in this story, so don't click off. In the past, I've kind of revealed what characters are going to be in the story and like the setting. I'm talking about the NCU videos that I did, but I'm not going to do that today. You guys aren't going to know exactly what characters in the setting are in this story until I get into it. And before I get started, I should, on a serious note, give you guys a bit of a disclaimer, a bit of a trigger warning. There's going to be some things talked about in this story that could be a bit sensitive and touchy for some people, such as alcoholism, cancer, PTSD, some other things, but those are like the main 3 that I'm going to kind of warn you guys about. And the genre is superhero, action, adventure, science fiction, and comedy. So this is going to be a funny story, and I hope you guys will get some laughs out of it. There's going to be some funny moments. There's going to be tears. It is going to get emotional sometimes. There's going to be moments of, oh my god, I thought this was a PG-13 movie, but I hope you guys will enjoy it nonetheless. And without further ado, let's get started. So our story starts in the streets of Central City on a busy block. A young man hurriedly walks through crowds of people on the sidewalk during mid-morning with his coffee and supplies bag, trying not to bump into people. He eventually breaks through and makes it to where there appears to be a crime scene and several police officers present. The man, out of breath, profusely apologizes to the 2 officers in front of him for being late, and the officers give him a hard time, asking if he is the new forensics guy. The man says yes and starts to introduce himself when he suddenly trips and falls. As he's falling, there is a freeze frame on the man's panicked face where there is a voiceover of the man's voice. My name is Barry Allen, and I am the clumsiest man alive. I am Central City Police Department's newest, eager, and highly capable forensic scientist. And yes, this is my first day. Barry falls on his face in a small puddle and gets up, having spilled his coffee. Cop number 2 says, Jesus, dude, you're a mess. Barry says, sorry guys, I was so excited to start this job, I could hardly sleep last night. It's okay though, I can get started with this. The 2 cops look at each other like Barry's a freak and shrug it off, saying they're gonna go grab a coffee and that the body's on the other side of the crime scene. As they walk away, they whisper to each other. Cop number 1 says, are you shitting me? That's the guy the captain recommended? Cop number 2 says, he's crazy smart I hear, but he can never get his priorities straight. Apparently, he's the captain's foster son. And cop number 1 says, great, that's exactly what the department needed, a freaking Nepo baby. Barry sets his bag down where he gets out sample tools and plastic gloves in order to gather evidence, because that's what forensics guys do. On the ground next to where he's kneeling, he sees several very tiny pieces of glass bunched up in an area. Close up on Barry's eyes, and a wisp of electricity appears in them. Very brief. With the plastic gloves on his hands, he quickly starts bringing the bigger pieces together, and upon a very close look at the pieces of glass, start to create a fingerprint pattern. Barry's voiceover says, "This story isn't about my long, very interesting journey of becoming a member of public service, though." As he's working, the Flash, in his supersuit, steps into the frame next to Barry on the ground. Only the audience sees the Flash, since he's still doing the voiceover, and the Flash says, "Well, except it is, actually." Cuts to a TV screen with the video game Sonic the Hedgehog, where Sonic is moving very fast through a level. This is like retro. It zooms out of the TV and cuts to a young Barry Allen sitting on his bed playing the game, showing the year 2007. His appearance is that of a slightly chubby kid. An adult Barry comes back with a voiceover. He says, "Yeah, that's me, Tubby right there. Despite my good looks, something that I have always obsessed over is moving fast. Real fast." A quick shot of the Sonic game is shown again before Barry's mom calls out to him, telling him to come downstairs for dinner. Barry pauses his game and walks out of the room. While he leaves his room, the voiceover continues. Adult Barry says, "I love my parents to death, but I've always known deep down they could expect more out of me, considering how smart I am apparently compared to the other second graders. They've been telling me lately that I should find ways to get my body caught up to my mind," which basically translates to "lose some weight, fatty," but they're a lot nicer about it than I am. On that topic, now that I think about it, I'm pretty hard on myself in general. And as he says that, it quickly cuts to a shot of young Barry sobbing hysterically over someone on the floor. Then another shot of an older Henry Allen in a prison placing his hand on protective glass, where a visibly upset adult Barry places his hand on the other side of it. And Henry says, "You've got to stop blaming yourself for this, Barry." Young Barry makes it downstairs, and a shot shows his parents, Henry and Nora Allen, who have gotten settled in the kitchen. Henry says, "And the beast emerges from his den." And Nora says, "You've been on that game a lot lately, hun. You liking it?" And young Barry says, "Oh yeah, he goes super fast. I wish I could go as fast as that." The family gathers their plates while they keep talking. Henry jokingly says, "Well, you are a fast kid, Barry, at least mentally." The family laughs at this remark, and young Barry jokingly says, "Hey, I'm working on getting caught up to my mind like you said. I did my laps around the yard today." Family pauses for a moment, then Henry speaks up again. Henry says, "Hey kiddo, after dinner, let's throw the football around for a bit in the backyard before we watch F1 tonight." It then cuts to Barry and Nora after dinner washing dishes together, when Nora notices that Barry's a bit down. Nora says, "What's wrong, honey?" And Barry says, "Oh, nothing, just a bit tired is all." Nora says, "You are many things, sweetie. Tired is not one of them. What happened at school today? Did those kids pick on you again?" Barry pauses before answering, and then he says, "Nah, I just did my own thing today." Nora says, "Yeah? So I'm guessing you bruised your own arm then?" Quick cut to young Barry getting cornered by 5th grade bullies, while one of the bullies dumps Barry's book out of his backpack. Bully 1 says, "Why are you reading this, you little pussy? Physics?" And Bully 2 says, "Why don't you just be another snot-nosed little shit like every other kid and lose some weight, fat ass?" The bully tosses the physics textbook at Barry's face while Barry's on the ground. Barry pauses for a moment before kicking one of the bully's shins and quickly making a run for it. The bullies immediately chase after Barry and easily catch up to him due to them being more athletic. One of the bullies mollywops the back of Barry's head and knocks him down before they start beating him. Cuts back to Barry in the kitchen and Nora hugs him tightly. Young Barry chokes up and says, "I can't outrun them, Mom. They're right though. Why can't I just be normal?" Nora says, "I'll talk to the school on Monday so they won't mess with you anymore, okay? But here's what you need to do." Nora says, "Don't ever think about being anything other than exactly as you are, Barry. I love and adore you for who you are. You are so incredibly special, and you have so many gifts that you can share with the world and help people with those gifts. Plus, being normal is overrated." Cuts to outside in the backyard with Henry and young Barry throwing the ball. Nora looks out the door, admiring both her husband and son. She brings her hand up to put it on the door, but as her hand gets placed on the door, it instantly transitions to adult Barry's hand being on the protective glass in the prison where Henry is, then once again showing adult Barry's distraught face. In the large backyard, Henry tells Barry to go along. Immediately, Barry starts running across the vast yard, having a blast while doing so. Henry throws a long football, but it ends up being just out of reach for Barry to catch. Henry says, "Ooh, so close." Then cuts back to Henry and Barry just casually throwing the ball to each other. Henry says, "Barry, I know I've really been wanting you to get into sports, and you've been very gracious towards me, but man, I've seen what your mind can do, kiddo. And I wonder if there's something you really liked that you might enjoy doing. And young Barry says, I want to be an F1 driver, like on TV. Henry laughs and says, that's perfect for you. You know how fast you go? Like super duper fast. They think about that for a moment, then Henry picks up again. You know what? Most people don't know this, but there's actually a lot of brain power you need to be a F1 driver. And you're probably a lot smarter than at least half those guys already. They pause for a couple seconds while still throwing the ball. Henry says, kiddo, did mom remind you how loved you are? Young Barry says, yeah, I think I hear it from you guys too much. Henry says, as a parent, there's no such thing as saying that too much. We're here for you, Barry, no matter what. Always. Henry throws the ball back to Barry, and Barry looks up, trying to get in position for the ball, not noticing the very sudden, brief, faint red light zooming past below them. A sudden rush of wind swoops in, making the ball fly off well behind him. While Barry's looking up, a faint wisp of electricity shows up in his eye. Barry goes after the ball, as Henry, confused, looks in the direction the light went off to, but looks back, not thinking much of it, since the light is long gone by now. Barry pauses for a moment before throwing the ball back to Henry. Henry says, sorry, bud, the wind really took that one. And all of a sudden, Barry freezes, looking haunted by something. Henry says, what's wrong, Barry? And all of a sudden, a woman's scream comes from inside their house. Henry and Barry briefly look at each other with great concern. Henry says, honey? Henry immediately books it to go inside, but has to cross their big backyard in order to get there. Young Barry sprints as fast as he can too, but struggles to keep up with Henry. Henry briefly looks back to see Barry run behind him. Henry says, no, Barry, stay out here! Brief flashback to young Barry at recess with his grade school class, where a little girl accidentally falls off one of the playground equipment. Barry quickly rushes over and starts to help the girl up. Quickly cuts back to young Barry again running, while he hears Nora's voice in his head, repeating the words, you have so many gifts that you can share with the world and help people with those gifts. Back to the flashback, Barry helps the girl stand up. Young Barry says, are you okay, Iris? And young Iris says, yeah, thanks, Barry. Before heading back to the playground, Iris gives Barry a kiss on the cheek. And then it cuts back to Henry and Barry still crossing their backyard, where young Barry says, not happening. Henry makes it through their back door, back into the house well before Barry, and Henry screams in horror. Young Barry pants, not seeing what happened yet, and he says, what happened? Barry makes it inside, immediately stops in his tracks, frozen and unable to move. He looks down at his dad, who is down on his knees, whose face shows pure agony. And Barry sees that he's kneeling over Nora's dead body, bleeding around the kitchen floor. There's a bloody knife that's on the floor next to Nora. Young Barry says, Mom? Barry collapses and crawls over to his mom, and he and Henry start sobbing uncontrollably as Nora's lifeless body is shown with her eyes wide open. Barry, distraught, looks up to see a broken piece of wall next to their front door. Moves to Iron Heights Prison in Central City, then cuts to an adult Barry and an imprisoned older Henry in the visiting room. Henry says, you've got to stop blaming yourself for this, Barry. And cuts back to young Barry, once again sprinting across the backyard at a relatively slow speed. And Barry says, I wasn't fast enough, Dad. How can I not blame myself? And Henry says, neither was I, kiddo. No one could have possibly been fast enough to stop what happened to your mother. Barry seethes with rage and says, but why did they pin her murder on you? Cuts back to that night, with Henry in handcuffs being escorted out of the house with police officers having to restrain a young Barry. Henry says, please, you have to believe me. I didn't kill my wife. A young Barry pleads, saying, stop, you can't do this. He didn't kill her. The arresting officer puts Henry in the back of the police car, saying, make your case in court, Alan. The reality, though, is that your fingerprints were all over that knife. Cuts back to adult Barry and Henry at Iron Heights, where Henry says, you know why. Barry says, Dad, we both know you didn't even touch a knife that whole evening. Henry says, I know. I don't know why this is happening to us still after being here so long, but you have to understand. Seeing you continue to blame yourself after all these years brings me more pain than anything I could ever experience here. You gotta move on from all this, from me. And Barry just quietly says, I'll never give up on you, Dad. Henry says, please, you have your whole life ahead of you. You have your gifts, and you're smart as hell. You're skinny too, so I know you have discipline. Are you still keeping up with F1? You still want to be a driver? Barry says, I gave up on that a long time ago. I'm actually starting a new job soon. I'm going to be a forensic scientist in Central City. Henry stops and says, you're going to try and find new evidence for my case, aren't you? Barry says, of course I am. They didn't even try to find the actual killer. You were just the most convenient story they had. Somebody needs to serve some actual justice here if no one else will. And Henry says, for the love of God, Barry, your mother wouldn't want this. Both of them pause for a second as they've been getting loud towards each other. Barry says, Mom said I could help people with my gifts, and that's what I'm gonna do, especially for my family. Cuts back to the night Nora was murdered. The cop car takes Henry away, and a young Barry is still crying and trying to get past the cops still restraining him. Someone says, Jesus, man, get your hands off of him. The cops disperse, leaving Barry there, and a middle-aged man wearing a police sergeant's uniform approaches a traumatized young Barry. The man kneels down and gets eye level with Barry and smiles. The man says, Hi, young man. I'm Sergeant Daryl Fry. Can I get you an ice cream? Then cuts to Barry eating ice cream at a local ice cream shop with Fry. I'm just gonna call him Fry, but his name is Daryl. Young Barry with a monotone says, What's gonna happen with my dad? Fry says, We just need to clear up what happened, and he'll have his chance to explain your guys' side of things. I'm sure it'll all work out fine. They pause for a moment, and then Fry says, Listen, Barry, do you have anyone to stay with? Family around here? Barry silently shakes his head, and Fry says, Well, why don't you stay with me for a while, until we get this sorted out? You're far too young to be on your own. What do you say? Barry looks up at Fry, and then it cuts back to an adult Barry moving into an apartment in Central City. He's holding one of the boxes in his hands as he opens the door to his apartment. Standing in the middle of the room is Sisto Ramon, his best friend. Sisto says, Welcome to my humble abode, Mr. Allen. They both start laughing, and Barry sets his box down and daps up Sisto. I can do better than that. Hold on. Okay, let's just move on. Barry says, Thanks for letting us stay with you, Sisto. Hey, Gordon! Barry whistles and a black lab dog trots inside the apartment, and they catch up a bit more. The TV is on, and there is a brief news story that Barry and Sisto watch. The news story says Star Labs in Central City is undergoing a change in ownership after the recent passing of Garrison Slate, who founded Star Labs. The new owner will be Dr. Silas Stone, a well-decorated chief operating scientist and one of the first scientists brought on by Slate himself. Sisto says, Isn't his son like crazy good at football at the high school here? You know, Barry, you could change your mind about this top scientist nonsense and work at Star Labs. Barry laughs and says, Geez, Sisto, how smart do you think I am? Besides, I gotta start somewhere. It's all about first impressions, brother. Cuts to Barry passed out on his bed the next morning, and Sisto says, Wake up, Barry. You're late. Barry wakes up and looks at his clock. 8:13 a.m. He panics and quickly gets up and says, Oh shit! Cuts to Barry dressed up for work, holding his coffee and supplies bag as he speed walks on the sidewalk while he's on the phone with someone. Iris, hey, good news. I'm all moved in now. Iris on the phone says, That's great. Where are you staying again? Barry says, I moved into Sisto's apartment. I got Gordon with me too. Luckily, his apartment allows pets. Iris on the phone says, Oh, I love that. You're starting your new job today, right? Barry says, Yeah, though I am very late. I've always sucked at time management, but it's all good. Hopefully. Hey, can I see you tonight? Iris on the phone says, Yeah, I should be free. I'm hanging out with my dad and Wally tonight. You should drop by and catch up. Be careful though. It's supposed to storm pretty bad tonight. Barry smiles and says, That sounds great. Can't wait. I'll see you tonight. Iris, sweetly on the phone, says bye. They hang up and Barry briefly stops. and looks through a window shop, seeing an assortment of wedding rings. He gazes at them for a moment. A brief flashback shows Joe West opening the door for Barry and they hug. Joe says, Barry, my man. Cuts to Barry and Joe walking in, and Barry sees Wally in the living room, Iris's brother. Wally gets up and the two of them dap each other up. Wally says, Hey, stranger. Barry says, Good to see you, brother. Cuts to Barry and Joe sitting in the living room while Wally's gone someplace else. And this is picking up in the middle of the conversation that they're having. And Barry says, And it felt like the most important piece of my life returned back in place. So we didn't get to hear the first part of the conversation, but we're picking up at this point. I want to protect her, Joe. Cherish her and never let go. With everything I have. If I could get your permission to marry Iris, there would be no greater blessing. Joe laughs and embraces Barry. Joe says, It took y'all long enough. Another flashback shows Barry moving out of Daryl Fry's house with his dog Gordon. And Barry is grinning from ear to ear. Barry says, I found something, Daryl. Daryl's very fascinated and says, You got it? Barry gets out a ring case containing a beautiful ring. Fry is amazed to see this and laughs. Barry says, Once I get Central City, I'm gonna ask Iris to marry me. Cutting back to what Barry's doing in that moment, he snaps out of his trance and continues walking along the sidewalk. As he walks, the scene transitions back to a repeat of the first scene of the movie with Barry hurriedly walking through crowds of people, eventually making it to the crime scene, which is again, first scene in the movie. He gets there, out of breath, and talks to the two police officers in front of him. Barry says, So sorry I'm late. I overslept. Cop one says, Damn, man, you're like an hour and a half late. You're supposed to be our new forensics guy? Barry says, That's me. I'm Barry Allen. It's an honor to work with Central City's finest. And then all of a sudden, just like before, Barry trips on an object, and as he's falling, the same freeze frame of Barry's panicked face is shown. Barry's voiceover comes back and says, See, that wasn't so bad, right? We're already back to where we left off. Now you have some context for where it all started on the timeline. Though when it comes to the timeline in this story, we tend to go a a little out of order. The freeze frame ends and Barry falls on his face in a small puddle. Cuts to Barry returning to the Central City Police Department with his supplies bag. The same 2 cops that were heckling him are out and about in the station. Cop 1 says, well, you sure took your time. You know we already arrested a suspect, right? We got his prints on a Glock 19. The cops in the area and Barry look to see a young man, the suspect, being restrained and pleading. The suspect says, please, I didn't do it. I tried to stop it. The guy wasn't even shot. He was shanked. Barry turns back to the cop, and Barry says, you print him out? The cop 1 says, yeah. The cop gives Barry a printed out sheets of the suspect's fingerprints, and Barry looks closely at the prints. As he looks more intently at the top right section of the prints, similar to how Barry assembled the glass pieces to match the top right prints on the glass, he can see that the prints don't match up. Barry opens his bag containing evidence bags with all the glass pieces that Barry collected. Cuts to another flashback. The night Henry was arrested. And the arresting officer again says, make your case in court, Alan. The reality, though, is that your fingerprints were all over that knife. The flashback moves to Barry and Henry at Iron Heights. Barry saying, Dad, we both know you didn't even touch a knife that whole evening. And then cuts back to the station. The cops chuckle at him for bringing out his evidence bags. Cop 1 says, what do you think that's gonna do for you? Barry says, I'm gonna assemble all these pieces together to make sure you fellas didn't arrest the wrong guy. Cop 1 says, Jesus, Alan, you've done nothing all your first day. Now you're gonna waste even more time bringing together pieces of glass just to confirm what we already know. Barry says, just show me to my lab. I have work to do. Barry sets foot into the CCPD crime lab upstairs. There's a big window that leads outside with a great view of Central City, with racks of various flasks and beakers of chemicals next to the window. Cuts to Barry dumping the shards and pieces of glass from his evidence bags onto a metal table. He starts assembling as a montage begins as a few hours pass. Since several of the glass pieces are so small, Barry has to be very careful bringing them together, mind you, with plastic gloves so he doesn't get his fingerprints on them, and binding the pieces together with one of the chemicals from the racks. The outside weather is showing as storm clouds form and rumble thunder. It transitions to nearly all the pieces together with just one tiny piece of glass remaining. A quick shot outside shows it pouring down rain and thundering. In the city, a strike of lightning is shown. Cuts back to Barry in the lab, which is now dark and he's using the lamp. Barry carefully brings the very last piece of glass to the now assembled shard of glass shaped like a knife containing a full fingerprint. Barry puts down the printed out fingerprint of the arrested suspect and comparing them, like with a blue light and all that, he confirms that the fingerprints are indeed different. Barry softly says, the victim was stabbed, not shot. This isn't just evidence, it's the murder weapon. This is the guy who did it. Barry nods and thinks to himself for a moment. Barry softly says, I'll never give up on you, Dad. Barry looks at the clock in the lab, which shows 9:34 p.m. and cuts back to Barry back on the phone with Iris earlier that day. And Iris on the phone says, yeah, I should be free. I'm hanging out with my dad and Wally tonight. You should drop by and catch up. Be careful though, it's supposed to storm pretty bad tonight. A loud thunderclap from outside interrupts Barry's thoughts. He looks outside and sees the storm raging outside. Barry says, geez, Iris wasn't kidding about this storm. I better get out of here. Barry picks up the beaker he was using, and as he puts it back on the rack he got it from, all of a sudden, a bolt of lightning shows up, shattering the window to the crime lab, as well as the beakers and flasks, heading directly to Barry. Time greatly slows down to near impossibly slow speeds. Barry's frozen, startled face is shown in slow motion, with the electric wisp in his eyes, with a brief flashback is shown to him as a kid with the same electric wisp in his eyes as the flashes of light pass by in front of him. In slow motion, the chemicals from the shattered beakers and flasks pour out and splash all over Barry's skin. The lightning pierces Barry's chest, and then the lightning is shown traveling through the chemicals splashed on Barry's body as a conduit to travel directly through Barry's body. Barry's face is shown again in slow motion, crying out in pain, with his eyes squeezed shut, with various spots of his skin being burned from the chemicals and lightning. Speed finally returns to normal, and Barry, in the blink of an eye, is launched into the wall next to the door to the crime lab. Barry's unconscious body plops down on the ground. The janitor, an older man, hears the loud noise that just happened. The janitor says, what in the Sam hell? The janitor goes up the stairs to the crime lab, opens the door, and sees Barry's body. His body is shown again. Keep in mind, it's burnt from the lightning and the chemicals, so he is not looking too good right now. The janitor says, oh Lord. The janitor begins dialing 911 on his phone, but before he begins calling them, he looks back at him. Barry's unconscious body is shown again with his skin heavily burnt and still wet with chemicals, and sporadic streaks of light traveling through his veins and nervous system from outside his body. The janitor says, hey! Are you okay? Cuts to Barry's unconscious face, being shown as he's being wheeled away by paramedics on a stretcher. The audio is muffled, but Barry's breathing can clearly be heard. A shot of Barry's hand is shown very briefly vibrating and phasing in a sort of super speed motion. Paramedic says, "My God, what happened to this guy?" And an unseen character, this is very important, says, "Give him to us. He needs to be brought somewhere that the emissions of the chemicals on him won't be a hazard." The second paramedic, while their voice is fading, says, "You're with Star Labs." Barry's face is shown again, and as the screen fades to black, a voiceover from Henry plays, repeating what he said earlier. "We're here for you, Barry, no matter what, always." Cuts to young Barry wearing a suit and tie, standing next to Sergeant Fry, who has now fostered him. They're at a funeral, and Nora's casket in the picture frame is shown, with her smiling on it. A man approaches Barry and hugs him. His name tag is briefly shown, revealing his name as Detective Joe West. Joe says, "I'm so sorry, Barry. You know you can come see us whenever you like." Joe walks away, and a young Iris is right behind him, holding flowers. Young Iris says, "Hey, Barry." Hey, Barry." Barry smiles sadly at her, and Iris gives Barry the flowers. Iris gives Barry a kiss on the cheek before following her father. Barry looks back at her and she waves at him as she holds her father's hand. Barry looks down at the flowers, then looks back up at his mom's picture next to her casket. And then it cuts to young Barry once again being picked on by the bullies a week later, since, Nora never got the chance to talk to the school. Bully number 1 says, "Why don't you just stand up for yourself and fight back, you little bitch?" One of the bullies throws a punch at Barry's stomach, then lands another punch at Barry's face. That sends him straight to the ground. Bully number 2 says, "You gonna get your mom to snitch on us to the principal?" And then bully number 3 says, "Oh wait, she can't. Can she?" The bullies jeer at their statements as Barry lies on the ground with his book bag, out of breath. Barry struggles to get up, though his face full of determination says, "Screw you." Barry immediately turns around and books it away from the bullies. Bully number 1 says, "You should know by now, you little shit. You can't get away from us." The bullies chase after Barry, but it shows Barry sprinting at full speed and that Barry is actually staying ahead of the bullies. Bully number 2, out of breath, says, "What the hell?" Barry continues sprinting, his face full of rage and determination. It then transitions to young Barry running laps around someone's backyard. In the house, Daryl Fry's wife sees Barry running outside, looking concerned. Daryl walks up next to her, and he says, "How long's he been out there?" And Fry's wife says, "All day. Literally all day. He hasn't stopped running at all since this morning." Shows Barry again running outside, out of breath but still pushing himself to keep running. A side view shot of Barry sprinting around the yard. There's a side view shot of Barry sprinting around the yard. Then once he passes a tree, it transitions to Barry as a freshman in high school, sprinting towards the finish in a cross-country meet with Fry and his wife in attendance. Barry finishes first in the meet by several seconds, and he celebrates with them, hugging Fry and his wife. Then transitions to Fry sitting at the dinner table alone in the evening in his house with an eaten plate of dinner in front of him, as well as 2 empty beer bottles. The shots pan to the other side of the table, where there's another plate of completely untouched food still on it. Cuts to Barry at his gym locker in high school, getting his cross-country bag out, when he promptly gets slammed into his locker by sophomore year bullies. Bully number 1 says, "What you got in the bag, champ?" One of the bullies nabs Barry's bag from him and sees their high school name with the words cross-country on it. Bully number 2 chuckles and says, "Cross-country? God, you really are a bitch." Bully number 1 says, "Take this goofy's shirt off. I gotta see if you're as skinny as the stereotype is." The other 3 bullies restrain Barry as he tries to fight back, and they eventually force Barry's shirt off, revealing that he is now incredibly skinny and borderline anorexic. The boys jeer at him, and bully number 3 says, "Damn, boy, when's the last time you ate a sandwich?" So now, the awful thing is he's gone from one eating disorder to now another because of, his PTSD. And bully number 1 says, "Here's a knuckle one." The bully punches Barry to the ground, and 2 of the bullies start beating on him. One of the bullies dumps out Barry's cross-country bag, revealing his uniform and his spiked shoes that he wears for meets. He takes one of the spiked shoes and looks down at Barry. Barry's pinned down by 2 of the bullies on his stomach, and he looks up in fear. Barry says, "No. Please." The bully slams one of the spiked shoes into the back of Barry's leg, making him scream out in pain. As he whimpers, bully number 3 gets close to his ear and whispers to him. And bully number 3 says, "Damn, you're really 0 for 2 on moms now. That's crazy." Cuts to that night with Barry limping, because, his leg got impaled by a cross-country cleat, and he is limping and walking on the street back home. Then it cuts to his house after having just gotten home. Barry sees Fry passed out on the recliner chair in the living room with an empty beer bottle in his hand. Barry rolls his eyes and shakes Fry awake. Fry is startled and drunk, Barry, you're here. Barry says, yeah, I live here. You're not supposed to drink anymore, Daryl. Daryl shakes Barry off. Fry, with slurred speech, says, I know that. This is my last one. I'm going to bed now. Fry struggles to get out of his chair, and when he does, he immediately collapses back onto the floor. Barry rolls his eyes and says to himself, Jesus Christ. Fry says, Barry, where's your mom at? Can you get her for me? Barry says, oh. That's hilarious. Barry is now yelling. He says, hey, Daryl! Which mom are you referring to? My biological dead mom or my foster dead mom? Wake up, Daryl! You're drunk. Your wife died in a car crash a month ago, and you've been drinking every day since. They both pause for a moment. And Barry says, I'm sorry, Daryl. I shouldn't have said that. Barry limps over to help Daryl up. Fry says, no, you're right, Barry. If I've gotten to the point where I can't even remember my wife died, then I have no right to raise you. I promise I'll do better. Barry helps Daryl back into his recliner chair and sits on the coffee table across from him. Fry says, I saw you limping just now. What's up with that? Barry says, it's nothing. Fry says, are those punks picking on you again? Barry says, different punks. Though everybody somehow knows I have yet to have a mother that manages to stay alive. Fry says, why do you take all that abuse, Barry? Why can't you just talk to someone? Let someone in. Then Barry says, because I know how to get up just fine, Daryl. Despite all the shit life's thrown at me, somehow I can just keep going. Barry gets up and pats Fry on the shoulder before leaving the room. And Fry says, how do you get up, Barry? How do you deal with that loss, that grief of losing someone you love? Barry stops in his tracks and coldly says, I don't. Like saying, basically, I don't deal with it. Hence his unresolved PTSD. Cuts to Barry now in his senior year of high school, stumbling back into his house after a night out, clearly drunk himself. Fry turns on a lamp. Fry says, Barry, where'd you sneak off to? Barry, with his speech slurred, says, what I do every night, Daryl. I just go night jogging sometimes. Fry says, well, it smells like you've been out partying. The booze on you reeks from here. Barry collapses on one of the couches. And he says, oh, get off my ass, Daryl. It's not like you haven't done this before. And Fry says, yeah, I did, and I did not kick the habit just so you could start it. Barry stops and gets up, starting to leave the room. And Fry says, you can't keep running from your problems, Barry. When shit happens, you just have to deal with it. Or talk to somebody. Come on, man, you're too smart to be acting like this. Barry says, I did the math. I got below 0.08% before driving home, so it was legal. And Fry says, it doesn't matter. You know how many laws you've broken tonight? You're a minor who drove under the influence tonight. You know this isn't what your parents wanted for you. And Barry says, don't you dare tell me what my dead mom and imprisoned dad would have wanted for me, you filthy cop. Fry says, so that's what this is about? You still can't move on after all these years? At some point, you're gonna have to take responsibility and at least try to become half the man your parents knew you could be. Barry goes into a blind rage, trying to tackle Fry. Fry quickly subdues him due to Barry's drunkenness and gets him on the floor with positioning to be ready to break one of his fingers. Barry is pained and crying, saying, oh, now you care about actual justice? And Fry says, don't make me do this, Barry. And Barry hysterically says, just do it, you pig. Fry has no choice but to break one of Barry's fingers, making Barry cry out in pain. It then cuts to Fry and Barry, sometime later in his senior year, sitting in chairs opposite each other in a therapist's office. Fry says, Barry, you're such a gifted young man. I have no regrets at all taking you in under my wing, and you've brought new meaning to my life. And I owe you everything for helping me quit drinking after Sharon. Anyways, now I want to help you. They pause for a moment as Barry looks depressed, looking into Fry's eyes. Fry says, you have such a bright future ahead of you, man, but you just can't seem to cope with what happened to you. I love that running's been a healthy and fulfilling output for you, but no matter how much you run, it won't ever make you fast enough to change the past. At some point, you have to try to move forward, to forgive yourself. Barry softly says, I can't. The therapist says, Barry, no one blames you for what happened to your mother. And Barry says, then why can't I shake this feeling that every bad thing that's happened to me is my fault? Fry takes a hold of Barry's hand and says, we can figure that out together. I never asked you to do this alone. I will always be here for you. It then transitions to a montage of Barry graduating high school and Fry being there to support him, going to a college at a university in Central City, meeting Cisco in college, then eventually ending the montage as Barry graduates college with his degree in chemistry and criminal justice, and he starts moving into Cisco's apartment after Barry first reunited with Cisco, which was the scene shown earlier. Fry comes up the stairs before Cisco's apartment with another box. Fry says, think this is the last of it. Barry says, thanks so much for helping helping me move all this, Daryl. Fry says, it's nothing. This is great. How do you know this guy again, Barry? And Barry says, we met in college. He's my best friend. Fry says, that's amazing, Barry. I'm glad the big city has been so good to you. You deserve it. And Barry and Fry hug. And Barry says, thanks for everything, Daryl. I love you. Fry says, I'd do it all over again. And Barry says, hey, I'll see you tomorrow at the station, right? Forensics Day 1 is tomorrow. And Fry says, yeah, it'll be good to see a familiar face around there. Barry starts to go back into the apartment, then turns back to Fry. Barry says, sorry, we took longer than expected. Are you gonna make it to your doctor's appointment on time? Fry shrugs him off, says, yeah, no worries. It's just a checkup on my liver. I'll let you know how it goes tomorrow. It then cuts back to Barry's unconscious face, still burnt and bruised after getting struck by the lightning bolt and chemicals. He's still asleep and laying in a hospital bed in Star Labs, where scientists are working outside of his room. It's revealed to be 1 day after the incident. Silas Stone is shown letting Fry visit Barry. Fry goes to Barry's bedside, agonizing over him. Fry says, they say you're in a coma, Barry. How could this happen to you? There's a quick flashback to the station where Fry, at his desk in the captain's office, sees Barry stumble into the police station after showing up late. Fry stops quietly and smiles. The officers quickly shoo Barry away to the crime scene he needs to go to before Barry has the chance to catch up with Fry. Barry, however, does briefly see Fry in his office, and he waves to him before he goes. Fry's smile fades as he gets out a sheet of paper he received from his doctor yesterday, diagnosing him with stage 4 liver cancer. It then cuts back to Fry holding the paper at Barry's bedside. Fry says, I'm so sorry I didn't get the chance to tell you yesterday at the station. The no biggie ended up turning into some pretty terminal cancer. Turns out I couldn't completely shake the drinking problem. I could really use your help, man. It then transitions to 3 weeks after the incident. Fry's back at Barry's bedside, still in his coma. Fry says, Barry, look at you. You're looking great. I don't know what these doctors and scientists put in your system, but I don't even notice a difference in you anymore. They said you had 3rd-degree burns all over your body from the lightning and chemicals, but your body somehow found a way to heal itself completely. Some kind of enhanced or regenerative super healing or whatever that scientific mumbo-jumbo term is. I call it nothing short of a miracle. I could sure use something like that. It then transitions to 4 months after the incident. Fry's back once again at Barry's bedside, who is still in his coma. And then Fry looks notably thinner from his chemo treatment. And Fry says, don't worry about it. I know this chemo nonsense isn't gonna save me. All it does for liver cancer is let me just have a little longer. But for you, it's worth it. I know you're gonna wake up soon. I'm here for you, Barry. Always. It then transitions to 7 months after the incident. Fry looks admirably at Barry, who is still in his coma. Fry says, they say you're still alive, Barry, but sometimes I have my doubts, and it hurts more than anything I've been experiencing so far with this treatment. And I just wanted you to know something, Barry. And in case I'm not around anymore, by the time you do wake up, I asked Dr. Stone to give you a message from me. When we were at your mother's funeral all those years ago, something really stuck out to me that day. She emphasized so much about the natural beauty in all of us. I also wanted to remind you what she believed in more than anything is you. There's now a panning shot of Barry's unconscious face as Fry continues speaking. A single tear falls down Barry's unconscious face as Fry continues talking. Fry says, no matter what happens to you, all the troubles you go through, she wants you to experience the freedom of life in your own way and be free to be yourself. And you know exactly what that freedom is to you. It then cuts to Barry gasping and waking up in the hospital bed in Star Labs. Barry startled as he wakes up and says, do I look okay to you? Which was basically finally answering the janitor's question. Barry continues gasping as he sees several scientists stare at him in awe. Barry is now sitting completely upright and is shirtless, looking equally as shocked as the scientists staring at him. Barry says, what's going on? Barry looks at his left hand, which is vibrating and phasing at super speed, and is dumbfounded by that. Barry's panicking and saying, what's happening to me? The lead scientist, an attractive-looking woman, starts explaining the situation. The lead scientist, Barry, calm down, we can explain everything. All of a sudden, Barry's right hand starts vibrating the same way. Then Barry's entire body spontaneously vibrates at super speed and phases through the bed he's been in. His body thuds onto the floor underneath the bed. Barry groans and says, oh, ow. The supporting scientist says, Barry, we need to get you back in bed Let me get you out of there. Two scientists approach Barry's feet under the bed and start to pull him out. And the lead scientist says, wait, not yet. He doesn't have any clothes on. Too late. The scientists pull up Barry's feet and a nude, traumatized Barry freaks out even more. Don't worry, it is not graphically shown. This is a PG-13 movie. The scientists who pulled him out freak out as well. And a shot of Barry's streaming face is briefly shown before it cuts to Barry being passed out once again. Now back in his bed. Now in the room is only the lead scientist and one of the supporting scientists. Another supporting scientist walks in the room dumbfounded that Barry was able to go back to sleep. The supporting scientist says, how in the world did you manage to subdue him? The lead scientist says, we injected Everclear into his veins. The supporting scientist says, are you serious? The lead scientist says his enhanced metabolism instantly burned through everything else we tried. Even then, we're estimating he'll wake back up any moment now. The supporting scientist says, well, I'm sure glad Dr. Stone hasn't come back yet. Barry is incredibly drunk and says, hey! Barry, who has now woken up again, sits up in his bed. The leading scientist says, Barry, please lay back down. Barry says, hold up, let me just make sure I'm wearing pants this time. Alright, we're good now. Barry gets out of bed, only wearing boxer shorts. He walks around giggling, and when he stumbles, he gets caught by the lead scientist and supporting scientist. Barry laughs even more. The leading scientist says, Barry, we have to get you back to bed. You should not be moving right now. And Barry says, what do you mean? I feel great. No, seriously, I've never felt better. They stop in front of the mirror where Barry finally gets to look at his new physique. He says, wait, is that me? Barry waves off the scientist and slowly walks towards the mirror, seeing that he is now shredded and has solid toned muscle all around. Barry says, hello, Daddy. What workout plan did you all set up for me? He's still drunk during this, by the way. The leading scientist says, please, Barry, you have to let us explain everything. That starts with getting you back to bed. Barry turns around, pointing out the new entity who just joined the room. Hey, look, it's Bill Cosby. The entity is revealed, showing an unamused Silas Stone crossing his arms.
What did you put in my drink?
And Silas says, what happened in the last hour? I was gone. The leading scientist says, Dr. Stone, we had to subdue him after he finally woke up. With his increased metabolism, there was almost nothing that was strong enough to get him back to sleep. And Silas says, what did you do? The leading scientist pauses and sighs, and she says, we injected 70 ounces of Everclear directly into his veins. Silas puts his hand on his face and seems incredibly stressed. Oh my God. How is he still alive? There's a quick shot of Barry spinning around slowly in his boxers in absolute bliss. And Barry says, it's okay. They let me wear pants this time. The leading scientist says, it's like I said, his metabolism operates several times that of the average person's, which includes alcohol tolerance. Silas steps towards Barry, who's still spinning around in circles. He says, that's incredible. If that's the case, it matches up with the other tests we've been running on him. Barry stops spinning and looks at Silas. And Silas says, can you please do as my deputy scientist asked you and return to your bed? And Barry slowly nods. He takes a step towards his bed and falls on his face on the floor. And Barry's voice is muffled. And he says, just tell me while I'm here what happened. Silas pauses as he and the leading scientist look at each other. And Silas says, you got struck by lightning, Barry. And the energy of the lightning combined with the vast amount of chemicals bonded to your body put you into a coma. You've been here, asleep, for the past 9 months. Barry instantly looks up, though still looking intoxicated. 9 months? Did I get anyone pregnant? And Silas says, no, Barry. Or I don't think so. Barry pauses for a moment, his face gradually becoming more aware and serious, rather quickly. He rubs his forehead and sits up quietly. I just sobered up. How? Silas says, I gotta say. That answers another theory we've been curious about while you were asleep. It seems not only the physical parts of your body have been vastly altered to perform several times faster than that of the average person's, but your thoughts seem to move just as fast, giving us no time to keep up with you. Barry relaxes for a moment, and his vibrating hand slows down, taking deep breaths. Silas says, thank you. Why don't you take a walk with us? We'll explain what happened to you while we show you around. It cuts to Barry walking with Silas and the leading scientist throughout the facility. Barry is now wearing shorts and a Star Labs shirt. Silas says this is Star Labs. We're in essence a medical facility for patients who have suffered supernatural injuries and or anomalies, much like what happened with you. Our other objective, though, is to research unknown substances and technologies and find ways for humanity to coexist with the rising number of superpowered beings, like Superman, and maybe even level the playing field with them if possible, in order to defend ourselves with potential supernatural threats, with our own technological developments. Barry says, so why am I here? And Silas says, while you were asleep these past 9 months, we've been running tests on you and have come to the conclusion that the lightning and chemicals that sent you into your coma have altered your bodily functions in such a way that, Barry says, operates several times that of the average person, right? Silas says, yes. The functionality of all your organs we have found to be vastly accelerated. Your stomach and intestines digest food hundreds, if not thousands of times faster than the average human, even meta-human, which means your metabolism is nearly limitless. And Barry says, is that why I'm so hungry? And Silas says, Leslie, can you get Barry something to eat? And Leslie, who is the leading scientist, says right away. Leslie departs, leaving Barry and Silas to continue talking while walking around Star Labs. And Silas says, you've also developed a regenerative healing factor, which additionally heals certain injuries which would not be possible for an ordinary person. Barry, when we first found you, your body was nearly completely covered in third-degree burns. But looking at you now, there is not even the slightest trace of evidence that would suggest you even experienced those injuries at all. Barry is dumbfounded to hear this. And Silas continues, and as you've seen already, your muscles, as a result of these rapid changes that occurred with your body, stimulated instantly in order to keep up with these changes, making you stronger. So yes, you are shredded now. Barry stops in amazement. He looks around the lab more. Barry says, I don't know what to say. It's so much. And Silas says, looks like you're the one who's trying to keep up with us now. It seems it's still possible for you to compute and process information at normal speeds despite your enhanced anatomy. It's like your mind sometimes can't quite keep up with your body. Barry laughs quietly. And Silas says, what's up? Barry says, from what I've heard most of my life until now, it's been the other way around. And Barry says, can I see my friends and family, or at least let them know I've woken up? And Silas says, of course. Our staff is already letting them know of your current condition. But before you go, we'd like to run one more test on you. Something we've needed to wait for you to wake up to test. See, we've figured out the vast majority of the changes you've experienced and have hypothesized that above anything else, your greatest change is you yourself. Your accelerated body functions would suggest that the speeds you could travel at could be unparalleled by any other. What we don't know is how fast that actually is. Until we get that tested and you have a better understanding and control over that, I wouldn't want to put you in an environment where your changes could cause you to unintentionally hurt yourself or others. I hope you can understand. Barry nods in understanding and says, yeah, I can do that. It then cuts to Barry in a red skin-tight jumpsuit in a room within Star Labs, looking at an unusually big and highly advanced treadmill. Silas and a team of scientists observe from outside the room, looking in through the glass. Barry says, so you're telling me I have super speed? And Silas says, that's our theory. What you're going to do is run on that treadmill as fast as you can, like you're in the final stretch of one of your cross-country races. Barry looks back to the treadmill and has a voiceover flashback as he walks towards it. And Henry does his joking voiceover saying, well, you're a fast kid, Barry, at least mentally. And young Barry does his joking voiceover saying, hey, I'm working on getting caught up to my mind like you said. Barry steps foot onto the treadmill and gets in a starting position. Silas says, you ready? Barry has a determined look on his face and he says, hell yeah. Silas does a 3, 2, 1 countdown, and after saying 1, one of the scientists activates the treadmill and instantly throws Barry offline into the wall behind him, slamming into it. Barry, on the ground, groans in pain, and Silas looks at the scientist and he says, let's maybe start a little slower, alright? The scientist says, what? He said he was ready. And Silas says, you good, Barry? Yep. I'm good. Barry makes it back to the treadmill, getting back in starting position. This time positioning himself in the center of the treadmill rather than the back. Silas says, remember, start slower. Barry says, no. The scientists look at Barry, and Barry says, give me everything you've got. They shrug, and Silas gives the okay, once again doing the 3, 2, 1 countdown. After 1, this time Barry reacts to the sudden movement of the treadmill at super speed. In near time stop, Barry turns to see the scientist's frozen faces. Electricity immediately flashes out of him, and as he starts running, it cuts to a young Barry starting laps around his backyard, full of joy. Nora looks outside from the living room to see Barry running his laps, looking proud of him. Barry continues to run, then passes one of the trees, transitioning to Barry running much faster in Fry's backyard as a time step. This time he is running in anguish because of the change in his life and death of his mother. One of his feet hits the ground, quickly doing a cut transition to Barry in high school, closing out one of the cross-country meets, running as fast as he can with Fry and his wife cheering him on. It then cuts back to second grade Barry playing his Sonic the Hedgehog game. It pans to the screen eventually only showing the video game screen of the original Sonic the Hedgehog, who's running in Green Hill Zone, only to get passed instantly by a pixelated yellow flash of light. Sonic looks surprised, saying, "What the?" I figured with Sonic reading the Flash comic in his movie, I figured this movie could return the love. Within the game, the camera pans to a pixelated version in the original Sonic art style of the Flash in his super suit running at great speeds, doing a salute in the game while running, eventually transitioning back to the room in Star Labs, finally showing Barry Allen running at incredible super speed on the treadmill. It shows Barry himself, who is amazed at how fast he is running as his body is running and moving in order to react to the super speed, of the treadmill. He laughs in pure joy as he continues running. In the outside room, the scientists all see the speed Barry is running at, and they are left speechless and stunned at this phenomenon. Silas himself slowly takes off his glasses. Cuts back to Nora opening the glass door to the backyard to see young Barry also running at super speed, as sort of a visual symbolism, running to see each of the four corners of the backyard instantly leaving trails of yellow light and lightning behind him. Nora briefly uses her arm to cover her face from the wind pressure of this speed, but she looks amazed at him. Young Barry is shown running at super speed, looking joyful, having seen Nora watch him run, and Nora says, "Run, Barry!" Returns to adult Barry running at super speed on the treadmill, generating even more yellow electricity, eventually taking out one of the overhead lights in the scientist room from the electricity. And Nora's voiceover continues, saying, once again, "Run." Barry laughs hysterically, now running faster than the max speed of the treadmill. Silas says, "How is this possible?" Barry, not paying attention, gets to the front edge of the treadmill. The scientists realize what's about to happen and try to stop the simulation. Barry, again, not having paid attention to where he is on the treadmill, flies off now on the front edge of the treadmill, and his body slams into the wall in front of him. The scientists all watching wince in pain, like, "Oh!" Silas runs into the room and helps Barry up. Barry gets up, having fully recovered and his adrenaline flowing like crazy. He laughs as Silas helps him up. And Silas says, "You're not even out of breath." Barry puts his hands on the sides of Silas's face and stares at him in excitement. "Doc, you have no idea how much fun that was. How fast was that?" Silas says, "We couldn't even register your top speed, but I'll tell you what you were faster than. You went faster than our state-of-the-art super treadmill, almost instantly, which was at its top speed of Mach 50. Barry and Silas stare at each other with bugged out eyes and they start laughing. Barry says, "You're telling me that I just ran faster than 38,363.4574 miles per hour?" And Silas says, "You know the exact number?" And Barry says, "I just did the math in my head." And they continue laughing. Cuts back to Barry and Silas with Barry back in normal clothes in the front lobby at Star Labs. They shake hands and Silas says, "Thanks for doing that test for us, Barry. We now have a much better understanding of your physical capabilities." Barry says, "Anytime." And Silas says, "Someone's here to pick you up, but please don't be a stranger. Once you master your abilities, you could do some really special things around here." Barry says, "That sounds great to me." Silas says, "And of course, you might want to keep all this secret, your powers and everything. We gave your friends and colleagues an alibi for you, that you left Central City on a hiatus to see the world or something of that nature." And Barry says, "Thank you, I really appreciate that. I'll see you around, Doc." Barry starts to leave, but Silas remembers something. Silas says, "Hold on, Barry." Barry turns around and Silas hands Barry an envelope. And he says, "I was asked to give you this. Slow down and take your time with it." Barry nods in understanding and smiles at him. He walks outside Star Labs and sees a car pull up and stop, with Sisto coming out of the driver's seat. They reunite, dapping each other up and hugging while laughing. Barry tells Sisto, "How much rent do I owe you?" They return to Sisto's apartment, and Barry gets out the envelope, slightly concerned due to how serious Silas looked when giving him the envelope. Sisto says, "I'm gonna order us some grub. You're probably starving." Barry says, "Thanks, man. I'm gonna check out this thing I got from the doc." Barry heads to his room, seeing Gordon in the hallway, who is ecstatic to see him. Barry hugs and pets him as Gordon licks him like crazy. Barry says, "Oh, have you been a good boy, Gordon? Oh, I've missed you." Sisto looks away from Barry, now himself looking concerned. Barry makes it to his room, sitting on his bed with Gordon jumping onto the bed with him. He opens the envelope, getting out the same document Fry had, confirming his positive diagnosis for liver cancer. Barry's eyes open wide, looking up briefly with great concern. He gets his phone out, calling Fry on speaker as he goes through the envelope some more as there's other documents in there. The call fails as Barry gets out the second document and Gordon whines. This document is a will, in which Barry starts to realize the situation. He grips the document and his hands start to shake and once again vibrate at super speed. He gets choked up as he reads it, and at the bottom he sees his name Barry Allen as the sole beneficiary of Daryl Fry's assets. Barry gets choked up and tears form in his eyes. His breath shakes as he gets out the final document, which is the message Fry asked Silas to give him. He reads it and Fry's voiceover begins, which is the same voiceover that Fry told Barry while Barry had his coma. They say you're still alive, Barry, but sometimes I have my doubts, and it hurts more than anything I've been experiencing so far with this treatment. And I just wanted you to know something, Barry. And in case I'm not around anymore, by the time you do wake up, I asked Dr. Stone to give you a message from me. When we were at your mother's funeral all those years ago, something really stuck out to me that day. She emphasized so much about the natural beauty in all of us. I also wanted to remind you what she believed in more than anything is you. No matter what happens to you, all the troubles you go through, she wants you to experience the freedom of life in your own way and be free to be yourself. And you know exactly what that freedom is to you. Brief cut back to Sisto sitting in silence, watching a college football game on mute on their TV, and Barry's cries can be heard from where he is. At the bottom of the screen of the sports channel, there's an Easter egg. Not an actual Easter egg, but just like an Easter egg that movies have. And it's a side-scrolling text that says, Metropolis University is scouting rising Central City High School football star wide receiver Victor Stone in their next game against Metropolis High School, and it's heavily anticipated they will want to recruit him. Cuts back to Barry sobbing softly as he hears a knock on his door. Sisto walks in and Barry wipes his eyes. Sisto says, "You gonna be okay, man?" Barry thinks for a second and nods as he sniffles. Barry asks, "Where is he?" And it then cuts to Daryl Fry's grave in a Central City cemetery. Barry is shown wearing a suit and tie, looking down at Daryl's grave. The thud of a car door is heard and a woman's voice calls out to him. And the unknown voice says, "Barry?" Barry immediately recognizes the voice and turns toward the voice instantly. Iris West is finally revealed, and the two lock eyes from a distance. Barry is amazed and says, "Iris." Iris starts running towards Barry, and Barry does the same, though he doesn't account for his super speed. He uses super speed to get to Iris, and instantly stops a few feet in front of her. They both stop instantly, and Iris looks at Barry in bewilderment, and Barry says, I'm not sure if I was supposed to show you that. And Iris laughs and says, "I don't give a shit." Iris and Barry throw their arms around each other and share a passionate kiss. They let go and begin laughing while still embracing each other. Iris says, "I missed you." And Barry says, "Same here. You are a sight for very sore, long unconscious eyes." And Iris says, "Your skin healed too." And Barry says, "Yeah, that's kind of related to me running really fast to you just now. Something tells me you would have figured this part of me out sooner than later anyway." Iris continues laughing before giving Barry a kiss on his right cheek. It then transitions to a young Iris pulling away after kissing young Barry, who looks incredibly sad. And young Barry says, "Do you have to go?" And young Iris says, "I'm so sorry, Barry. Daddy got moved to Star City. It wasn't his choice." Barry tries to remain tough looking, but struggles to contain his sadness, and Iris hugs Barry again. Young Iris says, "It's okay, Barry. You don't have to act tough around me. I love you for who you are." Barry finally lets it out and cries on Iris's shoulder. Joe West and Daryl Fry are shown watching them. Joe's standing by his cop car, and Daryl's shown in front of his house, with Barry and Iris standing on his driveway. Iris pulls away from the hug and looks at Barry. Young Iris says, "I know we'll see each other again soon, Barry. I'll wait for you." Cuts to Joe leaving in the cop car with Iris, and Barry sheepishly walks back inside Fry's house, with Fry helping Barry inside. It now cuts to Barry starting college, setting foot in Central City College, or whatever we want to call it. It's a huge campus, and Barry looks around amazed. He can hear Iris's voice. "Barry?" Barry turns around instantly to the voice, never forgetting whose voice that could be. Iris walks behind him and they hug, reuniting for the first time since childhood. It cuts to Barry entering his dorm where he sees Sisto, his new roommate. And Sisto says, "What's up, my brother?" Barry laughs and says, "How you doing, man? I'm Barry." And Sisto says, "A pleasure, my man Barry. I'm Francisco, but please, call me Sisto. Or Vibe. 'Cause I bring the vibes everywhere I go, brother." Barry laughs and says, You got it, brother." It then cuts to Barry and Iris sitting in a coffee shop on a date, enjoying themselves. And Barry says, "So you're really back now?" And Iris says, "Yep, Dad got stationed back in Central City, and he's a sergeant now." It then cuts to Barry and Iris cuddling outside at night, looking at the stars. And Iris says, I told you we'd see each other again soon, Barry. There's a quick, silent, panting shot of Barry, Iris, and Sisto laughing in Barry and Sisto's dorm room while sitting on the floor playing cards, showing basically how good of friends all three of them are. It then cuts to Barry watching Sisto in a club jamming out to a song playing. Sisto is going crazy in the dance circle, singing out the lyrics, and then he points at Barry while singing. Barry's having fun too, laughing at how crazy Sisto is doing, and he's also singing the lyrics. Iris comes back to Barry, bringing a couple shots with her. She places them down on the table next to them. And then Iris, immediately, I might say, starts making out with Barry. It's a little spicy at the moment. They break from the kiss and Barry is flustered but amazed. What was that for, lover girl? I missed you, Barry Allen. Barry returns the energy saying, well, I missed you more, beautiful. They're flirting with each other. They're a couple madly in love. They're gonna have moments like these. They picked up the shot glasses and they take the shots. I don't think I can. It's Bruderschaft Trinken style. Sisto comes back to them and reunites with both of them as another song starts playing. Sisto says, oh, it's too good out there. And Iris jokingly says, and you're too sweaty. Sisto. Barry says, I think you need another drink, vibe. And Sisto says, that was the last one of the night, unfortunately. Barry says, grab $10 out of my wallet, man. Sisto says, no. I can't do that. Barry laughs and says, yes, you can. Go have fun, vibe. It's on me. Sisto says, you're the man, Barry. Before he leaves, Sisto looks back at Iris briefly and he yells, and thanks for letting me use your Lamborghini as well. I know you have like 5 more, but it still means a lot. Sisto heads back to the bar and Barry and Iris both laugh at him. They realize what song is on. It's not specified for this specific video because if this ever gets adapted, there could be a different song. But right now I have listed It's Dumbo by Travis Scott. Great song. They realize what song is on. Barry turns back to Iris as they begin dancing to the music, and they lock eyes as the chorus plays. And while they're dancing, they have another intimate moment that we don't really have to get into. While they're having their moment, one last shot pans away from them as the song transitions into like a more sad version of it once the outro plays, as it transitions to one day after the lightning strike incident in Star Labs with Barry in his coma. Iris enters Barry's medical room and runs over to him, bringing a chair with her. She holds his hand, which is still singed from the 3rd-degree burns he received from the incident. Iris looks to the side of Barry on a nightstand next to his bed, where she sees the ring case Barry showed Fry. Iris immediately tears up, her body shaking as she reaches for the ring case. She slowly opens it up, seeing the beautiful ring Barry picked out. She smiles sadly as the song ends, saying yes. Iris turns back to Barry, gives him one last kiss on his right cheek, and then it transitions the scene back to Barry and Iris at the cemetery, showing Barry's dried tears on his face. And Iris says, I also told you, Barry, I'd wait for you. It cuts to Barry and Iris standing over Fry's grave together, holding hands and Iris resting on Barry's shoulder while holding flowers in her other hand. Barry asks Iris, when was the funeral? And Iris says, 2 months ago. Barry says, last I talked with him, it was only a simple liver checkup. I wasn't ready for this. Iris turns towards Barry, and Barry says, Daryl and I, it took a long time for us to reconcile our differences. After what happened with my mom and my dad getting wrongfully convicted, I hated the whole justice system for a long time, so living with a cop was a hard adjustment. Knowing your dad was also out there helped me keep the faith though, and it helped me begin to forgive Daryl. But we both had our share of issues to work out with everything that happened to us. Despite all that though, Daryl was always there for me and always thought of me as a son. Barry starts walking towards Fry's grave. Iris lets go and hands Barry the flowers, and then Barry kneels down with the flowers. Barry says, I'm so sorry. It took so long for me to see you as a father, Daryl, and I'm sorry I couldn't be there for you when you needed me most. Barry then sets down the flowers and keeps talking. Not just during my coma, but even after what happened to Sharon. I hope you can forgive me. I love you, Pops. Iris puts her hand on Barry's shoulder while he's knelt down, but Barry stands back up and hugs Iris again. It then cuts back to the CCPD, with Barry sitting in the new captain's office in the station. Captain says, I'm sorry, Barry. With you being gone for so long, we had to find a new forensic scientist. We know how capable you are, though. On your very first day, you were able to assemble a whole murder weapon out of glass and set an innocent suspect free. Despite you being gone, your efforts were not unnoticed. Barry says, thank you, sir. Are there any other openings that might be here? I kinda need a job here in town. The captain says, Tell you what, with respect to Captain Fry, we could bring you on part-time as an assistant to our new forensic scientist. Help you get readjusted until you're ready to return full-time. Barry says, I appreciate that. Cuts to Barry in the front office on the phone with Sisto. And Sisto goes, how'd it go at CCPD? Did you get your job back? Barry says, kinda. They got a new cop scientist, so they'll have me helping out part-time. I'll need to find something else, though, in the meantime in order to afford the rent. Sisto says, Barry, if you need time to get your full position back, I can spot you for a while. Barry says, no, Sisto, you've done enough for me. You even took care of Gordon for me while I was gone. I need to step up and take responsibility. I'll figure something out. Barry ends the call with Sisto, where he finds his foot unconsciously, repeatedly tapping the ground at super speed. Barry stops it, making sure no one saw. And then he remembers a flashback to what Silas said. Silas says, don't be a stranger. Once you master your abilities, you could really do some special things around here. Barry has an idea. He calls Iris on his phone. Iris says, hey, Barry. Barry says, hey, you should come with me to Star Labs. And then it cuts to Barry slamming open Sisto's apartment door. And he says, you're coming with me too, Sisto. And Sisto says, the game's on, dude. Central City's gonna kick Gotham's ass. Barry goes over to Sisto and puts his hand on his shoulders, locking eyes with him. Barry says, you're gonna want to see this, dude. Barry, Iris, and Sisto make it to Star Labs, and Silas greets them in the lobby. And Sisto has the game on his phone. Barry shakes Silas's hand and pulls him aside, putting his arm around his shoulder and muttering to him without Iris and Sisto hearing. Barry says, hey, Doc, I know you said I could do some cool things around here. Is there any way I don't know, I could let you guys run some tests on my abilities for some extra dinero? And Silas says, what? And Barry says, what is it? Sell my body for research? And Silas says, I really wish you worded that differently. And Barry says, you know what I'm trying to say, Doc? If I help you guys understand my powers more, could I get some more cheddar out of it? And Silas rather loudly says, if you need money, Barry, just ask me. And Barry shushes Silas. Barry whispers, dude, not in front of the girl, man. Bro code. It then cuts to Silas guiding Barry, Iris, and Sisto through the halls of Star Labs, and Silas shows them one of the workshops. Silas addresses Iris and Sisto. Silas says, I apologize, but for the sake of confidentiality, I'm going to have to borrow Barry for a while. Feel free to browse around the lab if you like. And Barry says, it's okay, Doc. They know about my powers. Silas says, what? And Sisto says, powers? No, I didn't. What are you talking about? Barry says, sorry, Sisto. I was going to surprise you. Anyways, you know the lightning that put me in the coma for 9 months? Sisto says, yeah. And Sisto has a realization and looks at Barry wide-eyed. And Sisto says, no, you're kidding. Barry nods, grinning from ear to ear. And Silas says, you know how long it took to come up with alibis for your friends and family? Why don't we just tell everyone? Huh? Undermine all our efforts. Silas looks over at Iris. And what about the lady? And Barry says, I may have accidentally showed her my powers when I first saw her. Oops. Silas stops and says, unbelievable. You're lucky you didn't kill her. Iris and Barry look at each other, and Barry laughs awkwardly. Silas stops again and says, well, anyways, despite all this, I am glad you came back. We've been working on a suit for you that would mesh well with your abilities. Sisto whispers to Iris. He says, so, like, what powers does Barry have? And Iris whispers, says, like you said, it's a surprise, dude. The four get to the center of the room, where a life-size mechanism starts to turn around. The Flash suit is finally revealed, and the four can see it and are starstruck. Silas says, we had to compose a material that was soft and elastic, but also strong and durable enough to endure the friction of, well, how fast you can move, as well as the energy that you discharge while in motion. Thankfully, we had the help of Metamorpho, since he could create the materials required to make this work. He points to the Flash emblem on the chest of the suit, and Silas says that emblem will help contain that energy and lightning. Barry says, it's incredible. It's like a real super suit. Silas says, it is a real super suit. And Barry says, which means I can be... Silas says, slow down, Quickster. You're not quite ready for that. You still need to take this thing out for a test run. Then cuts to Barry and Iris in the corner of the lab talking closely to each other. And Iris says, I'll see you out there. Iris starts to walk out, but Barry grabs her hand. And Barry says, thanks for being here. Iris says, of course, it seems really special to you. Barry says, it is. Once I get used to my powers, I can make a real difference. Help people. I'll make you proud. Iris puts her hand on Barry's face, and she says, I'm already proud of you. It then cuts to Barry standing in the middle of the lab with Silas. And Silas says, I'm having them wait outside while you figure out how to get your suit on. And Barry says, so it's in this ring? Barry holds up his right knuckle, displaying this flash ring on his ring finger. So they already got the ring figured out. And Silas says, yes and no. Before I continue, the way I have the Flash put on his suit in this story, it's a little different than traditional. Because in most adaptations with the Flash having his ring, he presses a button that's on the ring, and the whole suit just flies out, and he like races around to put it on. But for this story, it's a little different. I'm gonna go ahead and explain it. Silas says, put on your suit. You'll press the lightning emblem on the ring, same as normal, which will then allow the material making up the fabric of the suit to phase into existence on your body, which comes from the ring. Barry says, yeah, that seems incredibly simple. Silas says, not quite. It's not automatic. You yourself have to phase the material on you once you activate the ring. Barry says, ugh, is there any way we can patch that? Silas says, only so much we can do in the short amount of time you've been gone, son. Barry says, all right, let's do this. Barry presses the ring, lighting it up, and it causes an electric whirring noise. Silas says, now focus your entire body and phase. Barry begins vibrating his entire body at super speed, trying to get the fabric of the Flash suit to materialize. He's largely unsuccessful, and only certain parts of the suit temporarily appear over his body. Silas looks concerned, and Barry returns to normal, and he's out of breath. Barry says, I can't do it, Doc. You sure you guys can't just patch it real quick? And Silas says, Barry, what do you want to do with your diffs? Barry looks intently at Silas, and he's still out of breath. Barry says, I want to help people. Silas says, why do you want to help people? Barry says, obviously because it's the right thing to do. Silas says, everyone wants to help people. Be a hero. Until it becomes a little too inconvenient. A little too hard. You may save hundreds of thousands, hell, even millions of people in your lifetime as a metahuman, but the moment you screw up even once, the people will never forget. They will remember not the countless good deeds you've done, only the singular mistake you made. That will be your legacy forever. That's how villains are made. The ones who blame not themselves, but the scientist who couldn't implement into his suit fast enough an auto-phasing feature, so as a result he couldn't phase into his suit fast enough to save that woman from a burning building. And I don't need someone with your diffs becoming a threat. Barry says, geez, Doc, do you need to talk to somebody? Silas says, just try it again. Barry gets in position and closes his eyes as he has a recurring flashback, where the therapist says, Barry, no one blames you for what happened to your mother. Barry says, then why can't I shake this feeling that every bad thing that's happened to me is my fault? And Fry says, we can figure that out together. I never asked you to do this alone. And Henry and Fry together both say, we're here for you, Barry, no matter what. Always. Barry presses the ring again. He has his body vibrate at super speed, and almost instantly, he's able to materialize the entire Flash suit onto his body, finally revealing it. Silas is amazed, and he says, you did it. Barry says, just so you know, I do blame myself for what happened. Even if I do end up screwing things up for myself permanently, like you said, nothing I could ever do will ever be worse than what I've done already. All I can do now is atone for that. It then cuts to Silas and Barry walking outside in the daytime to the runway, with Barry in the Flash suit, where a team of scientists as well as Iris and Sisto are waiting for them. The team claps for them, and Iris and Sisto join in. And Sisto says, that suit is sick! I still have no idea what's going on. And Silas says, line up there if you would, Barry. Barry stands in the starting position. Silas prepares to speak to everyone as well as Barry. He says, Barry, you have experience demonstrating your powers in the lab, but not the open world. Like I said before, the suit you're wearing will contain most of the lightning and energy to the emblem on your chest, so others will be safe if you travel near them. What I didn't tell you is that if you build enough energy in your emblem, you can fire an electric blast at will to escape a tricky situation. And Sisto says, oh my god, you're like Raiden from Mortal Kombat! Everyone pauses and Silas turns to look at Sisto slowly in contempt. And Barry says, not quite, bud. Silas continues his instructions. He says, you can also activate your built-in eye guards to keep the wind out of your eyes by squinting. Barry tests that out. He squints, and white eye guards enclose around his eyes. Silas says, that should be everything. Go ahead and line up. Barry gets in the starting position at the designated line. A flashback goes back to a little bit ago, where Barry again says, all I can do now is atone for that. Silas says, you didn't answer my question from earlier. Barry asks, what? And Silas says, why do you want to help people? Barry says, I told you, because it's the right thing to do. Silas says, that's not good enough. You can't be a hero with that half-assed reasoning. Barry says, all right, it's because she asked me to, and I'm going to honor her wishes, because she believed in me. And Silas says, good. You have that down. But you should know that there's a difference between simply blaming yourself and taking responsibility for what happened. The difference is that by taking responsibility, you own up to your mistake and grow from it, not dwell on it and never move on. That's what makes a hero. Barry gets ready to race. Silas says, be ready over there? Scientist 1 says, we're ready. Silas leans over to Barry and he says, you ready to be a hero? And Barry says, more than anything. Silas says, then run, Barry. Barry immediately takes off at super speed, sending a large gust of wind back at Silas and the scientist. Sisto is dumbfounded and Iris is amazed. Sisto says, holy shit! And Silas says, run! Song starts playing as Barry gets in the zone as he easily clears Star Labs' runway. He looks behind them, then takes a hard right. There's a brief cut to Barry leaving Central City as he blows by the city limits sign. Back at Star Labs, Silas looks confused and he looks back at the team of scientists. Silas says, I seem to recall that that he was supposed to just run the runway and come back. The scientist too says, yeah, something tells me he's not going to listen to you much. It then cuts to a shot of the Earth and a yellow streak of light crossing the Atlantic Ocean and reaching Africa. Cuts back to Barry in the flash suit moving at super speed through the African savannah, passing by numerous African animals. He eventually runs between two cheetahs sprinting at full speed, slowing down a little so they can keep up with him. The cheetahs are startled and Barry laughs in amazement, picking up speed again. Another shot of the Earth shows the yellow streak moving to Europe, sightseeing the international wonders as he moves at super speed. He makes it to different parts of the world and eventually makes it to Antarctica. He goes down there, moves at super speed through the frigid cold, and promptly leaves. As he speeds from Antarctica, he shivers and he says, yeah, let's stay away from the cold. Barry eventually makes it to Tokyo after the montage, and he sits on top of one of the buildings, phasing his suit off of him back into his ring and admiring the view. And he hears Nora's voice in his head, where Nora repeats her words, you have so many gifts that you can share with the world and help people with those gifts. I see what you can do with your life and it makes me so proud of you, love. Plus, being normal's overrated. After a moment, he ends up smelling smoke. He stands up and sees that one of the old-looking apartments in the nearby area is on fire. A fireman is on the fire escape, reaching inside one of the windows, having a hard time with it due to the fire escape being, old and unstable. He pleads with the woman inside to take his hand. The woman takes his hand and he pulls her out of the burning apartment. He prepares to take her down when all of a sudden the fire escape collapses, making both the fireman and woman fall from the tall apartment. Barry sees this from a distance and promptly activates his ring again, phasing his suit on once again and immediately moving to their location. Barry, in flash time, sees the woman and fireman's falling body basically in a freeze frame. Barry says, all right, man, let's be delicate about this. Barry slowly and softly wraps each of his arms around the woman and fireman. Time returns to normal and Barry gets them down to the ground safely. Barry smiles and says, there you go, you're safe. The woman and fireman immediately vomit on the ground. Barry looks grossed out at this and says, sorry, I'm pretty new to this. Barry at super speed goes back to check the burning apartment and he comes out immediately. He says, all right, she was the last one. You're all good now. Whole building wasn't up to code anyway. Barry looks down at his arms, subconsciously vibrating back and forth, generating small gusts of wind. He has an idea and puts his arms out in front of the burning building and begins rotating them in opposite directions, generating wind. He goes fast and strong gusts of wind begin putting out the fire. Everyone cheers and claps for him after he puts the fire out. Barry then speeds away and while running he mutters to himself, can't save a falling woman out of a burning building, my ass, Doc. There's a brief montage with the song picking up again, with Barry traveling to different countries and finding situations where various innocent people in danger need to be saved, and he's able to do so. He eventually returns to Africa, where he finds a village of starving people, deactivating the eye guards. Hey there! The people are startled by his presence, but he puts his hands up in peace. No, it's okay. I'm not here to hurt you. You need some water, right? Barry speeds away and momentarily comes back with a 24-pack of water bottles and some pizzas and a delivery bag. Yeah, he's that kind of hero. He grins ear to ear as he shows the village people what he brought. It then cuts to the children enjoying some pizza and water, as well as the adults nearby. They try to offer him a slice, but he politely refuses, standing there and watching them enjoy themselves. It then cuts to him returning to the outdoor runway at Star Labs in Central City, crossing the finish line in 10 minutes. He's fairly out of breath, but showing signs of satisfaction on his face. Silas says, pretty slow time, Barry. What'd you do, see the world? Barry says, yeah. Silas says, what? It then cuts back to everyone back in the lab with Barry gorging himself on food with everyone watching him. And Silas says, so you went and delivered pizza and water to a tribe in Africa? All in 10 minutes? Barry has his face full with food, saying, yeah, to hold them over for a bit. I let our local charity know about them. They should be out there helping them right about now. I didn't just do that though. I went to several different countries and found countless people that needed saving. Iris says, Barry, that's incredible what you've done, but I don't want you to put the weight of the entire world on your shoulders. You're already a hero in my eyes. That's what made me fall in love with you in the first place. Barry says, thanks, Iris, but if someone can be saved no matter where, I have to try. It's what my mom wanted. And Iris says she wanted you to be happy, not overwhelmed. And this is where things got picked up a little bit in the argument department. Barry says, what do you know about what she wanted? She wanted me to share my gifts with the world, and that's what I'm going to do. It doesn't matter how I feel. And Iris says, Barry! Silas says, all right, that's enough. His sister looks at Barry and says, dude, what's the matter with you? Barry says, did I say something wrong? And Iris says, yes, it's one thing to love what you do, but you can't let it consume you and turn you into someone else. Come find me when your mind's in a better place. Iris leaves and Barry calls out to her. And Barry says, Iris, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. Barry turns back to Silas and Sisto. Barry says, what did mom want for me? Sisto says, Iris is right, man. What does any loving mom want for her kid? Silas says, Barry, why don't you take the rest of the day off? Get your personal stuff sorted out. There will be time to run the tests we need. Sister says, hear that, Flash? Sure, man, we can figure out some more stuff about your powers too. Barry smiles and says, what'd you just call me? Sister says, you need a superhero name, right? I just came up with it. Barry says, wait, did you just make a Flash Gordon reference because of my dog? Sister says, maybe. Barry says, all right, Vibe, what do you have in mind? And Silas says, please, whatever you do, just don't do anything reckless. It then immediately starts a montage and cuts to a video of a title playing. Is The Flash bulletproof? The video shows Sisto standing with Barry in the Flash suit in the outdoors with Sisto holding a gun. Sisto says, welcome back to figuring out the Flash's powers with your boy Vibe. Today we're doing the highly requested test. Can Central City's very own Flash tank a bullet? And Barry asks, why did this get so many requests? Sisto says, we're here for the people, man. Now get in position. Barry reluctantly extends his right leg and Sisto aims the pistol at it. And Sisto says, without further ado, let her rip. Sisto fires the gun and the bullet goes straight through Barry's leg. Barry collapses in pain, screaming. The camera pans to Sisto making an awkward face. He walks towards the camera and says, I don't know if we should post this one. The camera pans back to Barry in the fetal position. It then cuts back to Barry back in Sisto's apartment with an ice pack on his leg, calling Iris's phone number. She doesn't answer and he leaves a voicemail message. Barry says, hey Iris, can we talk? I know you said to talk to you once I got my headspace right, and I'm good there now. Look, I'm sorry for what I said to you, and I had no right to accuse you of not knowing what my mom wanted for me. The truth is she loved you like her own daughter, and there's no greater feeling that I feel than my love for you. Can you just call me back? Barry ends the call and stares into space for a moment. It then cuts to a man breaking down a frozen door. The man steps out and it's revealed to be a bank. The man is revealed in a blue winter coat and goggles, and yeah, it's Captain Cold. Barry calls out to him, says, hey Snart, because his name's Leonard Snart. The man quickly turns around and aims his weapon at him, a gun that shoots ice cold energy blasts. Barry is revealed in the Flash suit, lounging near the bank entrance, sipping on a slushie. Barry says, funny I happened to see you. Could I get you to do me a solid? Snart says, what? Barry says, I just got this slushie, but it seems pretty lukewarm. I've heard cool things about that freeze gun of yours. Could I get you to cool this off for me? Snart says, are you mocking me, Flash? I am the great Captain Cold! In an instant, the Flash immediately steals Snart's freeze gun and brings it back to where it was. And Barry says, sorry, I got tired of waiting. Barry aims the freeze gun at the slushie and fires it, completely freezing it. He tips it upside down and the completely frozen slushie falls out of the cup. Barry says, well, that's a bummer. Barry then immediately speed blitzes Snart, knocking him out in one punch. It then cuts to 3 goons in a stolen car speeding away from CCPD in a police chase. The goon in the passenger seat says, come on, man, how are you not losing them? The goon driving says, oh, I'm sorry. It's not like I forgot the getaway car, so we had to steal this bum-ass car that barely hits the speed limit. All of a sudden, the Flash instantly phases into the backseat of the car next to the third goon. Barry says, hey, fellas. The goons freak out and all immediately fire their SMGs at Barry, though Barry is able to catch every single bullet fired at him. They run out of ammo, stunned, and Barry drops the bullet, the bullets fired from the gun in front of him, and instantly knocks out the backseat goon with a super speed punch. And Barry says, I'd prefer to not damage this car if I can. I mean, I could have sworn this was my Uber, but your face doesn't exactly scream Deborah to me. The goon in the driver's seat turns around with seething anger at Barry, and he screams, Deborah! Barry grabs the seat adjuster, leaning the seat forward greatly, hurting the driving goon. Barry leans over the driver's seat and looks down at him. Barry says, wait, you think I'm Deborah? How did you guess my secret identity? The passenger seat goon gets out a shotgun and aims it at the back of Barry's head. He cocks it and fires, but Barry, of course, catches every single pellet and the shell and tosses them back at the passenger seat goon's face, momentarily stunning him. The goon then thrusts the back of the shotgun at Barry like this, but Barry easily dodges, making the back of the shotgun hit the driving goon's face just as he recovers and readjusts his seat. Barry then from the back seat kicks the passenger seat goon in the face with a super speed kick, knocking him out and making him start snoring. Barry then instantly transports the 2 unconscious goons elsewhere and gets in the passenger seat. The driving goon holds his head in pain, looking at Barry, who is now sitting in the passenger seat, seatbelt on and everything. Barry smiles and he says, looks like I'm the passenger princess now. The driving goon says, what? Where'd they go? Barry says, they're in the trunk. I could do that to you too and just drive this back to the CCPD myself, but well, you're a big guy, so I imagine that experience would be quite unpleasant. The driving goon sighs and says, yeah, I appreciate that. Barry says, before you go there though, Barry points to the nearby Big Belly Burger and says, you're taking me there first. It then cuts to the goon parking the car at the CCPD, where the cops are waiting for them, as well as Deborah, who reported the car stolen. The Flash gets out with his food and drink as the driving goon gets arrested along with the other 2 in the trunk. Barry says, thanks for spotting me, boss. It's a little tough to carry a wallet around in this thing. Barry takes a bite out of his burger and sees Deborah with the cops. Barry has his face stuffed with food. He says, and there's her car back, Deborah. Deborah says, oh, thank you, Flash. Bless you. And Flash says, sure, no problem. It then cuts to a late night concert in Central City near the outskirts where a band is performing. The Flash speeds onto the stage where the crowd erupts and cheers. and he fist bumps the lead singer. And Barry says, Central City, how are we doing tonight? The crowd goes insane. And Barry says, I'm gonna need y'all to do something. I want every single one of you to give our dear friends, the band that's playing, that kind of Central City welcome. Give it up. The crowd continues cheering, and Barry speeds off the stage and circles the crowd repeatedly, getting the energy up. He high-fives several people, and one person winces in pain and holds up his sore hand, showing that, Barry held back. Barry eventually speeds off and into the outskirts of Central City, releasing an energy blast and sonic boom from his emblem and running in the pattern of his lightning logo, which is visible from where the concert is, invisible in the distance, briefly shown by yellow light. The crowd continues going crazy and redirects their energy to the band, which begins playing their rock music. It then cuts to Russian goons taking a cloth off of the Flash's face in an abandoned warehouse. Barry squints at the light, accidentally activating his eye guards. The first Russian goon starts. I'm gonna butcher this accent, so just bear with me.
The Flash himself. You are highly valuable here in Central City.
Barry says, valuable? I'm practically the city mascot now.
Well, none of that matters now. What matters now is what you have done to our business in drug trafficking. We need money back, and I think several people will be willing to pay lots of money to get you back.
Barry says, oh, so that's what you guys have been up to. I was wondering what would make you guys gather the balls to kidnap me, but it makes total sense now. The Russian goons look at each other now, and the second Russian goon says,
it does?
Barry says, yeah, I think it's a great plan. I mean, you did the hard part already by getting me here. Now it's just a matter of getting your money back. All of a sudden, someone's phone in the distance plays a goofy ringtone. The Russian goons are confused. Barry says, sorry, that's me. You mind if I take this? Barry then speeds to where his phone is in the room, and the Russian goons freak out and all start shooting at Barry. Barry faces his entire body, making all the bullets pass through him without him even looking at them. And Barry sees the notification, which is a reminder, have Vibe take out Gordon if I'm still out flashing. Barry calls Sisto, which rings for a while. Gordon, Barry's dog, stares at Sisto while he's locked in playing a video game. Cuts back to Barry pacing back and forth, waiting for Sisto to answer the phone. Barry says, Vibe, pick up the phone. Barry's voice is heard through Sisto's ringing phone as Gordon tries to get Sisto's attention. And Barry says, Vibe, lock in. Sisto barely hears Barry's voice through the phone. He says, I am locked in. Sisto then finally realizes after noticing Gordon. He panics and rushes to where his phone is. And Barry says, Vibe, Gordon needs to take a shit. Sisto gets to his phone and picks it up and says, sorry, dude, don't worry, I'm on it. Barry says, thanks, Vibe, love you. Barry then speeds back to the chair he was sitting in and ties himself back up. Barry says, sorry, what were you guys saying about your plan? I like feeling needed. The Russian goons are stunned. And it cuts to CCPD where the same two cops from the beginning of the movie walk outside to see the Russian goons surrendering.
We'd like to turn ourselves in.
It then even cuts to a scene of the Flash doing a TikTok dance with someone. The last scene of the montage shows a college girl opening the door to her house at night while a party is going on in the house. The college girl sarcastically says, oh, hello, officer. The Flash is shown with a police siren on top of his head strapped around his chin. It looks ridiculous. Sisto is also there, who is also wearing a cop uniform. They're also wearing sunglasses and chewing bubblegum. Keep in mind, again, it's at night. Barry says, evening, ma'am. Barry blows a large bubble with his gum. It pops and gets all over his face. He tries to get it back into his mouth with his tongue, but eventually gives up and uses his hands to do so. It also looks ridiculous. He pretends to write on a notepad. He says, I happen to be in the area and got a noise complaint from one of the neighbors. Is there a party going on here tonight? Everyone in the house in the background cheers. The college girl says, maybe, maybe not. And Barry says, I'm afraid I'm gonna have to investigate the premises and seize any contraband I may find here. The college girl pretends to be worried, saying, what does that mean? And Sisto says, it means we're gonna drink all your booze, ma'am. It then cuts to inside the house where the Flash is chugging beers effortlessly. As I got a specific song in mind here, as the chorus to Get Low by Lil Jon and the East Side Boys and Yin Yang Twins plays. He then chugs a bottle of Hennessy as the party goers cheer him on. And Barry says, yeah, that's pretty good. For some weak shit, the party goers lose their minds as they keep bringing Barry things to drink. Sisto is also having the time of his life. Barry and Sisto are having a great time when somebody says, what about this? Barry looks over at what's being brought to him and his smile fades in slow motion. A bottle of Everclear in slow motion is slid across the table close to him as the song transitions to near the outro of Kiss You All Over by Exile, which is a song famously played in Happy Gilmore. Barry looks at the bottle in horror as he hallucinates Leslie's face, the lead scientist from Star Labs. Her face is on the bottle speaking in a high-pitched voice. What's wrong, Barry? We injected 70 ounces of this into your bloodstream. Compared to that, this is nothing. Barry has a disoriented face, still staring at the Everclear as he snaps back into reality. One of the college boys prepares a speech. College boy says, This is the doozy of the night. Give it up for the Flash! Everyone cheers, and Barry nervously cheers as well as he begins chugging the Everclear. Sisto looks at Barry in horror, and several people there are completely stunned at him. And Sisto says,
Oh no.
Barry nods as he continues chugging, and then it immediately cuts to Barry in the Flash suit, face down, passed out on the front porch as the music stops immediately. The same cops again from the beginning of the movie look down at him in disapproval, and Cop 1 says, "Are you shitting me?" The ending verse of Kiss You All Over picks up again, till the night closes in, as the camera pans away from them like it's a 90s movie, where fake credits pop up. Directed by Barry Allen, executive producer Sisto Ramon, written by Wally West. And Wally's voice says, "Hey, I had nothing to do with this." And then hate watched by Dr. Silas Stone. After that plays, it cuts back to Star Labs with Silas scolding Barry. And Silas says, "I asked you to do one thing. Don't do anything reckless." Barry is clearly hungover as his hand is over his forehead. Silas says, "You're lucky that no one tried to remove your mask and reveal your secret identity." And Barry is like, "Couldn't they not do that anyway? I thought you all designed my suit that way." And Silas says, "That's not the point. There are power scalers at that campus saying that you get no diffed by Everclear." Silas drops a school magazine on the table, showing the Flash passed out on the ground. And Barry says, "Doc, you gotta believe me. They had to have spiked it or something. I somehow feel worse than when your team injected me with that stuff. I swear my whole coterie of supervillains was at that party." And Silas says, "Barry, you don't understand. You might not think this is a big deal, but a weakness is a weakness. The sooner your enemies find out about what makes you vulnerable, the sooner you are at risk." Barry says, "Look, I took all of your advice about this obsession I was having when I first got my powers and learned to let go for a bit. I'm a lot more used to it now, and frankly, I'm having a blast being the Flash. Now, I don't know what being a hero means to you, but in my opinion, being a hero and saving lives means nothing if you can't build relationships and have fun with the people you're saving." And Silas says, "Yeah, build relationships, not get wasted at parties." And Barry says, "You act like that's all I'm doing. You're ignoring all the good I've done." And Silas says, "And I expect that much of someone of your capabilities." And Barry says, "Oh, don't pretend to be my dad or a hero yourself. Is that it? You'd do things so differently if you had my powers? You know what? I'm done with this. If you're not going to appreciate what I've done for the city, I don't need you telling me how to be a hero. I can do it on my own." Silas says nothing as he and Barry look at each other in contempt. Barry speeds away from Silas with a gust of wind blowing in Silas's face. Barry speeds away from Star Labs as a brief flashback is shown of a previous scene of Fry. Fry says, "You can't keep running from your problems, Barry. When shit happens, you just have to deal with it or talk to somebody. Come on, man, you're too smart to be acting like this." Barry stops nearby a tree and looks at his lock screen on his phone, him and Iris taking a selfie. He reaches in his back pocket and pulls out his ring case containing the ring he had from earlier. Then cuts to Iris opening her front door, seeing Barry there with flowers. Iris has mixed feelings about seeing him. Barry says, "Can we talk, please?" And Iris says, "You know, for being the fastest man alive, you sure take your time. 3 weeks?" Barry says, "I tried to call you." And Iris does this. Barry says, "All right, you got me there." It then cuts to the evening in a park in Central City where Barry and Iris are walking on a trail and holding hands. Barry says, "I'm sorry for everything. Not just what I said when you said my mom would want me to be happy, but for being as distant as I've been lately." Iris looks at Barry as he keeps talking. And Barry says, "Don't get me wrong. What you said helped and it's been amazing being the Flash, but I feel like I lost a sense of my priorities and I hurt you because of that." Iris smiles and says, "You big softy. I was only pissed at you because of the mom thing." Barry says, "Well, regardless, I want to make it up to you." Barry shuffles his ring case in his back pocket and he says, "You ever been to Paris?" Iris says, "Can't say that I have." "Don't tell me you can get us there." Barry does this. Iris laughs and says, "I will say, your boyfriend being the Flash certainly has its perks." And all of a sudden, the two of them hear a gasp from someone on the nearby park bench. Concerned, Barry and Iris approach the person. Barry says, "What happened?" The civilian says, "It's on the news." The civilian shows them her phone, where the civilian says, "Someone's about to jump off a building." Barry looks up with determination, then looks at Iris, feeling defeated. He pulls her off to the side. Barry says, "I'm so sorry, I have to help with this. Paris later?" Iris says, "Stop being a wuss and go save that guy, Flash." Barry smirks and says, "Yes, ma'am." Barry activates his flash ring and phases into his super suit, speeding towards the inner city. He reaches the base of the building where cop cars and a fire truck are. He approaches some cops, all looking up and pointing a spotlight at the top of the building, where the person is barely visible. Cop says, "Flash, thank goodness you're here." Barry says, "No problem. Is that the guy up there?" Cop says, "Yeah, he's too high up for any of us to get him down safely." Barry says, "Don't worry, I'm on it." Barry speeds at the building and runs up the side of it, getting to the top of the building instantly. He stands off to the side and looks at the person up top. Barry says, "Hey man, how's it going?" The person is revealed to be a man roughly around the same age as Barry, and he looks over at the Flash and laughs in excitement. He says, "Oh my god, it's really you." Barry says, "You seem pretty cheery. You want to come sit down over here and talk for a bit?" The guy says, "Yeah, totally." It then cuts to the Flash and the person sitting across from each other on top of the building. And Barry says, "Look, man, I know life can get pretty tough sometimes, but this isn't the answer. You got a lot to live for, I know it." And the guy says, "Oh, sorry, I'm not suicidal. I just had to get your attention." Barry stops for a moment and looks at the person with suspicion. Barry says, you know there's easier ways to get my attention, right? I don't really appreciate... The guy says, sorry, please just hear me out. I'm a speedster like you. Barry is shocked and says, what? The person brings up his hand and it vibrates. Barry says, how? The guy says, I have so much to tell you, but for now, all you need to know is I came here from the future. Barry says, the future? You're a speedster, but you traveled through time? Who are you? The guy says, my name is Eobard Thon. Those of you who are half listening throughout this story just perked up real quick, and I'm your biggest fan in my time. I created something called a particle accelerator and recreated the accident that happened to you, and now I operate as the Flash of the 25th century. The reason I'm here is that I'm opening the Flash Museum, and I want you to see it and be there for the grand opening. Barry is stunned and says, a museum? Barry collects himself. He says, I'm sorry, I can't leave my time. The people need me here. And Eobard says, it's okay. I can show you how to go to the future as well as the past. And when we're done, I can bring you back here as if no time passed at all. Barry can no longer resist the temptation and says, time travel. All right, I'll go with you. It then cuts to Barry and Eobard standing in a field together. And Eobard says, you're probably still in your early years, so I'll explain it fully. What you need to know is that if we run fast enough, we can tap into something called the Speed Force, an alternate dimension outside of time itself. That's where our power comes from. Something about the way our incidents happened, I believe part of the Speed Force entered our DNA from the overwhelming electricity and caused the energy to change our anatomy entirely, giving us super speed. Barry says, how did you find this out? And Eobard says, I'll explain the rest once we enter the Speed Force. Barry and Eobard both get in runner's position. And Eobard says, you ready? The hard part is finding out which level of speed you need to run at in order to tap into the Speed Force. It changes all the time, so you just have to tune in with it, like adjusting a radio frequency. Barry says, got it. And Eobard says, follow my lead. I'll find out where it's at and we can enter the Speed Force together. Eobard and Barry both take off and speed across the world. Barry is concentrated and looks over at Eobard, who looks like he's struggling to think. Barry says, what's going on? And Eobard says, we have to go faster. You're here, so it's already expecting a lot from you. Go on ahead of me, I'll catch up. Barry says, how do I know if I'm at the right speed? Eobard says, the closer you get, the easier it'll be to get to the right frequency. You'll know you're in the Speed Force if the environment changes around you. Now go. Barry nods in understanding, and he speeds off ahead of Eobard. Eobard laughs in amazement and says, incredible. Barry keeps running and increases his speed even more. In his head, he can hear Nora's voice in his head picking up and lowering in volume as he attempts to tune into the Speed Force. Nora's voice strains, and she says, Barry, don't forget what I told you. I'm so proud of you. Barry shudders for a moment as he keeps running with Nora's voice getting louder as he tunes into the Speed Force. Eventually, around him, the environment around him turns space blue with countless multicolored shooting stars forming, and the ground beneath them turns into a crystallized flooring. He skids to a stop and he sees the Speed Force around him and the beautiful scenery that it has. Now that Barry is here, a widescreen image of scenes in his present life appears in the distance onto the left of him, and countless widescreen images of his past and future form on either side of it, like an unraveled roll of film. Eventually, a portal opens up and Eobard lands in the Speed Force in front of Barry, pretty out of breath. He turns back to Barry, and Eobard says, you're a natural, Flash. Welcome to the Speed Force. Barry says, this is crazy. It's like my entire life in front of me. And Eobard says, it is your entire life in front of you. I won't be able to see what you see, but I can see general events from outside my life. And obviously, me being from the future, my personal highlights won't start until later. Barry says, how did you find me then? Eobard says, something you'll come to find out that everything is a lot simpler for us speedsters. Even traveling time is a cakewalk. Running forward takes you to the future, and running the opposite direction takes you to the past. I just had to travel to your time, around when you woke up from your coma, and it seems I got to around a little under a month after that. Barry says, my coma? How do you know about that? Eobard says, you'll see. Come with me. I'll show you everything. Eobard races towards the future, and Barry follows closely behind. They speed through the Speed Force, and they see the starry environment whoosh behind him, as well as the scenes of life rapidly moving beside him. And Eobard says, we're here. Eobard and Barry both phase and end up in a completely new environment. The scenery is beautiful and very futuristic looking, and it displays the year 2479. Eobard points out something to Barry behind him. Eobard says, check it out. Barry turns around and sees a huge building displaying the Flash Museum. And Eobard says, this is your legacy, Flash. Come check it out. Barry and Eobard approach the building and Barry mutters to himself. Barry says, looks like your superhero name's sticking around for a while, Sisto. It then cuts to Barry and Eobard walking through the empty museum. And Eobard says, by the way, you can take your mask off, Barry. Your secret's safe here. Barry looks at Eobard in concern. And Eobard says, it's okay, man. We all know who you are here. I know everything about you. Not just you, but the whole Justice League. It's how I was able to put all this together. Barry says, Justice League? Do you mean the Justice Gang? Eobard stops and says, wow, you're really early. Barry and Eobard reach the middle of the museum and see an old tree that Barry recognizes from the tree in his backyard from his childhood. Under the tree, Barry sees a memorial for Nora Allen. Barry looks down at it, touched. Eobard says, "Your story is an inspiration for us all, Barry. Becoming a hero despite all you've been through, and the goodness you've had in your heart can really only be possible by a mother's love, even if she may have been taken from you too soon." Barry takes a moment to process all this. He looks down at the main area, noticing other trinkets, including a weather wand with the label, "The Weather Wizard." Barry says, "Why am I really here?" And Eobard says, "I want you to be the keynote speaker for the grand opening tonight. Don't worry, I prepared a speech for you and I got you a suit for tonight. I'm well liked as the Flash of this time, but I think this museum will have a greater impact if the OG is the one to set this off." Barry nods and says, "Alright, I'll do it. Least I can do." Barry is in his futuristic hotel room, sitting on his bed staring off into space. He looks out his balcony into the view of the futuristic central city, including a huge statue of the Flash himself. Nora's voice says, "I see what you can do with your life, and it makes me so proud of you, love." Barry's choked up. And he says, "I did it, Mom." Barry, in his hotel room, opens up a wardrobe, revealing a flashy dress suit. The tuxedo is bright red, and his tie is yellow. Cuts to at the event at the Flash Museum starting, and Barry walks in, admiring the suit he's wearing. He notices that even the measurements are perfect. He says, "Wow, he really does know everything about me." Barry looks down near his crotch area and looks back up. Cuts to the main area of the museum with various Flash-related attractions, with the guests enjoying themselves at the different tables and stations. Cuts to Barry backstage with an earpiece and microphone. Eobard comes in with his own suit, instead wearing a bright yellow suit and red tie, and his own earpiece and microphone. He pats Barry on the shoulder. Eobard says, "Thanks again for this, Barry. I'll make this all worth your while." Barry says, "No, thank you for showing me all this. It makes me glad to know I actually ended up doing something meaningful with my life." Eobard smiles and pats him on the back again. Barry says, "I have to ask though, is there still much crime here in Central City?" Eobard says, "What do you mean?" Barry says, "If you're the Flash now, does that mean there still needs to be a lot of hero work done here?" A lady finds them backstage and lets them know the crowd's ready for them. Barry and Eobard don't hear her though, and they keep talking, unaware that their mics are now on. Barry, with the mic on, says, "I need to know that the legacy that I left behind ends up lasting and that the people feel safe here." Eobard, with his mic on, says, "Dude, don't worry. I wouldn't have done all this if your legacy didn't last. You're one of the greatest heroes of all time." The crowd of people hear Barry and Eobard's voices, but are confused why they're just talking to each other and not on stage. Eobard says, "Truth be told, there's hardly any crime nowadays. I need to be the Flash though, so sometimes the crimes that happen here may or may not get set up." Barry's taken aback by this and looks at him intently. "What do you mean, set up?" The lady comes back, frantically telling them to get on stage. Eobard notices this and looks horrified. He says, "Barry, our mics are on." The curtain rolls, revealing Barry and Eobard staring at each other. The crowd is startled by Barry's intense face as he turns towards them, then back at Eobard. And Barry says, "I'll ask you again. What do you mean, set up?" And Eobard says, "Barry, please." Barry looks back at the crowd, muttering as they had heard this exchange. Barry looks out the great windows of the city and sees Star Labs in the distance. He instantly speeds off towards Star Labs in his suit. He rushes in and searches the entire complex. He leaves, stopping outside the facility. Barry says, "What are you hiding?" Barry speeds around the entirety of the futuristic central city. Back to the museum, the crowd is muttering even more, and Eobard nervously tries to calm the crowd back down. Eobard says, "It's okay, he'll be back in a moment. I'm sure he just had to use the bathroom." Barry continues speeding around Central City and remembers his house. He temporarily stops in a random location and speeds towards where his house was. He reaches his childhood home, updated with, the futuristic renovations, and he phases into the house and checks around the house. Then cuts to a brief flashback of young Barry popping into Henry's office. Young Barry says, "Hey, dinner's ready!" And Henry says, "Thank goodness, I did a break from work. Thanks, kiddo." Henry and young Barry leave Henry's office, walking past adult Barry. Barry looks into the office and sees a large collection of trinkets, awards, and newspaper clips of the Flash's good deeds. Barry looks at the big plaque on the wall that reads, "Hero of our time, 1,000 crimes stopped in a single year, Eobard Thawne, the Flash." Barry reads this and is enraged. He looks more around the room, examining the other artifacts in the office. Regarding the particle accelerator, Barry reads a headline. "Eobard Thawne's particle accelerator malfunctions and explodes. Hundreds of people turn into metahumans. Thawne apologizes and finances the recovery of each person affected." Thawne himself, given super speed, now operates as the Flash, inspired by the original Flash, Barry Allen. Barry reads another newspaper snippet. The Flash stops a bombing planned by a terrorist organization Another reads, Starlab's super weapon goes haywire. The Flash subdues it and saves Central City. Barry reads all of this, seething and livid. In an instant, he speeds back to the Flash Museum, stopping directly in front of Eobard. Eobard stumbles back, and Barry looks down at Eobard with malice in his eyes. The people who had just been calmed down by Eobard picked up their concern again. Barry turns towards the people with determination in his eyes and taps his microphone to verify it's back on. He then points at Eobard. Barry says, "This man is a fraud." The crowd stammers more, starting to panic. Eobard looks terrified but tries to collect himself. Eobard says, "Now, I'm sure Barry is just tired from the time traveling he did today. Barry, do you mind me taking over?" Barry says, "Yeah, I do mind. Not much actual crime here in Central City, so it gets set up, right? Is that from you?" Crowd Doer says, "Answer the question." Eobard goes pale, and he gives Barry a pleading look, covering his microphone. Eobard says, "Please don't do this." Barry says they deserve to know the truth. Eobard says, "He's lying. I love this city. I would give anything to protect it. I save lives. I stop crime. I revolutionized the entire city. Barry was a great hero, but he sees all I've done here, wishing he could do as much as me, and he's trying to discredit me." The crowd is not buying it, and they begin jeering at Eobard. Eobard looks back at Barry, and Barry starts slowly walking towards him. Barry says, "First, you endanger innocent lives with your particle accelerator explosion, the Starlab super weapon. Did you set that up? I know you set up the bombing, by the way. I found this picture you kept in your office. It looks like you met with terrorists beforehand. It looks like you're paying them." The crowd erupts in anger. Eobard says, "No!" Barry says, "Yeah, it looks like you tried real hard to cover that one up. I see some dried blood on here. Did you kill the person who took this?" Eobard freezes, looking back and forth at the crowd and Barry. Barry softly says, 1,000 crimes in a year, but the only criminal I see here is you. The police show up to try and calm the crowd down, but some of them look up at Eobard in contempt and start walking towards him. Eobard softly says, "I just wanted to help people, like you." Barry softly says, "You wear my suit. Take my name. You never wanted to help people. You just wanted the spotlight." Eobard's face slowly changes from panic to rage. Yellow lightning starts forming around him as Eobard seethes with anger and hatred. In an instant, Eobard pins Barry to one of the walls in a wild rage. Barry tries to break free, and the police rush to try and get Eobard off of Barry. Eobard's lightning goes out of control, and he looks back at the police officers, and he says, "Get off me!" The lightning strikes the officers around them, sending them flying back and critically injuring them. The crowd fully panics now, but Eobard speeds to one of the female guests, putting her in a chokehold and vibrating his free hand next to her neck in such a way it could be a blade. The vibrating hand barely touches the woman's neck, nicking it and making it start to bleed. Barry says, "Thon, stop, let her go." And Eobard says, "Let's try your logic out, Barry. Let's say I set this crime up, intentionally putting this innocent life in danger. What will you do to save her? Charge at me directly? See which one of us is faster? You would put her life on the line if you did so, because of your faith in your speed over mine, believing that you could save this woman faster than I could kill her. That's all I ever did. This city is better off with me because of my faith in my own power." Barry says, "Okay, I understand. You made your point. Now let her go." Eobard says, "No. You're gonna have to save her." "What are you gonna do, hero?" Barry thinks for a moment, his brain running 1,000,000 miles per hour, examining his surroundings. He has a quick flashback of Eobard yelling to Barry that they have to go faster in order to reach the Speed Force. In his head, he calculates the difference in speed Barry and Eobard had and the precise time it took for Eobard to reach the Speed Force after Barry did. He then calculates the distance from him to Eobard and then the distance from Eobard's hand to the woman's throat, like a mathematical equation. He walks to a different angle as casually as he can as Eobard brings his hand even closer to the woman's neck. Barry says, "Easy, Thon. You're right. Everything I could plan right now would put this woman's life in danger. Though I trust my own speed, I don't know how it compares to yours or how fast I could make it to you." Eobard says, "Stop stalling. I know you're trying to get closer to give yourself more of a window. Nothing you do will be enough." And Barry says, "Oh yeah? What if I do this?" In an instant, Barry points his arm towards Eobard and the woman and rotates them at super speed, generating strong winds at them. Eobard struggles to keep his footing, and he loses his grip on the woman due to the angle of the wind and forcing his hand away from the woman's throat, and she goes flying away from the force of the wind. Panicking, Eobard turns to face her to try and recapture her, but misses her. He turns back towards Barry in slow motion, only to realize a devastating punch from Barry at super speed is about to strike his face in a nanosecond. Eobard goes flying back from the punch, and Barry speeds to catch the woman before she can collide with the wall. Eobard struggles to get back up, and the police officers promptly put power-dampening cuffs on him. They get Eobard up, and Eobard begins pleading with the people. Eobard says, please, you don't understand. Central City needs the Flash. You're making a mistake. Barry walks up to him, and Eobard looks back at him. And Eobard says, how? How did you do that? Barry says, you may have my powers, Thawne, but you have almost zero imagination about using them. Which is actually, fun fact, an exact line he said in the Flashpoint Paradox movie. A sequence plays of a traumatized Thawne being escorted to a police car. In the car, he stares outside of the crowd surrounding Barry, praising him as a hero. He sees Barry enjoying himself with the people and shaking their hands. It then cuts to the car driving away as he has a view of the city and the huge Flash statue standing proud and strong. Eobard stares at it with a silent rage as they reach a futuristic Iron Heights prison. Cuts back to Barry finishing his night at the Flash Museum. He has a peaceful moment to catch one last view of the future Central City and how beautiful it is at night. It then cuts to him at a graveyard examining his mother's gravestone. On either side of the gravestone, the other gravestones show the name of Henry Fry himself, and the last one he notices is Iris's. The death dates are not shown. In Barry's jacket pocket, he pulls out the ring he was going to propose to Iris with, which then reminds him to check his Flash ring. Cuts to Barry back in the Flash suit. He says, alright, let's preferably not get stuck here. You're gonna make it home, Barry. Barry takes off, adjusting his speed to try to get in tune with the Speed Force. As he gets more in tune, he hears Nora's voice again. As he gets more in tune, he hears Nora's voice again. Don't forget what I told you. Barry fights through it and he makes it back into the Speed Force. Barry says, why do I keep hearing you, Mom? I don't remember you saying that. Barry rushes back towards the past as he eventually sees images of his life start popping back up. He eventually makes it back to his time at the moment he left the present and starts to head in that direction until he stops and looks to the left towards the past. Barry repeats himself. I don't remember you saying that. Barry has a silent battle in his head, but eventually turns back towards the present and phases out of the Speed Force to return to downtown Central City at the same time he left for the future. The cops around him are startled as he literally appeared out of thin air. The cop says, what the hell? What happened to you? Barry says, it's a long story, bro. Cuts back to Iris still looking onto the distance towards downtown when Barry speeds back to her in the park. Iris is startled but laughs as she reunites with Barry. Iris says, you handled that one quick. Barry says, trust me, I couldn't get back here soon enough. Cuts to Silas at Star Labs when Barry speeds in behind him, startling Silas. Silas says, Jesus, Barry, don't do that! Barry says, I need to talk to you. Silas says, save it. I have nothing to say to you at the moment. Barry says, I'm sorry, Doc. I've been a total dick to you. All you've been trying to do is get me to use my powers somewhat kind of safely. Even if you might have been overbearing, strict, a pain in the ass. Silas sips his toffee and says, just spit it out. Barry says, I can time travel. And then Silas promptly spits his toffee out. Cuts to Barry describing his time in the future at a conference table with Silas, a couple scientists, Cisco, and Iris. Barry says it turns out he was actually orchestrating the majority of the crimes he was stopping as the Flash, and I exposed him for it. But yeah, I kind of have a museum dedicated to me. Silas says, of course you do. Naira says, what was his name again? Barry says, Eobard Thawne. His sister says, what the hell kind of name is that? Barry says, the 25th century kind. I didn't like the vibe he gave off in the end. I'm wondering if I shouldn't have interfered with the timeline. Ira says, even if you did, it was the right thing to do. And Sisto says, didn't he interfere with it first by bringing you to the future? Barry says, what do you think, Doc? And Silas says, of all the abilities I've seen from metahumans, I had yet to encounter one that could time travel or even explain the laws of it until you. I couldn't guess the first possible thing that could disrupt the timeline or how your speed force connects to it. We'd have to study it extensively. I suppose if the universe isn't collapsing in on itself at the moment, things are probably fine. They all take a moment to process this. Silas says, stay close to Star Labs in case I need something from you, Barry. The sooner we can learn more about the speed force, the better. It then cuts to Barry and Iris walking outside. And Iris says, so what do we do now? And Barry says, we go to Paris, obviously. Iris looks up at Barry in amusement. She says, the doc just said to stay close. Barry says, pfft, as if I can't get back here in 5 seconds. Plus, I love pissing him off. Iris laughs and says, you made a hell of a point, Flash. So, when are we going? Barry looks down at her and does this. And Iris says, don't tell me. Barry speeds off with Iris and they make it to Paris, seeing the Eiffel Tower in the distance. Iris is amazed and admires the view of the city before abruptly barfing on the ground in front of her. And Barry says, oh, sorry, I'm still pretty new to this. It then cuts to a montage of Barry and Iris as they go through the city of Paris, having dinner, going up the Eiffel Tower and walking through a park. Moves back to the area they came to initially. They admire the view again. Barry shuffles the ring case in his pocket again. Barry says, Iris, when I went to the future, as great as it was to see how I left my legacy, it still felt wrong being there. Iris looks up at Barry. Barry says, for the sole reason being that you weren't there. It made me realize that there would be no possible way I could be half the man I am if you weren't part of my life. I knew it from the moment I laid eyes on you all those years ago. And Iris says, Barry. Barry slowly gets down on one knee as Iris puts her hand over her mouth. And Barry says, "You are the light of my life, Iris. Will you marry me?" Iris shakes, crying, and she says yes. Barry, beaming, stands up, getting ready to kiss her. And Barry says, "Wait, you kind of barfed earlier, didn't you?" Iris cringes, and Barry says, screw it. And Barry and Iris share a passionate kiss as the shot zooms out for a more broad view of Paris. After the kiss, Iris smiles sweetly at Barry, and Iris says, "You know what? Mother's Day is tomorrow. Let's eat lunch with my family and break the news to them." The next day, a brief montage is shown of Barry and Iris reuniting with Iris's parents as well as Wally and breaking the news of their engagement. Once they're done there, they return to Star Labs where Silas meets with Barry. Silas says, "Is there any chance you can show us how you tapped into the Speed Force?" Barry says, "Sure. I don't know how useful it'll be to you once I get inside, but I can show you what it's like." Silas says, "Great. We have a chamber below the lab that has a massive loop around the core of the facility. It should be big enough for you to build enough speed." Then cuts to the crew being escorted to the lower facility and eventually seeing the core of Star Labs, as well as the huge track-like thing surrounding it. It then moves to Barry getting into starting position on the track. The crew watches Barry on a monitor showing a Barry POV camera from a control room near the core. And Sal says, "Remind us how you tap into the Speed Force." Barry says, "There's a certain speed I have to run at. According to Thon, it changes all the time. It's like a radio frequency. Something I tune into." Sal says, "Got it. Whenever you're ready, Barry." Barry takes a moment, then takes off, immediately making multiple laps around the several-mile-long track a second. He steadily picks up speed as the team of scientists monitored Barry's vitals and tracked his MPH, quickly going over Mach 2, 3, 4, so on. Sisto says, "Wait, how does he know whenever he's tapped into the Speed Force? He says the speed changes all the time. Is that anywhere from like a couple hundred miles an hour and the speed of light?" Everyone pauses and Silas says, "I don't know. I didn't think of that." Barry, focused, keeps running as he begins hearing his mom again. He strains as he gets a brief flashback to Mother's Day in his childhood, because today is Mother's Day. Young Barry and Henry surprise Nora with a bouquet of daisy red chrysanthemum flowers, same colors of the Flash suit, and Henry holds up a Happy Mother's Day sign with the flowers showing off vibrant red petals and a yellow center, symbolizing love and passion for Barry's mother, as well as symbolization for the vibrancy of the red and yellow, representing the warm qualities of the Flash. Nora is taken aback but adores the flowers. Barry strains as he keeps running, now hearing his mother again. As a voiceover, Nora's voice strains, saying, "You're all grown up." Barry tears up while he's running, saying, "Mom?" In the control room, the scientists start reading abnormal readings to Barry's vitals. Scientist 1 says, "Something's happening with Barry's vitals. They're spiking." Sal says, "Barry, what's going on?" Barry says, "Mom, where are you?" Everyone hears this out of Barry, and Iris and Sisto look at each other with concern. And Sal says, "All right, stop. We'll try this again later." Barry says, "No, I'm so close. I'm going to save you." And Sal says, "I said stop, Barry." Barry screams in agony, eventually losing his footing and crashing along the walls. Then cuts to the crew helping Barry up, and Barry is still shaken up. Sisto says, "What happened, dude?" Barry says, Every time I get close to entering the Speed Force, I hear my mom's voice, but I don't remember the words she's telling me." Iris kneels down next to Barry to comfort him. Silas says, "Take the rest of the day off, Flash. If you can try and figure out a different way to get to the Speed Force that doesn't remind you of your trauma, I'd feel better about that." Barry nods in understanding, and it cuts to Barry, Iris, and Sisto back in Sisto and Barry's apartment with Gordon, Barry's dog, sitting next to Barry. Sisto says, "Do you know why you keep hearing your mom when you're about to enter the Speed Force?" Barry says, "I only have guesses. It must be a personalized thing with every speedster. What shakes me up is that I don't remember her saying those words to me, and I remember everything she told me as a kid." And Sisto says, "I don't think it's good to put this much thought into it. It just seems unhealthy." And Iris says, "I agree. You're not alone on this. You have us and the entire Star Lab staff to help you find the best way to use your powers." Barry smiles and says, "Thanks, guys." Sisto stands up, heading towards the fridge, with Sisto saying, "And on that note, we have not had time yet today to address the elephant in the room. Iris, let's see that hand." Iris smiles and shows off her hand with her engagement ring on her finger. Sisto gets 3 beers from the fridge, saying, "Hell yeah, baby. We're celebrating tonight." Iris and Barry both laugh, and Sisto hands them beers, and they clash bottles with a cheers, which then transitions to them clashing bottles at Big Belly Burger in Central City. Sisto says, "So when's the wedding happening?" Barry says, we haven't gotten that far yet." All of a sudden, someone wraps each of their arms around Barry and Iris, revealing Wally. Wally says, "What's up, losers?" Everyone greets Wally, with Iris saying, "Wally, what are you doing here? You can't drink." Wally says, "It's close enough. Besides, I didn't want to miss out on the after party." Iris smiles and rolls her eyes, and she sarcastically says, "Fine, you can hang out with us, but you're not drinking, okay?" Wally sarcastically says, all right, Mom. Cuts to later in the night of a basketball game on the TV, and everyone in the bar wearing Miner jerseys, Miner like the coal miner, and they cheer when one of the players hits a clutch 3 on the buzzer beater to win the game. Sisto ecstatically shows Barry his phone. That was the last one I needed for my parlay! All of a sudden, the TV switches over to an emergency report. The news anchor saying, we're just getting word that an abnormally sized tornado formed out of nowhere just outside Central City and is rapidly approaching the inner city. Iris and Sisto look at Barry, and Wally looks confused. And Wally says, why are you guys looking at Barry? Everyone pauses for a moment, and Barry says, because I realized I forgot to take Gordon out. Cuts to Barry leaving the bar and activating his flash ring, phasing into his suit. Cuts back to Wally, Iris, and Sisto sitting in the shelter within Big Belly Birder. Wally says, you guys seemed unusually calm for there being a tornado in town. And Iris says, what makes you say that? And Wally says, because you would totally flip over the smallest things. Sisto, one time, Iris found a really small spider on her pillow and she refused to sleep in her room for like a week. And Iris says, shut up, Wally. Cuts to Barry speeding towards the tornado, getting on comms with Star Labs. Barry says, Doc, you there? Silas says, I'm here. We're already monitoring the energy signals from the tornado. Barry says, the weather people didn't pick it up. Could it be an anomaly? Silas says, it's possible. Right now, it doesn't seem any different other than the size. Barry says, either way, I'm glad I waited until the Miners won. Or Silas says, focus flash. Barry makes it to where the tornado is, getting close to the Miners basketball stadium, and people are already evacuating. Barry says, how's it looking, Doc? The tornado's getting close to the stadium. It must be a Kings fan. The people evacuating see the flash there and they start cheering. Silas says, we're still looking. You might be able to offset the winds by running in the opposite direction around the base of the tornado. Barry promptly speeds towards the tornado and begins running in the opposite direction of the tornado, when all of a sudden, a lightning strike from within the tornado hits Barry, sending him flying away from the tornado. Barry, sore, gets up. Barry says, it's definitely not normal, Doc. I just got hit by lightning before I could offset the winds. Wait, I'm gonna try something. Barry gets in position and begins rotating his arms at super speed to send strong gusts of wind at the tornado, only to realize it's doing absolutely nothing. Barry says, never mind, that didn't do shit. Any other ideas? At Star Labs reading the tornado, Silas sees a thermal reading from within the center of the tornado. Silas says, you've got to be joking. Barry sarcastically says, geez, Doc, forgive me for trying to be creative here. Silas says, not that. It was a dumb idea, but we're picking up a life form from within the tornado. Barry's like, what? Is it a person? Silas says, that's what it looks like, but it's not moving within the tornado, which is odd. Either way, try to stop the tornado without hurting whoever's inside, if they're still alive. Cuts to Barry speeding back to the tornado. Barry seriously says, way ahead of you. Barry starts speeding around the tornado again. Silas says, Barry, you already tried to speed around the tornado and you got hit by lightning. Barry says, well, you know what they say, lightning doesn't strike twice. Immediately after saying that, Barry gets hit by lightning again, but he doesn't get sent flying as far. He's quicker to get up and gets back to his route. Barry looks up towards the center of the tornado and sees someone suspended in midair. Barry says, I see him. I'm going to see if I can get up to him. Silas says, what about the lightning? Barry says, I'll just dodge it. And Silas says, you know how fast lightning is? Barry says, I know. Assuming it's normal, it could be as fast as 270,000 miles per hour, or approximately Mach 351, but it could be faster as an anomaly. Barry picks up even more speed and sees the next lightning strike come at him. His eyes glisten with lightning, you know, the wisp in his eye, and he abruptly does a spin move to avoid the lightning. He releases a sonic boom as he reaches top speed again. He looks back up at the person and does calculations from high up in the tornado the person is, and calculates the distance of the radius of the edges of the tornado to the person at the center. Barry then sees outside the tornado a lightning strike about to hit the Miners' head coach, who's been helping people evacuate. He abruptly turns in the opposite direction and uses the momentum of the tornado to leave the tornado. Barry races the lightning strike and makes it to the coach, shielding him from the lightning as Barry takes his third lightning strike. They both go flying, but Barry takes the impact, protecting the coach. The coach gets up, helping Barry up. Coach says, thank you, Flash. You saved me. Barry, out of breath, says, anytime, Coach. Good win tonight. Barry races back into the tornado, dodging some of the lightning and getting hit by others, but still racing on. Barry's still out of breath, saying, Doc, I'm still not doing much to stop this tornado. I'm gonna try one more thing. Sal says, Barry, you need to get out of there. I'm sure there's something at Star Labs that can do something about it. Barry says, no. Not until I save this guy. Barry leaves the tornado, running up the side of a nearby building. Towards the top of the building, Barry looks back at the tornado, remembering the calculations of where the person is within the tornado, and releases a sonic boom, jumping at super speed from the building and shattering the glass all around him, directly at where he's guessing the person is in the tornado. Just as the tornado approaches the Miners' stadium, Barry sees the person, revealing a homeless man, and the man looks startled to see Barry. Barry grabs him and launches themselves out of the tornado. Barry takes the impact of a collision into another building, and they fall onto a car. Barry strains as he looks back up at the tornado begins subsiding, which he's confused about. Barry helps the man up as the tornado disappears and everyone around them cheers on the Flash. Starla says, "You did it?" Barry says, "I guess." All of a sudden, the weather wizard wand falls out of the man's pocket. Barry looks down at it, concerned, recognizing it as an artifact he saw in the Flash Museum in the future. Startled, he looks back at the man who has an evil grin on his face. Barry says, "Did you do this?" The man, as fast as he can, reaches back down for the wand, but Barry, of course, stops him and kicks the wand away and speeds the two of them away into a pillar outside of a building. Barry looks pissed off at him. Barry seriously says, "Where did you get that wand? Where?" And the man says, "Happy Mother's Day, Flash." Barry freezes, easing his grip on the man as he fails to react to a punch in the face from the man. Barry, on the ground, is shaking. The man says, "Where is she at, Flash? Did you do something fun?" Barry begins crying as the onlookers from the stadium start approaching their general area, concerned. The man says, "Oh wait, that wouldn't make any sense. She's 6 feet under, isn't she?" A wave of rage washes over Barry. The man says, "Dead, Mom. Dead, Mom." The onlookers start hearing this as well and start jeering at the man. Cops start showing up too. Onlooker 1 says, "He just saved your life, asshole." And the second onlooker says, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" And the man says, "Dead, Mom." Barry's rage builds up even more, his eyes eventually completely lighting up yellow. He screams and instantly transports into a position, leaving a sonic boom and trail of lightning, and he is about to land a devastating punch on the man's face in slow motion. The punch lands in slow motion, knocking the man's teeth out, and the man gets sent flying, his head hitting and cracking on one of the pillars on the side of a building. Barry realizes what he's done, and everyone around him freaks out. Barry says, "Wait, I didn't." Everyone runs away, trying to get away from Barry, as Barry speeds over to the man's body, trying desperately to find signs of life. He gets a pulse reading, and he sighs in relief, but he's bleeding from his skull. Cop 1 says, "Freeze! Don't move!" Barry turns around to see several cops around him pointing their guns at Barry. Barry says, "Please, I didn't mean to punch him that hard. I held back. He's still alive. I have to save him." Cop 1 says, "I said don't move." Barry has an internal battle, eventually grabbing the man and speeding to a hospital, approaching the front desk while carrying the man. Barry is crying, and he says, "Please, save his life." Cuts to a different scene. Barry, still in the Flash suit, walks around the city away from people, and still hurt from all the lightning strikes he took from the tornado. He's revealed to be holding a bouquet of daisy red chrysanthemum flowers, the same kind from when he was a kid. Barry's face is wet from the tears he shed as the scene moves to Barry reaching Nora's gravestone, and he sets the flowers down. He's still in his suit, but he retracted his mask, revealing his face. Barry says, "Happy Mother's Day, Mom. I miss you." Barry sniffles and he says, "Every time I think I've moved on, I keep getting reminded of how I couldn't save you. And now because I couldn't do it, I might have killed a man tonight. Why couldn't I have saved you?" Barry collapses over his mom's stone, crying over the edge of the stone. The shot moves to face Barry with his head over the stone, and to the left in the distance, a spark of red lightning briefly forms. Then more trails of red lightning appear, eventually covering the silhouette of a man. The man starts walking towards Barry, and Barry eventually hears his footsteps and faces his direction. Barry says, "Who are you?" The mysterious man says, "Life. How cruel it can be. You could perform a score of miracles, be the greatest hero that ever lived, but it only takes one mistake to tear it all apart." Barry says, "What?" The man says, "I should know. A great man I once looked up to made me lose everything, when all I wanted to do was be a hero. Can you understand my suffering?" Barry says, "No, I don't. What are you talking about?" The man leans into the lit up area, revealing an identical suit to Barry's, only that the main color on his suit is a faded yellow. He looks to be a little younger than middle-aged, and the guy says, "You will." Barry says, "What the hell?" The man starts forming red lightning around him again, revealing more of his suit, eventually revealing an identical lightning emblem on his chest. Only the lightning bolt is red, and the inner parts of his circle emblem is black instead of white, and the lightning bolt is facing the other direction. The man says, "This is but a fraction of the plans I have for you. You killed a man tonight, Barry, and you're gonna pay." Barry says, "You know me? And you don't know that he's dead. He was still alive after I punched him." The man says, "Oh, I know you. I know everything about you." Barry has a realization, and he shudders, saying, "Eobard?" Thawne opens his eye darts, revealing his red eyes. Thawne says, 20 years. I spent in Iron Heights, but I never forgot about the one who put me there. Barry says, well, it's only been a little over 20 hours for me, and I already forgot all about you. Thawne instantly speed blitzes into Barry, knocking over Nora's gravestone, and the two skid across the ground of the graveyard. Thawne growls in his face. Barry strains, and he says, why'd you come back here? You're still not over me? Am I to guess that you brought the Weather Wizard wand with you, and you paid that guy too? That's how he knew about my mom? Thawne smiles and says, seems you haven't forgotten about me after all. I'm honored. As your biggest fan. Barry says, it seemed like to me that you're going through a lot of effort just to get to me. Why not just kill me? Thawne scowls and says, unfortunately, it's not that simple. It then cuts to a flashback at Iron Heights in the year 2499. A prison guard sits in the control booth reading a digitalized newspaper when another guard walks in. Guard number 2 says, you hear they're finally transporting Thawne to a different prison? Guard 1 says, are you serious? Thank God. They should have moved that freakazoid years ago. Who's gonna tell him? Guard 2 pauses and says, not me. It then cuts to a deeper level of the prison of Guard 1 walking towards a highly advanced cell which is surrounded by layers of safety walls. There's a door leading to the first layer, in which the fob reader is riddled with dust, implying that no one has been down there in a long time. The guard eventually makes it to the door leading inside the cell. Inside, Thawne is revealed with his head down, with power dampeners surrounding his whole body but his head. The guard shakes his head in disbelief and gets ready to bang on the door. And Thawne says, I'm already awake, officer. What brings you down here? And Guard 1 says, I'm just here to tell you they're moving your sick ass to another prison. Thawne says, aw, but I've so enjoyed my time here. The guard stops and starts to leave. And Thawne says, leaving so soon? Thawne looks up, his face looking noticeably skinny. The guard, fuming, looks away from his face. Thawne says, you can't keep me company for just a few minutes? It's nice to hear other voices besides my own. Don't tell me you're still upset about what happened to that other guard a few years back. Guard 1 says, his name was Jerry, you sick bastard, and he was my best friend. Thawne says, well, if anything, I did all of you a favor to get you to hire better guards. Dying to me when I didn't even have my powers. The guard seethes with rage, but restrains against opening Thawne's cell. Guard 1 says, I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to lure me into a cell to plan an escape route. That's what you did last time when you killed Jerry. Thawne says, well, I can't say I didn't try my best. Guard 1 says, all this time in here, you still don't have any imagination? To think you were once Central City's protector makes my skin crawl. Thawne begins laughing, making Guard 1 finally face Thawne again, noticing how skinny his face is. Guard 1 says, wait, how are you looking like that? I know you've been getting the feeding tubes. Guard 1 finally unlocks Thawne's cell and goes inside, approaching him to get a better look at his face. Thawne says, imagination. You know, somebody also told me that many years ago. Guard 1 gets his futuristic gun out and points it at Thawne as he slowly approaches him. Guard 1 says, are you finding a way to reject the feeding tubes? Trying to starve yourself? You don't get to take the easy way out. Thawne says, of course not. I have so many plans for my life once I get out of here. You know, I do get sad sometimes when nobody wants to come visit me. I mean, I get it. You value your lives, so you stay away from me. But a word of advice, if I may suggest, is that the biggest problems in your life that you neglect. All of a sudden, the guard gets impaled through his heart by a vibrating arm blade as a jump scare. Behind him, Thawne is revealed to be in his version of his flash suit. And Thawne says, are the ones that come back to bite the hardest. The guard once sputters, saying, how? Thawne says, you say I lack imagination, yet for years none of you ever noticed the mirage I left behind in this cell once your power dampening equipment stopped working. The truth is, I escaped here after I killed Jerry. I'm just doing this for fun now. Thawne slashes his arm blade to the side, leaving a trail of blood on the wall of the cell. He smiles as his mirage, which disappears, phasing back into his own body. Red lightning forms around him, and he speeds away from his cell, instantly speeding around the entirety of Iron Heights and having a brief montage of him killing any prison guard he can find. He finds the last one, Guard 2, in the control room, and he gives him a maniacal wide smile, removing his red eye guards, showing off gleaming red eyes. There is now a POV view of Guard 2 staring at Thawne standing there, his suit soaked in blood, beaming at him. In an instant, there's another jump scare of Thawne instantly transporting to Guard 2's location to kill him. Cuts back to Thawne and Barry back in the Central City graveyard. Barry says, what happened to you, Thawne? Thawne says, there's still so much to show you, Barry. But first, I've waited 20 years for this. Thawne delivers a supersonic punch to Barry's face, getting into slow motion and eventually a freeze frame as Barry's face is thrown to the side and blood comes from his mouth. Time picks up again and Thawne begins beating Barry senseless, with super speed punches thrown all around Barry's body, eventually breaking his nose and one of his legs, until Barry eventually stops reacting to the hits. Barry's face is soaked in blood and Thawne grabs it, with Thawne saying, "You're ready now." Thawne speeds away from the graveyard, dragging Barry behind him. Thawne quickly enters the Speed Force with Barry, and Barry, barely unconscious, sees around him that it looks different. There are several traces of red around the normally space-looking Speed Force. Thawne lets go of Barry, and he goes skidding across the ground. He has no strength but tries to crawl towards Thawne, in which Thawne rolls his eyes. Thawne says, "Just stop. You want me to explain what I've been up to?" Barry stops moving and looks up at him, barely able to even see. Thawne says, "We're back in my timeline, and as you can see, I did some renovations to the Speed Force." Barry sputters and says, "Why is it red?" Thawne says, "Well, I've figured out a way to change the Speed Force. Something I learned is that there's more to it than just traveling to the past or the future. When I told you this place exists outside time, I eventually figured out it also exists past space, past universes. Basically, I can travel the multiverse to alternate dimensions, find different versions of us." And Barry says, "I don't give a shit. Why is the Speed Force red?" Thawne says, "Well, it turns out, with the death of a speedster who feeds off the energy of the Speed Force, it corrupts it, makes it irrational, and most importantly, allows events in time, paradoxes, to unfold without needing any kind of causation. Come here. Let me show you something." Thawne opens up a portal to a pocket dimension, similar to the pocket dimension from the Superman 2025 movie. Thawne throws Barry on the floor, and Barry looks up, immediately taken aback by the sight he's seeing. It's revealed to be at least hundreds of dead bodies, all of them wearing the Flash suit. One of the bodies is shown having his eyes gouged out. Barry looks up at Thawne, horrified. Thawne looks out into the crowd of bodies, and Thawne says, "Welcome to my new Flash museum. It's a fantasy I have, killing you. I can't though, at least not yet. The Speed Force is a funny thing. It allows paradoxes like us to exist, but there has to be a causation." Barry says, "What? What do you mean by paradox?" And Thawne says, "Have you ever wondered why at times you're able to sense certain things and events better than others? Put a tiny piece of glass together only by intuition, even before you got your powers. Why do you think that bolt of lightning was attracted to you?" Barry thinks about it but can't give an answer. And Thawne says, "I'll tell you. It's because at some point as the Flash, you interacted with yourself in the past, giving yourself a tiny sliver of your power, allowing yourself to unlock your full potential later in life. I should know because I did the same to myself in the past, which sparked my past self's interest in you. I could not, however, organically recreate your accident by striking myself with lightning, and it wasn't until I created the particle accelerator and doused myself in the same chemicals you were hit with that I was finally given access to my powers." And Barry is in disbelief. And Thawne continues, "Like I said, the Speed Force does allow for paradoxes, but only if the causation can be supported by the events unfolding in the natural order of time. I found that out when I killed the first version of you. Myself, from that universe, ceased to exist as well, because everything I did was caused by you, though some only lost their powers. I've been to countless universes and killed so many of you, and not once was that not the outcome. Even if I let you become the Flash of that timeline, I learned that the natural order of time would refuse my existence if you were to die. That made me realize that I truly am at your mercy, bound by you, as I had dedicated my entire life to being like you." Thawne begins slowly walking towards the crowd of bodies, still speaking. "What I've learned, though, is that if I corrupt the Speed Force enough, I can eliminate the causation of my existence and remove the chains you've put on me, and finally be free from you. I made a vow that if I couldn't be you, I would instead be your reverse. I will no longer be limited by your existence, and my presence on the timeline will be absolute." All of a sudden, one of the bodies of the Flash grabs his leg, revealing to be an identical version of Barry. Thawne scoffs, kicking his hand away. With Thawne distracted, Barry desperately crawls behind one of the pillars, trying to hide. Barry takes quick breaths and feels his heart rate, which is even beating at super speed, trying desperately to keep his cool. He looks up at one of the walls of the pocket dimension, though, revealing another version of him having been crucified on not a cross, but a giant symbol of the Flash, which is a very upsetting sight, obviously. This sends him over the edge, and Barry hyperventilates at the sight of this and promptly looks away, peeking around the pillar at Thawne, confronting the Flash who tried to stop him. And Thawne says, "Guess you still had some life left in you, huh? Did I forget to take your speed?" The alternate Flash stands up and looks at him in rage, throwing a super speed punch at Thawne, in which Thawne easily catches without batting an eye. Thawne then vibrates his hand, phasing it through the alternate Flash's chest, and he grabs his heart. Barry is startled by this. Thawne says, "My hand is placed around your heart. Unless you want to die even more painfully than you will, I wouldn't move." Thawne then vibrates his hand at super speed, showing yellow lightning being drained from the alternate Flash into Thawne's body as he screams in pain. Eventually, the alternate Flash stops screaming and his life force looks drained. Thawne's yellow lightning he collected turns red. He vibrates his hand again and slashes at the alternate Flash's neck, cutting away from the shot as the alternate Flash's headless body drops and thuds onto the ground. Thawne looks around, looking for Barry. He stops again, instantly speeding around the pocket dimension until he finds Barry hiding. Thawne says, "You know, now that I see you sitting here now, I gotta say you're pretty disappointing." Barry's choked up and says, "How did you become like this? You were a hero." And Thawne says, "That's not what you told me." Thawne gets a rope and ties it around Barry's mouth. Barry muffles, trying to plead to him. Thawne says, "We're not done here yet, I'm afraid. The thing is, for you to be you, and me to be me, certain events in time have to take place." Thawne takes Barry's leg and speeds off with him back into the Speed Force, and the scene cuts to black. Fades into the next scene in a POV view of Barry trying to open his eyes. Thawne says, "Wake up, Barry. Can you guess where we are?" Barry wakes up, still with the rope tied around his mouth. He recognizes the field he's in on a certain evening with the sun starting to set. There's a quick shot of young Barry and his father, Henry, throwing the football in the backyard close to the field. Barry has a realization and starts muffling screams. Thawne chuckles evilly and drags Barry's leg again, instantly transporting in between young Barry and Henry. Time stops for a moment as everyone's in a freeze frame. In the freeze frame, Barry sees his younger self not reacting to the super speed in front of him, and Barry desperately reaches his arm out to him. A small trickle of lightning leaves Barry's hand and transfers to young Barry's body, making a wisp of electricity appear in his eyes as time resumes, and Thawne in super speed drags Barry around the Allen's house and through the front door of their home. In the house, Nora gets jump-scared by the sudden appearance of the evil speedster. Nora gets ready to yell out, but Thawne stops her. Thawne says, "Stop. You'll scream when I want you to scream, unless you want this entire city block to die." Barry sees Nora in front of her and tries to call out to her through the rope, to no avail. Nora sees Barry on the ground but doesn't recognize him as an adult. Nora says, "What do you want?" And Thawne says, "I want to live in a timeline where I can be free." Thawne then speeds around the house, making Nora collapse onto the floor. Barry sees Thawne speeding around and tries to crawl towards Nora before Thawne abruptly returns with a knife and latex glove, walking towards Nora. Thawne says, "Sorry, I just needed to grab your husband's fingerprints." Nora quickly gets up, trying to back away from Thawne as she grabs a wine bottle, all while Barry is still trying to desperately crawl towards them with his broken leg and other still very severely injured body parts, and muffling, pleading, agonized cries. Nora swings the wine bottle at Thawne, but Thawne easily catches her wrist, making the wine bottle fall, but Thawne catches the bottle before it crashes to the ground. He politely puts the bottle back before stabbing Nora through the heart. Barry screams as loud as he can, which is still quiet because of the rope around his mouth. He tries to phase his head out of the rope to get free. Nora is taken aback as Thawne drags her through the dining room area. Then he twists the knife in her heart and takes it out. Nora falls to the ground, quickly forming a puddle of blood around her, as Barry finally is able to free himself from the rope around his mouth and reach Nora by crawling to her. He shudders and shakes in agony as he looks down at his dying mother. He tries desperately to get the word "Mom" out before Nora speaks to him. Nora finally recognizes him. "Barry?" And Barry says, "Mom, yeah, it's me." And Nora says, "Look at you. You're all grown up." Barry has a realization and looks at her longingly. Barry says, "I'm so sorry, Mom. This is all my fault." Nora says, "Barry, don't you dare blame yourself. Whatever might have happened leading up to this." Barry says, "How can I not blame myself?" And Nora says, "Because I already know what kind of man you become. Now, what did I tell you earlier? Barry pauses, and Nora says, earlier tonight. Barry shudders and says that I can use my gifts to help people. Nora says, Barry, I was never concerned about that. I can see just by looking at you that that's always been a natural part of who you are. What did I tell you before that? Barry thinks for a moment in a frenzy. Nora says, don't forget what I told you. Barry then hears Fry's voice in his head. Fry says, no matter what happens to you, all the troubles you go through, she wants you to experience the freedom of life in your own way and be free to be yourself. And you know exactly what that freedom is to you. And then a brief flashback that shows Nora repeating her words to young Barry. Nora says, don't ever think about being anything other than exactly as you are, Barry. I love and adore you for who you are. Returns from the flashback, and Barry says, I need to be myself. All this time, I've been obsessed with trying to do good and make people like me that I forgot how it felt to achieve that authentically. Nora says, no, you didn't. The only thing you haven't done is let people help you when you need it. Even heroes need help sometimes. Barry says, how do you know all this? Nora says, I'm a mother, Barry. I know everything. They both chuckle sadly, and Nora starts crying quietly. And Nora says, I'm so proud of you. All of a sudden, Thawne takes more rope and chokes Barry with it, slowly dragging him away from his mother as he gags and struggles to breathe, reaching his hand out to her. And Thawne says, all right, Nora, you can scream now. Remember your city block. Nora has a look of conviction on her face as she lets out a blood-curdling scream that cuts to the backyard where young Barry and Henry react to it and immediately dash towards the house. In the house, Thawne hoists Barry up with the rope. He says, time to go. Thawne speeds away with Barry, making Barry's body collide with a wall near the front door, breaking off a piece of it as Thawne speeds through their neighborhood, quickly getting back to the Speed Force as Barry's face is blank. It then cuts to Thawne and Barry returning to the present, and Thawne tosses Barry onto Nora's gravestone. Barry struggles to breathe as he lies down helplessly. Thawne says, one last bit of info before I go. All that bullying you went through in school, I paid them to do that to you. Your foster mom's car crash, I slashed her brakes. Daryl's first bottle that kick-started his alcoholism, I stole it from the store. All of it was me, Barry. While he's saying this, a montage of those different clips plays as Thawne reveals this. And Barry looks up at him in absolute rage. And Thawne says, and yeah, you know this by now, but your dad's imprisonment was also me. Basically, I'm trying to tell you, don't mess with me again, Barry. You have no idea how much more suffering I can make you go through. Trust me. I'm much more creative now. Thawne speeds directly next to Barry, kneeling over him. And Thawne says, and one more thing. My plan now is to go back into the Speed Force and kill even more versions of you until the Speed Force is fully corrupted so I can finally kill you. In the meantime, I don't need you following me into the Speed Force, so I'm going to take your speed. Thawne faces his hand into Barry's body and grabs onto his heart. He then promptly vibrates his hand at super speed, making Barry's yellow lightning fuse with Thawne's red lightning as Barry screams in pain. Thawne eventually stops, groaning in satisfaction. Thawne says, looks like I couldn't steal all of it, but now you're a fraction of the speedster you used to be. I'll see you around, Flash. Next time I see you, I'll see if I'll be as generous as I've been now regarding a certain lady friend of yours. Thawne promptly speeds away, back into the Speed Force, as Barry lies helplessly, facing the night sky. He strains heavily as he tries to sit up, coughing up blood as he tries. He seethes in pain as he sits up and reaches for his broken leg, screaming as he tries to snap it back in place. He uses what little super speed energy and regenerative healing he has left to mend his leg into place. Barry looks up into the sky again and sees a similar image from the Speed Force of a flashback showing himself, Fry, and the therapist, where the therapist again says, Barry, no one blames you for what happened to your mother. Barry then says, then why can't I shake this feeling that every bad thing that's happened to me is my fault? And Fry says, we can figure that out together. I never asked you to do this alone. Barry sees another image in another part of the sky, showing himself from Star Labs. He says, just so you know, I do blame myself for what happened. Even if I do end up screwing things up for myself permanently, like you said, nothing I could ever do will ever be worse than what I've done already. All I can do now is atone for that. Another image shows Barry sending his supersonic punch at the man who used the Weather Wizard wand and sending him flying. The flashback then shows Silas speaking to Barry, and Silas says, you should know that there's a difference between simply blaming yourself and taking responsibility for what happened. The difference is that by taking responsibility, you own up to your mistake and grow from it, not dwell on it and never move on. That's what makes a hero. The flashback moves to a different scene. Silas says, Barry, what do you want to do with your gifts? Barry looks intently at Silas, still out of breath, and Barry says, I want to help people. Why do you want to help people? people. Obviously because it's the right thing to do. It then cuts to earlier when Barry stopped the tornado. Barry says, I didn't mean to punch him that hard. I held back. He's still alive. I have to save him. And then Silas's voice chimes in. Everyone wants to help people. Be a hero until it becomes a little too inconvenient, a little too hard. You may save hundreds of thousands, hell, even millions of people in your lifetime as a metahuman, but the moment you screw up even once, the people will never forget. They will remember not the countless good deeds you've done, only the singular mistake you made. That will be your legacy forever. Barry sees the now multiple images in the sky that played these flashback clips as he struggles to stand up. Then cuts to him walking through the city, phasing his mask back on. He sees an outdoor display playing a news segment. News anchor says, after the Flash saved a man trapped in a tornado in downtown Central City, he then sent him flying with a punch after being provoked by the man, sending him to the hospital. The man, having suffered brain damage from the punch, is confirmed to have died from his injuries in the hospital. Is the Flash dangerous after all? A threat to Central City if his emotions can't be kept in check? Barry looks away from the screen as he keeps walking through town, cutting to a new scene of him returning to the scene of the crime where the police officers still are. They see Barry and point their guns at Barry. Barry raises his hands in surrender, still having a blank face. Cop 1 says, my God, what happened to you? Barry doesn't answer as the officers put handcuffs on him. Cop 2 says, you promise not to break out of these cuffs? And Barry says, can I just ask you guys one thing? Cop 1 says, what is it? Barry says, I'd like to visit someone. There's a flashback to Barry visiting Henry, where Henry says, you're going to try and find new evidence for my case, aren't you? Barry says, of course I am. They didn't even try to find the actual killer. You were just the most convenient story they had. Somebody needs to serve some actual justice here if no one else will. It then cuts to the visiting cell where Henry comes out and sees Barry still in the Flash suit on the phone ready to talk to him. Henry says, Flash? What are you doing here? Barry phases the mask off, revealing his identity to Henry, and Barry's face is still a mess. Henry says, oh my God, Barry. What's wrong? Barry shudders and says, Dad, I know who killed Mom. Henry looks at Barry with deep concern, and Barry says, it was me. It cuts to an artist facility where Barry is sitting in a jumpsuit in the cell that he's in. And at this point, he looks mostly recovered from what happened. He hears visitors coming in, and they're revealed to be Iris, Cisco, Wally, Joe, and Silas. Barry says, guys? Iris approaches Barry and hugs him deeply. And Barry also sees Wally and Joe. Barry says, wait, you guys know about me? And Wally says, yeah, I figured it out. Turns out these two suck at keeping your secret. And Joe says, and if you're gonna marry my daughter, I need to know about these things. Sisto says, there's good news though, Barry. We've been looking into some evidence that can clear you up. Barry sighs and says, guys, I appreciate everything you've done, but please don't bother with that. That guy is dead because of me, and I need to take responsibility for that. Silas says, yeah, I thought you might say that. So I did some digging anyway, and spoke with the hospital staff that worked on him. One of the nurses says, when they brought the man in, he did suffer brain damage from the collision to the pillar, but they got him in a stable condition, and he was even projected to make a recovery, possibly even a full one after some years, before they found him dead later that night. What's even weirder is that when they looked up his background info, they couldn't find anything, not even a birth certificate. It's like he never existed at all. Barry stops and he says, or hasn't existed yet. Iris says, Barry, what happened? What do you know? Barry says, everything now. He was here. Thawne was here. He brought the Weather Wizard one back to the past with him, as well as the guy, so we could pay him to mess with me. That's how he knew about my mom. Everyone looks at Barry, and they're puzzled by this. And Barry says, I have a lot to tell you. It cuts to Silas in the front lobby finalizing a payment, and Barry's walking out with the crew. And Barry says, I don't feel good being bailed out like this. And Silas says, they said it's conditional, giving us time to find more evidence, and follow up more with the hospital as long as you don't use your powers. Barry says, but you said it yourself, Doc. I need to take responsibility for my mistakes, and that's what I'm trying to do. Besides, like you said, I can't use my powers anyway. The crew stops to face him, and Joe steps up. Joe says, Barry, we believe you when you told us Thawne killed your mother and framed your father. You just need to find a way to convince everyone else. The justice system failed you once. It wouldn't be right for it to fail you again if there's more evidence that can be found that could help you. And Wally says, yeah, let us help you, man. Barry hears Nora's voice in his head, and she says, even heroes need help sometimes. Barry nods in understanding, and everyone looks excited. And Silas says, your job is to find out how to get your speed back and leave the legal stuff to Joe and I. Once we get this figured out, then you can do everything you can to get back into the Speed Force and beat Thawne's ass. That's how you're going to take responsibility. It then cuts to Barry and Iris looking at each other, and Iris speaks up. And Iris says, so, you know for a fact that she's proud of you, right? And Barry says, yeah. I'm sorry that you reminding me of that wasn't good enough for me at the time. And Iris says, well, as long as you know that now. Barry says, look, I don't want you, Joe, and Wally getting involved in this. This guy's dangerous, not to mention he threatened you. And Iris says, Barry, you need to trust us. Trust me, like how I trust you. Like it or not, we're already in this together if Thawne already knows about us. Barry says, but what if he... And Iris says, that's not going to happen, because I believe in you, remember? I know how hard you fight for the ones you love. Barry says, thanks, Iris. And Iris says, so, you're a little bit slower now, but you've still got to have some ideas about how to get your powers back with that supercomputer brain of yours. And Barry says, I actually have an idea. It's really stupid, though. And Iris says, I wouldn't expect any less from you. Barry and Iris meet back with Wally and Cisco. And Wally says, so are you guys finally done making out now so we can get going? It then cuts to the top of Star Labs where there's a giant antenna on the roof. And Cisco says, so what is your plan exactly? And what do we need this for? Cisco takes the Weather Wizard 1 out of his pocket. And Barry says, Thawne told me he didn't get his connection to the Speed Force until he recreated my accident practically to a T, even using the same chemicals that hit me. And Wally says, so you need the chemicals again? And Barry says, I don't think so. I'm still technically a speedster, even though I can barely hit Mach 1 now, so my connection to the Speed Force hasn't been completely severed. So I could try to get to the Speed Force even now, and maybe get into it if the speed required to tune into it is at a level that's doable for me right now. But of course, I wouldn't stand a chance against Thawne right now, even without factoring how much speed he's stolen from the alternate versions of me. And Cisco says, so why are we up here? And Barry says, I'm going to get the Speed Force to notice me again. See if it'll restore my speed. That's what I need that for. And Barry points at the Weather Wizard 1. And Iris says, you don't mean... And Barry says, unfortunately. It then cuts to a shirtless Barry being tied up to the antenna. And Iris says, just for the record, when you said you had a stupid plan, I didn't think it could actually be dumber than what I could have possibly imagined. And Barry says, sorry, Iris, but when I got struck by those lightning bolts from the Weather Wizard Tornado, I did feel surges of power and my speed increasing. So this isn't based on nothing. And Wally says, well, I think this is a great idea, Barry. It then cuts to Silas and Joe at the hospital, and they approach the front desk and Joe shows his police badge. Joe says, hi there. We were hoping to look at some video footage from one of the rooms. Cuts back to the crew at Star Labs. Cisco readies up the Weather Wizard 1 and swirls it around, steadily forming storm clouds over Star Labs. Barry looks up, trying to prepare himself. And Barry says, come on, just give me one more chance. At the hospital, Joe and Silas are reviewing the camera footage in the hospital room the man stayed in. Silas says, you seen anything out of whack? Joe says, no, nothing yet. Eventually, though, there is a brief flash of lightning that enters the room, taking out the signal of the camera. And Silas and Joe lean back in frustration. Joe says, Barry didn't go back to the hospital, did he? And Silas says, even if he did, at the time he wouldn't have been fast enough to generate enough energy and voltage from his lightning to take out the cameras. Joe says, you think? And Silas says, who else could it be? Cisco manipulates the Weather Wizard 1 more. And Cisco says, last chance to back out of this, Flash. Barry says, do it! Cisco waves the wand down, and a huge bolt of lightning strikes Barry in slow motion. This time, it also shows Iris, Cisco, and Wally shielding themselves from the light and reacting in their own way as Barry screams in pain from the lightning, but also getting a huge surge of power. Iris notices sparks of lightning starting to leak from the antenna. And Iris says, Star Labs can't handle this much power. Jesus, Cisco, how much power did you send down at him? And Cisco says, how should I know? Barry, still being electrocuted, gets yellow lightning to form around him again as his eyes glow yellow. He gets his wisp of lightning in his eyes, and he looks to the right, seeing that the leaking lightning is about to put Iris, Cisco, and Wally in danger. He growls and screams again, this time with determination as his skin is starting to burn, same as the time he first got hit all that time ago in the CCPD lab. The crew sees the leaking sparks of lightning eventually quit advancing towards them and retracting towards Barry. Wally says, is he absorbing all of that? Barry continues screaming as the bolt of lightning eventually stops once Barry has absorbed every last bit of the energy of the blast, making him pass out. Iris says, Barry! The crew rushes over to an unconscious Barry and frantically unties him from the antenna where he's hot to the touch and several parts of his body are now burnt. They gently lie him down and Iris tries to get him to wake up as sound muffles out and quiets down. There's now a view facing down at Barry's burnt face that transitions to him lying in an empty white space looking normal, not burnt. A single daisy red chrysanthemum flower is seen floating down and landing on Barry's face, making him twitch and wake up. He looks around him, seeing that the entirety of this space is all white. Even the ground he lies on is not visible. He looks ahead and sees a woman in the distance. He gets up, walking towards her, and he's confused. Barry says, hello? Barry eventually reaches her, and the woman turns around, revealing to be Nora holding a bouquet of daisy red chrysanthemum flowers. He got her all those years ago for Mother's Day. And Barry smiles sweetly at her. Barry says, hi, Mom. Nora says, hi, sweetheart. And Barry says, where are we? Is this the Speed Force? And Nora says, I'm the Speed Force, actually. Barry chuckles softly, and Nora says, it seems you knew that already. Barry says, yeah. It's why I kept hearing your voice when I tried to get into the Speed Force, hearing those words you spoke to me that I couldn't remember. And Nora says, yes, this is the form you'd chosen for me, even after all this time? And Barry says, what is time, really? Too many laws and inconsistencies to keep up with, honestly. Nora puts her hand on Barry's face, and she asks, have you been well? Barry shudders but nods, doing his best to respond. Barry says, yeah, I've been great. Iris and I are engaged. Nora says, that's wonderful, dear. I'm so happy for you. And Barry says, yeah, I have some real good friends, too. Sisto, you'd love him. He's a hoot. Hey, and I've been keeping up with my laps, too. I'm doing a lot of those nowadays. Nora smiles and says, that's great, honey. Getting your body caught up to your mind, right? Barry laughs and says, oh, yeah. Actually, it's funny you should mention that. Someone recently told me after I got my powers that my mind sometimes couldn't quite keep up with my body. You know, Nora can't help but laugh with him. Once they've laughed with each other, Barry looked serious again. Barry says, I miss you, Mom. Every day. I'm so sorry that I couldn't save you. Nora says, it's not worth it to dwell on the things you once couldn't do or control. Like you said, time's a funny thing. We live, we grow older, no matter what order on the timeline we take. Happy moments, regrets will always exist, but the best way you can atone for those regrets is just forgive yourself and fight for something that you can protect now. Barry nods in understanding, and Nora says, now, you're here for your powers, correct? I mean, you put in all that effort just to get my attention, right? Barry cracks up and says, I mean, I won't say no. Nora's eyes all of a sudden glow bright blue.
Think fast.
All of a sudden, all kinds of multicolored cosmic energy begins transferring from Nora over to Barry as massive flashes of light come out of his body, which then strike different parts of the white void, making the Speed Force start appearing as if painting a canvas. Eventually, a large energy wave booms from Barry, revealing the whole Speed Force once again. Only this time, there are several traces of red bleeding in this space-looking environment, even more than before, since the bleeding red has been slowly seeping into several different parts of the timeline, including Barry's time. Barry looks concerned and looks back at Nora, who is out of breath. Nora says, I'm sorry, I couldn't give you all your speed back. You have around 90% of it. And Barry says, it's okay, you don't need to push yourself. And Nora says, Thon's corruption of the Speed Force is weakening me. I won't be able to protect you for long. And Barry says, how do I undo his corruption? And Nora says, the people need a hero flash. They've been missing out on one. The Speed Force begins fizzling out as Nora slowly backs away from Barry. And Nora says, the next time you enter the Speed Force, I wonder whose voice you'll hear. And Barry says, what do you mean? And Nora says, look to the future, hun, not the past. Barry reaches out to her, transitioning to him waking up with a jolt on Star Lab's roof with his burn marks on his body healing instantly and small amounts of lightning generating beneath him. And Iris says, oh my god. Sisto says, how do you feel, man? Barry, out of breath, says, like the Flash. At the hospital, Joe and Silas walk through the hospital hallways and Silas gets a call. Hello? And Iris says, hey, we got Barry's speed back. At least most of it. Silas is surprised. Says, wow. Actually, at this point, nothing should surprise me when it comes to all of you. It shows the crew with Iris's phone on speaker mode now in one of the rooms in Star Labs. And Barry says, how's it coming along on your end? Silas says, we're still at the hospital. We haven't gathered sufficient evidence yet, but we're close. We reviewed some camera footage and definitely think Thon tampered with things here. The crew looks at each other in concern. And Iris says, thanks for letting us know, Dr. Stone. Call us back if you get anything. Iris hangs up on the phone and Wally says, what now? You have your speed back, but you can't use it until your name gets cleared. And Barry says, we use this time to think of a plan. When I saw my mom in the Speed Force, she said I wasn't able to get all my speed back due to Thon's corruption, but I can reverse it somehow and get more of it back that way. And Sisto says, how? Barry says, the exact words she said were, the people need a hero flash. They've been missing out on one. Wally says, that feel vague to anyone else? And Barry says, wait, Thon told me he figured out how to travel the multiverse, and all the versions of me Thon killed all came from those different universes. And he did this through the Speed Force. Even accessed pocket universes, which was where his collection was. How would he have done that though? Barry goes up to a whiteboard and draws a straight line up. Barry says, this is an aerial view of how the Speed Force looks. Go up to go to the future and go down to go to the past. Wally says, that seems simple enough. Barry has a realization. Wait, Wally. Say that again? And Wally says, what? That seems simple enough? And Barry says, everything is a lot simpler for us speedsters. Maybe? Barry draws two perpendicular arrows coming from the straight up line. And Barry says, there's no way it's that easy though, right? Sisto says, talk to us. We're still lost. Barry says, you guys just helped me figure out how to travel the multiverse. The Speed Force exists outside space and time. Time being the timeline going up and down, and space being the multiverse going left and right. The people need a hero flash. They've been missing out on one. She's talking about the universes in which Thon killed their Flash. I have to travel the multiverse and help them. That's how I undo the corruption. Save the Speed Force. I couldn't save my mom. but I can save countless others. A brief flashback shows high school Barry out on a run when he passes by an older lady looking for something in her bag with her grandson. He eventually comes across some car keys, picks them up, and runs back to the lady. High school Barry says, "Ma'am, are these your keys?" The older lady looks ecstatic, and the older lady says, "Oh my goodness, yes. Thank you so much, sir." And Barry says, "No problem, ma'am. You have a good one." Barry starts running again, and the grandson says, "Who was that, Grandma?" And the older lady says, "That right there is a hero." Sidetracking a little bit, I just wanted to share that to be a potential scene in this movie because that's actually a real life experience that I had recently when I was out on a run. There was a lady who dropped her keys and I returned them to her, and it felt really good being called something like that. Barry smiles, and overhearing that, the flashback ends, and Barry says, "By being myself." At the hospital, Silas and Joe reach one of the nurses they had previously spoken to, and Joe says, "Hey there, I'm with CCPD. We had previously spoken about what happened to the man who passed away the other night. His name was Marco Martin. We just reviewed some video footage for his hospital room, and I believe it was tampered with. Is the main nurse you worked with working today?" The nurse says, "Yes, actually, that's her over there." Joe and Silas turn around, and they see the nurse who looked startled looking at them. She starts whistling and tries to act casual when turning around to walk the other direction. Joe and Silas look at each other with suspicion, and Silas says, "I mean, that couldn't be more obvious, right?" Joe says, "Ma'am, could you give us a moment?" The nurse pretends to not hear them and turns a corner, bolting through the hallway. And Joe says, "Oh, come on!" Joe and Silas start taking off when Silas gets another phone call. He scowls and answers it. Silas says, "Now's not really the best time." Barry over the phone says, "Doc, I know you and Joe are still busy gathering evidence from the hospital, but we just wanted to let you know that we have a plan figured out. I'm going to enter the Speed Force again and travel the multiverse." Silas stops, out of breath, and waves Joe on. Silas says, "Barry, you know you can't use your speed yet. Just give us more time before you do this. We're about to question one of the nurses who may be tied to all this as we speak. If we can get her to testify, we could clear your name as soon as a few days from now." Barry says, "Sorry, Doc, I can't afford to wait that long. I'm going to uncorrupt the Speed Force by visiting the universes Thawne went to and save as many people as I can, which will help me recover even more speed and hopefully gather enough to take on Thawne again." And Silas says, "How do you even know you can travel the multiverse? This is madness." And Barry says, "If Thawne can do it, so can I. I think I have it figured out." Silas says, "You think? Barry, you're risking jail time just to test out a hypothesis that may not even work." Barry laughs and says, "That's what science is all about, Doc. Listen, thank you for everything. I'll be expecting some good news when I get back." Silas hangs up the phone, scoffing and smiling. It then cuts to Joe catching up to the nurse, stopping her in her tracks. She panics and backs away. The main nurse says, "Please, don't hurt me." Joe says, Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to. I just need to talk to you." Silas catches up to Joe, still out of breath, very much comparing their difference in athleticism. Joe says, "What do you know about what happened that night with your patient that passed away?" The nurse looks terrified and refuses to answer. A brief flash of Thawne's evil, grinning face with piercing red eyes appears. The main nurse says, "He'll kill me." In Star Labs, there's a group hug between Barry, Iris, Cisco, and Wally. And Barry says, "I love you guys. If for some reason Thawne comes back here, get to a safe spot, somewhere he won't find you." The crew understands, and Barry puts his flash ring back on his finger, activating it and phasing back into his flash suit. He speeds away, running through the streets of Central City. He passes by a cop car, and the cop in the car is startled by this. Cop 1 says, "Flash?" The cop 2 says, "He just violated his parole." The cop car activates its sirens and chases after Barry. While they drive, the cop 1 says, "How the hell you plan on catching up to him?" Barry races to the top of a large hill overlooking Central City, mirroring the view he had in the futuristic Central City. He looks into the distance and closes his eyes, where he starts hearing voices in his head. Nora's voice is repeated. "It's not worth it to dwell on the things you once couldn't do or control. Like you said, time's a funny thing. We live, we grow older, no matter what order on the timeline we take." And Silas's voice shows up. "There's a difference between simply blaming yourself and taking responsibility for what happened. The difference is that by taking responsibility, you own up to your mistake and grow from it, not dwell on it and never move on. That's what makes a hero." Barry shudders in his flashback and says, "I can use my gifts to help people." Nora says, "Barry, I was never concerned about that. I can see just by looking at you that that's always been a natural part of who you are." Fry's voice shows up, says, "At some point you have to try to move forward, to forgive yourself." Then Nora's voice from the Speed Force picks back up. "The best way you can atone for those regrets is just forgive yourself and fight for something that you can protect now. Look to the future, hun, not the past." And Iris says, "I believe in you, remember? I know how hard you fight for the ones you love." Barry opens his eyes again, with tears forming in his eyes. He looks into the sky with images of those clips playing all over the sky. Barry says, "That's right." There's brief flashes of Nora, Henry, Fry, Iris, Cisco, Wally, and Silas. They all show in the various ways. Nora and Henry hugging young Barry, high school Barry consoling Fry after gently taking a bottle from him, Barry, Iris, and Cisco enjoying themselves in the college dorms, and Silas helping Barry up in Star Labs after his first failed attempt to display his super speed. Barry says, "You've all been there for me. You always will be." Barry takes a deep breath and instantly takes off at his max speed. He concentrates as he runs, trying to listen for his mom's voice in order to tune in and enter the Speed Force. Brief flashback to when he tried to enter the Speed Force at Star Labs, explaining trying to hear his mom. Barry says, "Every time I get close to entering the Speed Force, I hear my mom's voice, but I don't remember the words she's telling me." Then cuts back to Nora and the Speed Force. Nora says, "The next time you enter the Speed Force, I wonder whose voice you'll hear." Then moves back to the flashback of Iris kneeling down next to Barry, comforting him, after Barry failed his attempt to enter the Speed Force at Star Labs. It then cuts back to Barry's face when running, and Barry hears Iris's voice. Iris says, "Barry." Barry is startled by this, looks around while running. Barry says, "Iris?" And Iris says, "With this ring, I take you, Barry Allen, to be my wedded husband." Barry chokes up while running as Iris's voice continues playing. And Iris says, "I promise to love you, support you, and always be beside you, no matter how fast I have to run to keep up with you." There's a quick shot of Barry running across the Atlantic Ocean as he tries to adjust his speed to tune into Iris's words. And Iris says, "In sickness and in health, I will push you to be the best person you can be, as I know you will do the same for me, my hero." The environment changes around Barry, realizing he's entered the Speed Force, seeing the bleeding red across the cosmic environment. It then cuts back to the hospital. Joe says, "Who will kill you? The speedster that was here? Was that the Flash?" The main nurse looks up at him, shivering in fear. There's a flashback to the homeless man's hospital room with the vital signs monitor confirming the man's stable condition. The man is shown awake with a bandage wrapped around his head, when all of a sudden Thawne instantly speeds into the hospital room, leaving large traces of red lightning, which is enough to fry the video camera in the room. The man jolts up, startled by the sudden entrance. Thawne walks towards him in the darkened room, practically only his red lightning and red eyes visible, as if he approaches him like he is a sleep paralysis demon. Martin says, "Thawne, I did what you asked. You here to give me what I'm owed?" And Thawne says, "I'm afraid a dead man has no need for money." Martin shudders and says, "That wasn't part of the deal." And Thawne says, "Well, simply, your provocation of the Flash worked a little too well, sparking a reaction even I couldn't have anticipated. A punch sending you here. And unfortunately, the brain damage you suffered as a result was just too much for you. With your death, the Flash officially becomes a murderer." Martin says, "No, please." Thawne places his gloved hand on Martin's head, vibrating it at super speed and shaking it enough that the man dies only in a matter of seconds, his eyes still open in shock. Thawne stands there for a second before hearing the main nurse's scream. She hardly even gets it out, because in an instant the shot doesn't even move when Thawne snatches her and pins her against one of the hospital room walls, placing his pointer finger on his mouth. "Shh. We don't want to disrespect the dead." The nurse is terrified, but her whimpering is muffled by Thawne's hand over her mouth. And Thawne says, "Your staff did everything they could to save this man and reverse his brain damage, but unfortunately it just wasn't enough. The force from the Flash's punch was too much for his feeble body to handle." Thawne takes his other hand from his mouth and vibrates it at super speed, forming his blade and puts it at her neck, which is less than an inch away. And Thawne says,
Am I clear about that?
The nurse frantically nods and tries to back her head away from Thawne's hand, which is basically doing nothing for her. Thawne gets his hand out of super speed and places it on her face, and he says, "Good girl." Cuts back to Joe and Silas says, "My God." Joe says, "We need you to testify this information in court." The main nurse says, "Are you insane? I just told you that he would kill me." And Joe says, "We won't let that happen. We'd protect you. The Flash would protect you." The main nurse says, "He doesn't stand a chance against that monster. How can you be so confident?" And Silas says, "Because the Flash is Central City's hero, and it doesn't matter what threats we face. He fights for something greater, and he won't stop until he's protected every last one of us. That's what gives me belief in him. You need to believe in him too." The main nurse looks conflicted before cutting back to Barry in the Speed Force. He looks along the timeline of images going in a straight line before turning to the right. Barry says, "I just have to go that way, right?" Barry gets in runner's position and takes off, immediately hitting an invisible barrier, and he falls to the ground, trying to catch his breath after having the wind knocked out of him. And Barry says, "Ow! How many freaking times am I gonna go through that?" As Barry gets up, he keeps muttering to himself, "Sorry, I didn't know I had to phase through walls to access the multiverse. That's my fault, clearly." Cuts to Barry back in runner's position, taking off again, but this time phasing through the invisible barrier. All around him as he crosses universes within the Speed Force, the environments for each of the universes pass by him like shooting stars, in every color imaginable, as he phases to access different universes. And Barry says, You wanted to corrupt this, Thon? Barry phases out of the Speed Force in a separate universe, looking like a wasteland. He sees what looks like a battle in a desert area happening with tanks surrounding the village. He concentrates his view on the tanks, and in the village he can see people running around, terrified for their lives. He speeds instantly as the tank fires a blast. Barry snatches the mother and child about to get hit by the tank's blast and gets them to safety. Barry says, "You guys alright?" The mother, frantic, speaks in a language he doesn't understand, but looks to be thanking him. He smiles as he consoles them. The child, shaken up, puts his hand on the Flash emblem on his suit, also speaking the foreign language, but eventually saying, Flash, implying that this universe's Flash is one of the Flashes that Thawne killed. Barry chuckles and says, "Yeah, that's me." Barry hears another tank blast go off and instantly speeds around the village to get the people about to take the blast to safety, as well as moving the rest of the residents behind the village away from the tanks entirely. Barry then speeds to the front of the village, facing the tanks all on his own and spreading out his arms as if shielding the village. Terrorists gather in front of the tanks, all pointing their machine guns at Barry. Barry scowls as he speeds around to all the terrorists, getting ready to start a montage, and he instantly takes all their guns. Some of the guns go off towards Barry in slow motion, but Barry makes a basketball crossover motion in slow motion as the bullet whizzes by him and he points at it as if snatching the bullet's ankles. The terrorists barely react as they now see Barry holding the machine guns and tossing them on the ground. One of the terrorists speaks in a foreign language, terrified, with the subtitles saying, "Oh shit," before taking a super speed punch from Barry. The montage kicks off as Barry travels the Speed Force to different universes without a Flash, and he finds different crises going on, and he is saving people all over the multiverse. He eventually saves someone who looks almost distraught to see him. The man says, "Oh my god, Flash, I thought you died." And Barry says, "Sorry for the confusion. I'm a different guy, I'm afraid." The montage continues as different images appear on the screen as if in the Speed Force of Barry traveling to, at this point, countless universes and performing heroic duties. There's even a part of the montage where he meets up with an alive identical counterpart to him, and they do the Spider-Man meme, because why not? Thawne is shown in the Speed Force, sitting down and meditating with his eyes closed with the bleeding red of the corrupted Speed Force around him. He feels a disturbance and opens his eyes and sees various parts of the red skies of the Speed Force disappearing and returning to normal, which he looks visibly disturbed by. The montage picks back up as he even gets to weird-looking universes, but still saves the various people and creatures there, even saving a family from an attempted home invasion, which could be the species of the alien found in the quantum unfolding chamber. He eventually makes it to a similar-looking universe as the song ends, and even sees a version of Star Labs. He speeds into it, going into the main area revealed to be the CW's Star Labs. He looks confused, and he says, "Where is everybody?" He speeds to one of the neighborhoods, walking through it and seeing how it looks similar to the neighborhood he lived in with Fry, even having a flashback to it, with just more trees. The front door for one of the houses opens up, and a man walks out, unrevealed yet. The man says, "That's a cool Flash costume. Looks a little different, but I like it." And if we get the man himself part of this, Barry will turn around and see the CW Grant Gustin's Barry Allen, and he's approaching him. Barry says, "Thanks, I'm actually the real deal, believe it or not." Grant's Barry says, "Really? What are you doing here then?" Barry says, "I don't think you'd believe me, truth be told. This story's gotten a bit weird." Grant's Barry says, "Let me guess. Something happened to the Speed Force and you're trying to fix it by going to different universes." Barry is exasperated and says, "Yeah, that's it exactly. How'd you know?" Grantsberry says, "Well, once upon a time that was my job." Grantsberry extends his hand for a handshake and says, "I'm Barry Allen." And our Barry says, "Nice to meet you. My name's Barry Allen. Sorry for stopping in like this. I just had a bit of a nostalgia trip." Grantsberry says, "No problem, man. It happens." Grantsberry starts to turn back towards his house when our Barry remembers something. Barry says, "I guess I should tell you. Be careful of a man named Eobard Thawne. He's been going around the multiverse hunting down alternate versions of the Flash." Grantsberry scoffs and smiles and says, "Yeah, I've gone down that rodeo. I think I'll be fine though. I haven't been the Flash for a long time." Our Barry says, "Well, in any case, be safe." Grantsberry says, "You too. Good luck with your Thawne problem. Go get him, Flash." Arbery smiles before speeding away. He travels to a different universe, stopping on a cliffside looking over Central City at night. Barry talks to himself. Says, "Things look pretty good here." There's an unknown presence. I says, "Did you just come out of the Speed Force?" Barry sharply turns around, seeing a dark figure step into the light, revealing the Flash of this universe, only he looks different. His suit is all red with his hair exposed on his suit, and the lightning emblem on his suit and patterns are colored bright blue. Barry says, "Wow, you're looking flashy." The guy laughs and says, "Wow, that was bad. Anyways, am I to guess you're an alternate Flash?" Barry says, "Yes, sir." They get closer when Barry realizes something crucial about this guy. He looks deep into his face, removing his eye guards. Barry says, "Wait a minute. Wally? Wally says, you know me? Barry phases his flash mask off of him, and Wally laughs in glee. Wally says, oh my god, Barry! The two of them hug it out, and Wally says, since when are you the Flash? And Barry says, I should ask, since when are you the Flash? Wally says, feels like an eternity now, but it's been a blast. What brings you here, though? Barry says, I'm trying to fix the Speed Force, finding universes in which variants of the Flash have been killed by my version of Eobard Thawne, so I can help out. Wally says, wow, how many times have you had to explain that? Barry says, dude, you have no idea. Wally says, well, things are going pretty well here, so The exact moment he says that, there is a loud boom that comes from within Central City. Wally stops at this, and Wally says, shit, I just had to say something. And Barry says, no problem, man. I'll help you out with this. Quakemaster is shown in downtown Central City, sending tremors all throughout the city, starting to shake the cores of buildings. Barry and Wally speed into town, and Wally sees Quakemaster. Wally says, Quakemaster? What are you doing here in Central City? Nightwing kick your ass one too many times in Gotham? And this statement is implied that in this universe, the Young Justice / sidekicks are the main heroes in this universe. So yes, even though we have this Wally West, it doesn't have to be this exact character, just he has the same suit. And Quakemaster says, fear me! I will show all of you that a city is only as good as its foundation. I couldn't shake the core of Gotham, so I will therefore reduce Central City to dust! Wally speed blitzes and punches him, sending him flying and knocking him out instantly and making him snore. Wally speeds back to Barry to talk to him, and Wally says, alright, so anyways, he's already done enough damage to these buildings within downtown, and it's probably gotten to some of the suburbs, so there will be a lot of people we need to get out to safety. 5 different buildings begin to topple over and fall in downtown Central City. They get in runner's position, and Barry phases his mask back on. And Barry says, you ready to save some people? Wally smiles, says, hell yeah. Barry and Wally speed away, getting in the interior of the buildings and finding several office workers and civilians trapped in the falling buildings, one by one getting them to safety. Wally has a cocky look on his face as he takes care of things on his end, proving to be a very capable speedster. They meet back outside, and Barry's slightly out of breath while Wally didn't even end up breaking a sweat. Barry says, damn, man, you're good. Wally says, all in the day's work, Unc. Barry says, all right, that was uncalled for. I do feel inclined to ask, though, why were there so many people working in the buildings at night? Wally says, what do you mean? This is working hours. Everyone's 9 to 5, 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. Does your universe not have that? And Barry says, no! That's insane! Are you guys freaking vampires? They hear another boom from within the suburbs, and Barry and Wally nod at each other before speeding there, finding several houses in a neighborhood close to downtown which foundations are about to break. Barry and Wally speed to the houses, saving the people inside and bringing them outside. Barry and Wally prepare to dap each other up when they hear one more scream coming from inside one of the houses, the scream belonging to a man. Barry says, I got this one. Barry speeds back into one of the houses when he sees Thawne speeding directly at him in slow motion with an evil grin on his face. Barry starts to panic, being caught off guard, and Thawne lands a punch on Barry as they pass by each other, making Barry lose his footing and crash into the wall. Thawne picks up Barry and speeds him outside, throwing him into a tree. Wally sees this and looks serious, generating electricity around him. Wally says, Thawne. Wally speeds to Thawne, landing a punch on him and helping Barry up. Barry says, thanks, man. It seems I don't have to introduce him. Thawne gets up, seeing Barry and Wally in front of him, facing him in battle position. And Thawne says, well, I'll be, Barry. Not only did you find a way to get your speed back, you also figured out how to traverse the multiverse. Who else could have been disrupting my corruption of the Speed Force? I'm afraid, though, it won't help much against my own along with the speed of your dead variants. And look at you. Thawne gestures to Wally. Thawne says, I don't typically go for Wally West, but I could make an exception for you. And Wally says, yeah, good luck with that. Wally speeds directly at Thawne, landing several consecutive punches as Thawne fails to react in time. Thawne throws super speed punches at Wally as Wally just seems to stand perfectly still with his arms crossed but perfectly dodging Thawne's attacks. Barry sees this and is amazed by Wally's abilities. Barry says, man, am I washed already? Thawne eventually catches up to Wally's movements and lands a dirty sneak attack with his foot, kicking the side of Wally's leg, making him fall and yelp in pain before throwing a super speed punch at Wally's face. The punch is stopped, however, by Barry as he grabs his arm. Thawne looks up at him, smiling, and he says, there he is. Barry and Thawne enter their battle, speeding all over the neighborhood. Barry can't land a hit on him and narrowly avoids Thawne's punches, trying to block the best he can. Barry eventually gets sent flying. Thawne says, whatever you did to get your speed back, you must have not gotten all of it back. I mean, you can't even hit me. Wally goes back in, brawling with Thawne as Thawne vibrates his arms at Wally and swings at him with his arms as blades. Wally narrowly dodges the last one in slow motion as Barry tackles Thawne at super speed. Wally feels his face as blood trickles down, revealing Thawne had nicked it with his arm blade. Barry sends a flurry of super speed punches down at Thawne, but Thawne moves his face to dodge the punches before sending a super speed punch at Barry's gut, knocking the wind out of Barry and hitting him with a backhand off of him. Wally leaps at Thawne the moment Barry flies off of him, startling Thawne yet again. They skid across the ground as Thawne struggles against Wally. Wally briefly picks up Thawne before throwing him back on the ground, and Barry joins back in. They both stomp and kick Thawne repeatedly, as if literally just like jumping him. Thawne generates red electricity and screams as a red electricity surge knocks both Barry and Wally off of him before Thawne speeds back into the Speed Force. And Wally says, "Yeah, that's right, get wrecked, bozo!" Barry looks into the distance and helps Wally up. And Barry says, "I'm gonna go after him. I appreciate your help, Wally." Wally says, "No problem, dude. You want me to go with you?" And Barry says, "No. I'm gonna keep restoring the Speed Force and get the last of my speed back. You finish things up here and I'm gonna find Thawne and finally end this. Just keep doing what you're doing here. With every heroic deed you do, it'll help restore the Speed Force and weaken Thawne. Keep being a hero and keep being you." Wally says, "Be free to be yourself, right?" Barry is surprised to hear this. And Wally says, "We got good mentors, don't we?" Barry laughs as the two dap each other up. That was a good one. Sparking a large surge of energy, temporarily taking out the power of the city. They look at each other awkwardly as a small surge of white and red electricity surrounds Barry's hand. And Barry says, I'm gonna go now." And Wally says, "Yeah, see you around." Barry speeds back into the Speed Force, looking determined as he speeds through it. And Barry says, "I'm still not fast enough." Barry looks around him and sees that the red around him in the Speed Force is deteriorating, with all the efforts that he and alternate versions of the Flash had been doing. And Barry says, "I'm definitely doing something right, though." In the distance in the Speed Force, Thawne speeds at him at an angle, trying to ambush him. Barry goes up to block again, but Thawne switches his movements last second and goes low to slash at his ankle, making Barry fall due to narrowly dodging the attack. Thawne speeds at him again, grabbing Barry's face and dragging him into another universe and throwing him against a car in bumper-to-bumper traffic on a highway, startling the people and making them evacuate their cars. And Thawne says, "I know what you're trying to do, Barry. You think you can single-handedly save the Speed Force by being a hero in the dead Flash's places in their universes? And look at you. You're out of breath. You saved no energy for me because you thought you could avoid me long enough to get the rest of your speed back. Well, guess what? There's nowhere in the multiverse that I can't find you. Did you forget that you're not just up against my speed, but your own as well?" Thawne speed blitzes back to Barry to throw another punch, but Barry catches the fist, catching Thawne off guard. And Barry says, "Then how am I still keeping up with you?" Barry and Thawne throw a flurry of punches at each other as they speed across the line of cars, with Barry making sure to shield anyone in their way. Thawne throws another punch in which Barry dodges. Then Barry throws a counter punch in which Thawne also dodges, kicking Barry into another car. Barry grunts as he tries to recover. And Thawne says, "I told you, my corruption of the Speed Force has still far outweighed your heroics in the multiverse. You haven't even gained enough speed back to..." Barry immediately lands a punch on Thawne's face. He's not trying to hear all that, and it leaves a bruise. Thawne looks back at Barry in shock, and Barry jumps around in battle stance, having finally landed a hit on Thawne. And Barry says, "I don't know, man, seems to me like it's working." Thawne growls as they resume their battle. They end up going back into the Speed Force, speeding through it as they fight and go in all directions, and they end up in different timelines and universes, quite literally fighting across space and time. There is a point that Thawne speeds back into Barry, but Barry phases, making Thawne go through him, and Thawne crashes into one of the universal invisible barriers. Barry punches his head while it's pinned to the barrier, making a crack show up in the barrier. And Thawne says, "How are you getting faster?" And Barry says, "Did you really think all I did was go to the universes without a Flash?" It shows various quick flashbacks of Barry talking to alternate versions of the Flash without audio, with the other versions of the Flash nodding and understanding and ramping up their heroics in their universes. And Barry says, "Even heroes need help sometimes." And Thawne says, "No, I know you. You never asked for help." Barry says, "Well, sometimes you learn a life lesson or two along the way." Thawne roars as they pick up their fight again, continuing to traverse universes at different time periods through the Speed Force. They eventually end up in a universe speeding along the roadways, and they end up in an underground pit lane. They continue throwing super speed blows at each other as they take turns pinning each other against the walls as the pedestrians there all panic and scramble away. Thawne eventually catches Barry's face and trips him, dragging him by his leg again and taking the underground lane into some kind of racetrack. Thawne races around the track and throws Barry into one of the walls of the track. Barry strains to get up and sees that they're in the F1 Las Vegas circuit in an alternate universe, and the race cars are speeding past him. Thawne walks towards Barry with a manic look in his eyes as race cars speed across the track in between them. And Thawne doesn't even look at the race cars rapidly approaching him and trying to avoid him. Thawne even phases through some of the cars that pass through him. He's aura farming right now. Barry sees one of the cars spinning out from avoiding Thawne, and it starts tumbling across the track. Barry speeds away from Thawne to to save the racer inside of the car. He jumps in the air, phasing through the car and grabbing the racer inside before the car violently crashes into one of the walls. Thawne stops and targets the other cars on the track. Barry sees Thawne moving after getting the racer to safety and speeds after him, making several laps on the huge track a second, running in the opposite directions of the cars as they fight each other while moving. Barry prevents Thawne from getting to the cars, but Thawne can land some hits on Barry as a result of this. Thawne says, "You can't beat me and save everyone." Barry saves another car before Thawne swats Barry away, sending him flying into the central grassy area within the track. He laughs evilly as he stomps down on one of the cars with his own momentum, stopping it abruptly. The racer gets choked by his seatbelt due to the sudden stop in motion and whiplash, and the car briefly goes airborne. Thawne drop kicks it and sends the car flying into the stands where people still are, with the racer still inside. Barry sees this and immediately goes after it. He gets the people in the area to safety, but turns around to see Thawne kicked the car again, making Barry unable to react to the race car crashing into him. Barry is briefly knocked out but wakes up in a daze, seeing Thawne standing over him in the bleachers with the racer he got out of the car, hoisting him up by his neck, injured but still alive. Barry, quietly still in a daze, says, "Thawne, don't." Thawne takes his other hand and promptly stabs the racer through the back while vibrating it at super speed. Barry looks up, wide-eyed, and he screams in rage. Thawne tosses the now dead racer aside and speeds at Barry again, this time doing a backflip and kicking Barry all the way up to the top of the wall of the upper section. Barry limply falls as Thawne runs up the wall and does a supersonic jump, like what Barry did earlier with the tornado, and instantly transports both of them, skidding across the entire track and crashing Barry into one of the track walls again before Thawne starts giving Barry another super speed beatdown. Thawne looks down at Barry's heavily bruised face while he himself is also fairly bruised, because they've been giving each other the work. Thawne says, "I don't think I care much anymore if I end up killing you, even if I haven't corrupted the Speed Force enough." Barry coughs up blood, and Thawne says, "You spent so much time trying to offset my killings with heroics, I'll just have to do the same. It doesn't even matter to me at this point if they're not speedsters. You'll suffer all the same, and to me that's worth more than my life." Barry seethes in rage as he gains more power, as yellow electricity surrounds him. His eyes light up yellow as he effortlessly dodges a super speed punch from Thawne and instantly clutches Thawne's throat as hard as he can, which Thawne is unable to phase out of. Thawne can't breathe as Barry slowly pulls Thawne in close to his face as Barry's wounds on his face heal instantly, and it's as if Barry's looking into Thawne's soul, or at least a shell of what it once was. Barry switches his hand placement and grabs the back of Thawne's neck, pinning his face onto the track and making a crack show up on the pavement. Thawne realizes what's about to happen, and Thawne says, "Oh fuck." Barry takes off, generating yellow lightning all around the huge F1 track as he makes hundreds, if not thousands of laps practically instantly while he pins Thawne's face on the track. He eventually throws Thawne into the air and takes off around the track again. Barry hasn't said a word, but his face shows clear determination, with at this point not even a scratch on him, as his eyes are still glowing yellow. Thawne is still shown flying through the air, unable to gain his footing, as his face is shown with several parts, if not all of it, now missing the top epidermis layer and other parts missing the second dermis layer. In slow motion and almost a freeze frame, Barry jumps at Thawne, screaming as he's about to deliver his most devastating sonic boom punch yet. In slow motion, the punch lands before Thawne can block, and time resumes as the entire environment around them shatters as Barry punches Thawne and forces both of them back into the Speed Force. Barry follows behind him, beating on him as they speed around the Speed Force. Barry gets Thawne airborne again, and Barry slams him into the ground before sending a flurry of super speed punches directly into Thawne's already damaged face. Thawne laughs as he coughs up blood, and Thawne says, "There's that hatred I've been looking for." Barry says, "Shut up!" Barry drags Thawne across the Speed Force again as he speeds through the different universes. He remembers in his head his universe and timeline where Thawne came from, trying to find it. As he searches, Thawne gets in position to break out of Barry's grip and slam his head into one of the invisible barriers, making Barry groan in pain. Barry tries to recover, but Thawne grips his throat, making Barry now unable to breathe. Thawne generates red lightning around him and his eyes glow red as he inhales deeply, practically instantly restoring the skin on his face as he still sees several traces of red bleeding across the Speed Force. And Thawne says, "Do you smell it, Barry? This is the blood of your variants trickling along the fabric of space and time. I can tell, even now. Your efforts in your living, for now, variants have made posts to reverse what I've done here, and it's now granted the rest of your speed back. But you have to realize, I've been here for years, perfecting my craft all to prepare for this moment. As fast as you are, it would take you all ages to return the Speed Force to normal. Not that it matters at this point. I've had fun messing around with you. But you know what? You've been away from home for a while now. I bet everyone misses you. Barry grunts as he tries to break free from Thawne's grasp, and Thawne says, let's pay them a visit. Thawne speeds with Barry back to their universe and timeline, precisely to Barry's time. They both come out of the Speed Force with them being at equal speed, entering their final battle as they speed through Central City. Barry sends Thawne flying with another punch and he lands along a road sign. The crew is shown at Sisto and Barry's apartment, with Sisto getting Barry's dog Gordon out of the apartment with the increasing danger to the city. Sisto meets up with Iris and Wally as they navigate through town. Joe and Silas drive through town with Silas finishing up a phone call. And Silas says, you and Victor be safe, Eleanor. I'll be with you as soon as I can. Silas hangs up and he and Joe see the crew going through town. And Silas says, there they are. Joe pulls over and Silas rolls his window down. And Silas says, get in. It then cuts to Thawne looking up with his maniacal red eyes, seeing people flee in terror. Thawne laughs maniacally. I'll kill everyone. Everyone! Barry punches him to the ground again. Again, he's not trying to hear all that. It then cuts back to the crew in the car. And Sisto says, where are we going? Where can we go? I mean, Thawne's here, right? And Joe says, there's a panic shelter in our basement. We'll stay there until this is over. And Iris says, Dad, Barry needs us. We can't abandon him. And Silas says, Joe's right, Iris. As much as we want to help, we'd only be getting in his way. Barry wouldn't want us to put you at risk either. Gordon whimpers on Sisto's lap, pointing out the speedsters fighting. Sisto and Wally look out the window, seeing the red and yellow flashes of light and lightning light up the atmosphere before the flashes instantly transport across the city in front of their car. Barry and Thawne continue battling as Barry has to balance damaging Thawne and saving the people that Thawne targets. Cops, civilians, animals, it doesn't matter. He's going for everybody. What Thawne does not realize, though, is that with everyone Barry saves from Thawne, more shots are shown of the bleeding red of the Speed Force disappearing. Thawne is basically setting Barry up with heroics and unintentionally weakening himself even more as his corruption of the Speed Force becomes more undone. They traverse around the city, where Thawne notices that it's getting easier and easier for Barry to balance all this out. And Barry is getting more and more efficient as Wally was in that other universe. Barry then eventually punches Thawne in the back of the head, then speeds to the front, clotheslining him in slow motion. Then Barry slams him into the ground with all his strength. Thawne lays on the ground, trying to catch his breath. Barry looks down at Thawne, vibrating one of his arms at super speed, turning it into his own blade, and starts to lunge at Thawne before Thawne quickly maneuvers himself on the ground and uses his own arm blade to slash at the tendons in the back of Barry's right ankle. Barry is not able to completely dodge this, and as a result, Barry falls to the ground and screams in pain as he bleeds from it. Cuts back to the crew. Iris is now teary-eyed. She says, Dad, we abandoned Barry once when he needed us. He can't go through that again. Joe has a recollection and flashback to when the Wests moved away and Barry and Iris said goodbye as children, and how visibly upset Barry looked. Then the flashback moves to Barry visiting him to ask for his blessing to marry Iris. Do you remember that conversation that they had that we got in the middle of when Barry was asking for Joe's blessing? This is the start of it. Joe says, what brings you here, man? Barry chuckles and says, I swear I prepared for this, but man, I don't know what to say now. Joe stops softly but smiles. And Barry says, one of the hardest days I've ever had in my life is when you guys moved away. And that says a lot for him. I've always had feelings for Iris. No, I've always loved Iris. And the possibility that I would never see her again, it wrecked me. So when we reunited in college, it felt like everything I'd been through up until that point was all worth it. It was like we never left each other. And it felt like the most important piece of my life returned back in place. I want to protect her, Joe. Cherish her and never let go. With everything I have. If I could get your permission to marry Iris, there would be no greater blessing. It returns to them driving in the car. And Joe says, that's what Barry told me when he asked for my blessing. And I believe that he can protect you. But seeing as you guys aren't married yet, protecting you right now, that's still my job. Cuts back to Barry being pinned down on the ground when Thawne throws down his vibrating arm blade down at him, which Barry is barely able to catch before it pierces Barry. Barry strains heavily against Thawne, who is also struggling to move his arm down towards Barry's chest. Thawne says, I'll steal your speed again, kill everyone you love, and add you to my museum. Barry, still holding Thawne's arm, begins phasing his whole body. Thawne struggles more as Barry roars at him, and eventually Thawne's body phases too as Barry generates even more electricity. Barry, phasing, forces Thawne to make his arm go right through Barry, and Barry catches Thawne's arm and snaps it, and then Barry throws Thawne off of him. While Thawne is thrown off of him, Barry is able to heal his ankle. Thawne is in one of the walls of a nearby building, and Barry struggles to get up as he recalls a conversation with Fry, as Thawne works on trying to re-snap his arm back in place. And Fry says, how do you get up, Barry? How do you deal with that loss? that grief of losing someone you love. High school Barry stops in his tracks. Before he has the chance to answer Fry, it cuts back to in the present, with present Barry almost fully standing back up as he makes eye contact with Thawne again, who has just re-snapped his arm back in place. And Barry says, "Don't worry, Daryl. I'm dealing with my shit now." Barry speeds directly at Thawne, crashing through several different buildings as he makes Thawne crash through the buildings, and he screams as he does so. Thawne phases out of Barry's grip, and then it's his turn to break Barry through several different buildings. Thawne makes it to downtown and goes back to slow motion where he just so happens to cross by the car Joe is driving with everyone inside, and they're about to collide. Barry looks horrified as he sees them. Barry says, "Oh no." Thawne eventually sees Iris, still in slow motion, and he says, "There she is." Barry hits Thawne in the back of the head again, making both of them go flying to narrowly avoid the incoming car as Joe tries to regain control of the car. Thawne recovers quicker than Barry does and speeds at the car, shoulder tackling it to make it go toppling. Barry sees this and goes after it as Thawne tries to recover from, shoulder tackling the car. Barry phases inside the car, one by one, getting everyone, Iris, Sisto, while still holding Gordon, Wally, and Silas, but Thawne strips Barry from the car before he can save Joe. The car violently crashes into one of the buildings and Iris screams before Barry consoles everyone. They take a moment to grieve over Joe, but Barry has to focus up again. Barry turns around to face Thawne and protect everyone behind him. He shakes in rage that he couldn't save Joe. And Thawne says, "So good to finally meet all of you. It seems there's still plenty of loss to go around." Thawne is interrupted as he sees Gordon on the ground, growling at him and barking. He looks down and scoffs. Barry says, "Stay behind me." Barry promptly points his arms at Thawne, slightly to Barry's left, making Thawne react to the speed to the right of Barry. Barry reads this, though, as that was a fake-out move. He reads it and flash steps to Thawne and delivers his right elbow to Thawne's jaw at super speed. Thawne goes flying and Barry goes after him. Thawne then reads Barry's movements, preparing his vibrating arm blade and stabs Barry in the abdomen, making Barry scream in pain. Everyone screams no as they try to rush over to help Barry, as Thawne laughs maniacally again. It's his fantasy to kill Barry. He removes his arm blade from Barry and Barry collapses to the ground. Barry looks up to see that Thawne captured Iris and has her in a chokehold, with one of his hands being vibrated at super speed. The same situation with the woman from the future that younger Eobard took hostage. Barry says no. Thawne says, "Let's get nostalgic, Flash. Do you think you're fast enough to save Iris before I can kill her? You think you can come up with something creative to save her?" Barry says, "Thawne, please, I'm begging you." And Thawne says, "What are you gonna do, hero?" Barry takes a moment to collect himself, has a realization, and then replaces his look of despair with determination. And Barry says, "Hey Thawne, I don't know if you ever tested this out." All of a sudden, there is a gunshot that goes clear through the back of Thawne's knee joint, making him scream in pain and collapse, therefore losing his grip on Iris. Iris immediately escapes and runs back to Barry, Wally, Sisto, and Silas. And Barry says, "But we're not bulletproof." Thawne, on the ground, unable to move, turns around and sees Joe pointing his gun at Thawne. And Joe says, "Get the fuck away from my daughter!" Joe approaches Thawne and promptly pistol whips him right in the face, mirroring the earlier scene of Thawne doing the same to Barry at the graveyard. Thawne, believe it or not, cannot recover in time for everyone to start stomping and kicking him, much like jumping him. Gordon even comes in and gets a piece of the action and bites his leg and tugs it as Thawne yelps in pain from the absolute BTA that he is receiving. All of a sudden, a scream is heard from Barry as he prepares another supersonic punch, as Thawne desperately tries to do his best to release another red electricity burst that he did to Wally and Barry earlier. It's now a race, and the crew sees him about to strike down, and they all get out of there. And Sisto says, "Oh, we better go." And before Thawne can release his energy blast, Barry lands a final blow onto Thawne's face, offsetting Thawne's energy blast and creating large cracks in the street all around them. Thawne is in a daze as he wakes up, looking up to see Barry. He sees that Barry has phased his hand into Thawne's chest. Thawne jolts suddenly, starting to panic, and it's revealed that Barry has placed his hand on Thawne's heart. And Barry says, "I'm guessing you know where this is going." And Thawne says, "No!" Barry promptly begins stealing Thawne's speed as the red lightning begins seeping out of Thawne's body and gets absorbed by Barry, fusing with his yellow lightning. There is also additional yellow lightning that gets absorbed by Barry as Barry and Thawne stream at each other through this whole process as the impaling wound in Barry's abdomen gets healed as well. Eventually, the process stops as Thawne hyperventilates. And Barry says, "Wow, I'm impressed. Even now, it seems I couldn't steal all of it, but now you're a fraction of the speedster you used to be. Not that you were ever much of one to begin with." Thawne growls at Barry, then roars at him, but is promptly and effortlessly knocked back by Barry, flicking at him, knocking his head back into the ground and creating another impact in the ground. And Barry says, "Yeah, I wouldn't try that now. Not only did I take your speed, but now I have the speed of all my variants you killed as well. I have this feeling that their speed's more compatible with me anyway." Thawne faintly growls at Barry again, and Barry says, "Here's what's gonna happen. As much as I'd like to kill you right here, right now, I'm gonna test my luck with the justice system one more time. You see, there's tons and tons of crimes that you've committed, including the murder of my mother, the murder of Marco Martin, the man you took back with you from the future, vehicular homicide, even stealing alcohol from the store, all the other various murders across the multiverse, and everything else I may not know about. You're going to confess to all of it and clear my dad's name and mine. Do that, and I might let you live." The crew all gather around Thawne as he remained pinned to the ground. Barry says, "This whole time you blamed me for your own mistakes. This is your one chance to own up to it. You're powerless now compared to me, so you don't have any other choice." Thawne seethes, but finally comes to his senses, and he says, "Fine." Gordon goes around to Thawne's face and pees on it. Barry nods at Gordon. He says, "Good boy." Now cuts to them in court with Thawne out of his reverse flash suit and in a prison jumpsuit, listening to the testimony of the main nurse. The main nurse says, "This man threatened my life if I told everyone what really happened in the hospital that night. The Flash did not kill Marco Martin. He did." Thawne smirks. On the defendant's side sits Barry and Henry Allen in suits with their lawyer, and they smile after hearing the nurse's statement. The judge says, "With that comes the final confession of Mr. Eobard Thawne, unless we're still missing something." "Sure hope not, we've been here forever." The judge says, "With these voluntary confessions given by Mr. Thawne, the crimes for the murders of Nora Allen and Marco Martin are as follows. For the murder of Marco Martin, Mr. Barry Allen is found not guilty." Henry looks at Barry and couldn't be prouder of his son. Barry smiles back at Henry, but isn't completely satisfied yet. And the judge says, "And for the murder of Nora Allen, Mr. Henry Allen is found not guilty." Barry immediately hugs Henry, about to tear up. Henry feels the same way, and Henry says, "You did it, kiddo." And Barry says, "I told you I wouldn't give up on you, Dad." It then cuts to the crew all making it to the West House, where they're about to have a celebration. Everyone reunites with each other when eventually Wally goes up for a dap with Barry, and their hands connect. That was my best one yet. And it very briefly sends a shockwave through the house and electrocuting Wally, with red and white lightning briefly surrounding him before vanishing. Everyone freezes and stares at Wally, and Wally stands there in shock. Barry says, "Dude, are you okay?" Wally nods, all still in shock. "Uh-huh." There's an ending sequence that takes place 3 months from that point in time, leading to Barry and Iris's wedding. They say their vows, and Iris ends hers with the same words Barry heard before when entering the Speed Force, with Iris saying, "I will push you to be the best person you can be, as I know you will do the same for me, my hero." And Wally and Sisto are shown crying and hugging each other for emotional support. The scene moves to Barry approaching Fry's grave at the graveyard, this time not looking ashamed but proud. Barry says, "Hey Daryl, I wish you could have seen me out there. I got justice. It took a while, but it finally happened. I miss you, Pops. I'll regret for the rest of my life that I couldn't be there for you when you had your cancer, but I also know you wouldn't want to burden me with that. You taught me that. Not to be a perfect man, but to find the beautiful parts of life despite everything we went through. Become as good of men as we could be. So I won't hold it against myself if that's okay. I know you don't." While Barry is giving this speech, there's a brief montage of Barry and Gordon saying goodbye to Sisto as Barry and Iris move into Fry's old house, due to Barry being on the will. And after that, Barry's speech is momentarily interrupted as it cuts to a new scene. Prison doors within Argus open up. Barry is shown as he walks by several armed guards with a serious look on his face. There's an armed guard at the end of the hall, and he bangs on the prison cell he's standing in front of. The guard says, "He's here to see you." Barry turns to see inside the prison cell and stares at the man inside, Thawne, who is looking down and is strapped to a freezing, power-dampening chamber. Barry said, I just wanted to make something clear to you and give you a friendly reminder of your circumstances. Right now, I could circle the globe in seconds, and you wouldn't even win a F1 race. So you should know how a fight with me would go now. You did confess your crimes in court and cleared my name, though, like I asked you. That is the only reason why you are still alive. Thawne shivers from the cold and breathes out heavily. And Barry says, let me clarify. At this point, the Speed Force has been almost completely restored now from your corruption. And right now, I could save 1,000,000 lives to offset, something happening to you, so your death would mean absolutely nothing to me. I mean, no one wanted me to spare you anyway. However, because you did me that courtesy, I'll give you the conditional courtesy of life. And Thawne says,
What are your demands?
And Barry says, you're gonna be locked up here for the rest of your miserable life. I'd even drag your ass back here from hell to serve the rest of your sentence if I could. While being here, you're not going to make even the slightest peep of trouble for anyone here. If I even hear of a rumor of trouble coming from here, even you won't be able to react to how fast I will come back here and kill you. Thawne remains silent, and Barry says, look at me! Thawne slowly looks up with his face looking noticeably thinner. And Barry says, you know me so well, right? Am I lying? Thawne says, no. Barry backs away from the cell as Thawne's chamber is backed away. Barry walks back from where he came from and stops next to someone facing the opposite direction of him and looks at him. And Barry says, I assume you're fine with that? The person revealed is Rick Flagg Sr., Director of Argus. And Flagg says, legally, I'm required to tell you no. But at the end of the day, I suppose I wouldn't be able to stop you from doing that. It would also be unrealistic to prevent any rumors, whether or not they're true, from leaking into the general public. Barry nods and leaves him behind. Cuts to Barry speeding through the city as the Flash, as his speech from earlier continues. And Barry says, Daryl, you were the one who first told me I should forgive myself for what happened. To be honest, I don't know if I'll ever move on from my mother's death, but at least I finally know I don't have to go through it alone. I couldn't save her, but I can save countless others now. Protect Iris, protect everyone. That's just a part of who I am now. I'm just myself. I've given myself that freedom to look to the future. It then cuts to black and fades into Wally sleeping in his room at night. His hand is shown and a very quick spark of white lightning appears around his hand. His eyes tighten as pressure from within his body builds up and he finally jolts awake. He's out of breath as he looks down at his hand, which is vibrating at super speed. He slowly brings it up as he stares at it, completely bewildered. He says, Barry? The end. There are post-credit scenes though. First, post-credit scene. Before I say it, this scene is very unlikely to happen, as there are elements of already existing DCU stuff happening, so if this ends up not being possible, this will be replaced by Wally discovering his powers. But here we go. This is what I've written down. There was a brief shot of Argus before revealing their secret base where they experimented with the quantum unfolding chamber with Lex Luthor's crew from Peacemaker Season 2. A group of Argus agents is wheeling in a large object draped over by a tarp. They stop and take the tarp off, revealing Thawne with a gag over his mouth, still in his freezing power dampening chamber. At this point, Thawne's hair has grown out. The agents take the gag out and Thawne roars at them before seeing Rick Flagg Sr. facing him. Thawne says, what is this? And Flagg says, this is what Argus will actually be doing with you. I read your file and my god, you are quite the screw up. Flagg gestures Thawne to a quantum unfolding door, and Thawne restrains in his chamber before getting a burst of freezing energy into his system, making Thawne quake in pain. And Flagg says, you're going to be part of an ongoing experiment we at Argus have developed. You see, we've started dealing with criminal metahumans differently now than how we used to. You could say we've unlocked the secrets of multiversal travel. Should be familiar. Thawne scoffs at this and says, that's absurd. My condition was to stay put in Argus. I'm not going anywhere. And Flagg says, well, good thing you don't have a choice here. What the Flash doesn't know won't hurt him. Flagg opens the door, revealing the bright green scenery of the outdoors of Salvation. Thawne looks into the doorway, looking horrified, and Flagg says, welcome to Salvation. Thawne is released from his power dampening chamber and shoved inside the doorway, which is promptly closed and locked. Thawne growls, trying to phase and warm his body up. He moves at relative super speed and bangs into the door. And Thawne says, no, you can't leave me here. Thawne tries to compose himself and slowly backs away from the door when he hears a voice. And the mysterious voice says, who the fuck are you? Thawne scowls and slowly turns around towards the source of the voice, revealing Christopher Smith, Peacemaker, pointing a gun at him. Thawne maintains his gaze and tilts his head. That's the first post-credit scene. Again, very unlikely to happen, but I'll talk more about it at the end. And now we get to the second post-credit scene, in which Iris says, "Shut up, Wally." The screen is still black at this point. And Wally says, "This other time, she was getting ready for some date in high school or whatever. I'm pretty sure it was homecoming. And the dude came over all elegant and stuff." The scene opens back up to Big Belly Birder with Iris, Sisto, and Wally in the shelter while Barry's dealing with a tornado as the Flash. Iris gives Wally a death stare as she tries to hide her embarrassment. And Wally says, "And Iris was still getting ready because it always takes her ages. She forgot what time homecoming started, so we all just stood around the living room for like 10 minutes while waiting for her to come down." And Iris says, "Wally, shut up." Sisto is amused. And he says, "And none of you went up to check on her?" And Wally says, "Nah, definitely not me. I'm just a humble grade schooler at this point, minding my business. And Dreamboat's too polite and awkward to even suggest that." And Iris says, "Wally, I'm gonna kill you." Wally laughs now. He says, "But then we finally hear, oh shit," from way up in a room and just thuds of sprinting footsteps from upstairs. I think they were trying to do some majestic shit with her slowly walking down the stairs and getting Bro to admire her, but Wally's cracking up now. And he now says, "She gets to the stairs and loses her footing, so out of the corner we just see Iris tumbling down the spiral stairs in her prom dress like a freaking Donkey Kong barrel. And by the time she gets to the bottom, she tore her dress in like 3 places, I'm pretty sure." Iris looks over at Sisto, who was cracking up, but immediately locks in when seeing her death stare. And Iris says, "Hilarious. You done now?" And Wally says, "Hell no. You cried so much while Dad chewed you out for swearing in front of me, even though I don't care. And I don't even think you went to homecoming that night, so Dreamboat ended up just going with his friends." And Iris says, "And what are you proving with this, Wally?" And Wally says, "Oh yeah, I guess I was making a point. Thanks for reminding me. Anyways, there's something going on with you two and Barry, and I don't like it." And Iris says, "We're all good friends. What about it?" And Wally says, "No. I'm gonna solve this puzzle. You guys, especially Iris, underreacting to a freak tornado and Barry letting his dog out all of a sudden? I don't buy it." While he looks at the TV, showing live coverage of a yellow streak challenging the tornado. He has a realization and gets a wide smile on his face. He slowly faces Iris and Sisto, who are cringing while looking at him. Wally whispers and says, "Is Barry the Flash?" They don't answer, and Wally loudly talks, loud enough for everyone to hear. And Wally says, "Hey, Flash!" Iris whispers and yells, says, "Wally!" And Wally says, "Make sure you get out of this alive, okay? You got someone waiting for you at home." Iris, who looks like she's about to hyperventilate, is overwhelmed by the sheer embarrassment from Wally and tries to hide herself. She says, "Oh my God, this isn't happening." And with that, officially ends this long story. For everyone that has tuned in all the way up until this point, thank you so much for riding along with the story, whether or not you enjoyed it. Obviously, this story is a little different from the past couple live-action adaptations of The Flash we've gotten so far, whether that was Grant Gustin's Flash or Ezra Miller's Flash. I know Ezra, they did more of a Flashpoint story. And for this, I wanted to potentially hint to a Flashpoint story with Barry, when he was coming home from the future. He was kind of looking home, doing his mental war in his head. He was kind of debating if he should go back in time and just do that, but he just decided against it at the time. And maybe in this universe, we don't even have to have a Flashpoint story at all, with Barry seemingly finally getting over his what happened to his mom. You guys might be asking about Thawne too, which is a very, very interesting subject. Very evil guy. I also didn't want to just outright kill Thawne right away in case he could potentially come back for future projects. I had him put in Salvation, so there could be elements of, either Peacemaker can kill Thawne in Salvation, or Thawne can find a way to get his speed back and then he returns to the main timeline through Salvation. Just have options available, or if they decide to do maybe go down the route of doing another Suicide Squad or Creature Commandos type project with Hell to Pay, which Reverse Flash is part of, where he tries to get basically get into heaven free card. Good movie. And then they kill Reverse Flash there, or whatever, really. And actually, what happened to him is probably a worse fate than just dying, because his life is literally in the hands of his greatest enemy in Frank Grillo. So just basically keeping him alive as a useless attraction, I figured it'd be better than just killing him immediately. You guys might notice that I did not have Harrison Wells in this story at all. He was basically who Silas was, but also masked as Eobard Thawne. I wanted to instead have Silas in this story anyway, because you guys might notice that I mentioned Victor Stone. For those of you who do not know who Victor Stone is, his backstory is that he is a very solid, maybe even elite high school football player. But the reason why he's not really mentioned more is that he has kind of a rough relationship with his dad, caring more about metahumans, maybe about Barry, than his athletics, because of how much time Silas has spent working with, all the things that Star Labs researches. And then Victor Stone, he eventually has a freak accident which makes him become Cyborg. So by the time we maybe eventually get to a solo Cyborg movie, we can have a story where Victor and Silas have their differences and just the not great relationship that they have, and maybe they can bond through that. So I wanted to just at least throw an Easter egg out there, tease him a little bit, but not actually reveal him, but give the universe the chance to introduce him. And besides, I know in the animated movies, Barry and Silas are friends, so I wanted to develop that friendship that they have before potentially leading to something else. And maybe if they take a page out of Zack Snyder's Justice League, have Silas, sacrifice himself, there can be more of an emotional moment there, since, we've gotten to see and be introduced to Silas. And you guys also might be wondering, how did Wally get his powers? Do you remember when Barry and Wally the Flash dapped each other up, making the power go out momentarily? Part of what happened there is that in that moment, with Barry and Wally both being the Flash, Wally subconsciously, without realizing, gave the Flash a tiny fraction of his power. He didn't lose his power, just transferred it to Barry for a little bit. And then when Barry dapped up Wally in his own universe, that power that Flash Wally gave to Barry then transferred to Wally. So if this were to happen, there could be the chance for Wally to develop his own speed, build it up a bit, or Wally is already OP. Feel free to have more discussions. Anyways, I might send this script to James Gunn and his team. Feel free to discuss in the comments what you liked, what you didn't like. I know the story, obviously, it was only written by me, so there's going to be, mistakes and stuff like that. I don't know, pacing probably could have been a bit better, too. This movie definitely won't be, at least 3 hours like this video is. So some things we would go over faster. But still, I really appreciate you tuning in. And I'm really proud of how this turned out. So thank you again for tuning in. That's all I got for you guys today. And with that, I'm out.